Welcome to Savage Harry. Today's adventure. What if Harry Potter reclaimed his Slytherin heritage and killed Voldemort for the throne of magic? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Gringotts' inheritance test. The common room had been emptied around him as though by a slow tide. The fire still cracked in the grate. Someone had left a half-finished essay on the table by the window, a quill lying across it where the ink had been knocked sideways. The portrait hole was shut. A girl had been crying when he came up. She was not crying now because she had gone to bed, and the boys who had been shouting had also gone to bed, and the ones who had refused to look at him had gone to bed last of all. Harry sat in the chair nearest the hearth with his hands folded on the armrests and watched the embers move. He saw his name again, not in the air, not as Bagman had read it, but as it had been written, in green ink on a folded scrap of parchment, in a hand that was not his. He had not been close enough to read the parchment when Bagman held it. He did not need to have been close. The handwriting did not matter. What mattered was that the parchment had existed before it left the cup and someone had made it. He set this down in himself as a fact. The Goblet of Fire was a binding artifact. It did not author names. It received them, weighed them, and bound the chosen to the contest by the oldest law in the Confederation, the law that a name written in fire was a name written in blood. He had not written his name. Therefore someone had written it for him. Therefore that person had done so with intent. He sat with the intent. There were three classes of motive that fit. 1. A private enemy who wanted him in a contest engineered to kill him, which was elegant because the killing would look like accident and accident was the cheapest murder. 2. A public ally pretending to be private, who wanted him visible in a way that made him controllable, because a tournament champion was a piece on a board the ministry could shape. 3. A third party who wanted him in motion so that whatever moved him next would carry him into a structure already prepared. He did not yet know which it was. He did not need to know yet. He needed to know only that the choice was not his, and that the people who had not made it his were people who had stood near him for 14 years and called the standing protection. Dumbledore had said nothing. Dumbledore had stood under the rafters with his half-moon glasses and his hands folded across his robes, and he had said nothing that mattered. The headmaster had asked calmly in a voice that suggested the asking was a formality, whether Harry had put his name in the cup. He had answered. The headmaster had moved on. There had been no fury directed at the cup, no opening of an inquiry, no setting aside of the contest until the violation could be examined. The contest had been allowed to continue. He had been allowed to continue inside it. That was the part that decided things. It was not that Dumbledore had failed to protect him. Failure he could have priced. Failure was ordinary. What had happened was not failure. Dumbledore had a position, and the position required certain outcomes, and one of the outcomes was that Harry Potter would remain inside the contest until the contest was over. The cup had been aimed. He was being moved. He would not be moved further without knowing by whom and toward what. The decision arrived without argument. He noticed it arriving the way one notices a door that has been opened in a wall one had assumed to be solid. He had walked past the wall 1,000 times. He had walked past the door tonight. He walked through it. The first thing the decision did was rearrange the room. The fire was now warmth he was using rather than warmth he was receiving. The chair was a place to sit while he thought, rather than a place that had been provided for him by people who had decided he should sit in it. The common room belonged to a house he had been sorted into by a hat that had wanted to sort him elsewhere and had been argued out of it by an 11-year-old who had not understood what he was arguing against. The hat had said Slytherin. He had said not Slytherin. The hat had obliged. He set that against the parchment in green ink and considered the geometry. The geometry was unkind. He stood up. He did not pace. Pacing was for those who needed motion to think. He had finished thinking and required motion only to act. He went up the spiral staircase to the fourth-year dormitory. Ron's curtains were drawn. The drawing was deliberate. The silence behind them was the silence of a person who was awake and pretending. Harry registered this and walked past. He opened his trunk. He took from it the cloak his father had left him, folded small, and tucked it inside his robes. He took also a small leather wallet with 3 galleons and 7 sickles. He took a self-inking quill. He took a sheet of unmarked parchment, the kind sold by scrivenshafts without watermark. He closed the trunk. He went back down to the common room. He sat at the table by the window, drew the parchment to him, and began to write. He wrote in plain script, not in the cursive that had been beaten into his right hand by Aunt Petunia's standards of penmanship. He wrote in the voice of a man making a request that was also an instruction. He did not sign with his name. He sealed the letter without an address and put it in his pocket and put on the cloak and went out through the portrait hole, and the fat lady did not see him, because she was asleep, and the corridor outside was empty, because the corridor outside was always empty after midnight in the season of curfews. He walked toward the library. He kept track of the corridors he chose. Choosing was the new shape of every action. He noted the floor, the staircase that did not move on Thursdays, the suit of armor that had been polished that week and would therefore reflect movement. He noted also that he was calm. He had wondered, walking down the spiral stairs, whether the calm would hold. It was holding. It would hold as long as he kept asking it to hold, and as long as he did not break it by reaching toward anything warm. He did not reach. The fire in the grate had been a tool, and he had finished using it, and now there was no fire, and there did not need to be. The library was dark in the way the library was always dark after hours, which was not very, because the librarian kept a low lamp burning at her desk against the chance of intruders and against, perhaps, her own dislike of true darkness. He took a corridor that bypassed the desk. He took also the corridor that ran past the restricted section, because what he wanted was not restricted but lived close enough to the restriction that the dust on it was thicker. He found Burke's Peerage of Magical Britain on the third shelf from the top, behind a book on heraldic charms that no one had moved in 20 years. He took it down and sat on the floor with it and turned to the index. The cloak was over his shoulders. The lamp at the librarian's desk was a yellow coin at the far end of the room. He could read by the small wand light he held in his cupped palm, which he had learned to make small enough that it did not bleed beyond his fingers. Burke's was arranged by precedence. The most ancient and most noble houses came first, then the most noble, then the ancient, then the noble, then the merely recognized. Potter sat in the ancient register, listed with the date 1138 and a marginal note he had never noticed before. See also Peveril, extinct in the male line 1497. He turned to Peveril. The Peveril entry was longer than the Potter entry. It opened with the three brothers, named without comment, and then it gave a genealogy that ran in a clean column down the page, and then near the bottom broke into a footnote in smaller print, marked with a single rune he did not recognize. The footnote read, Issue of Ignatus Peveril by marriage 1297, see Custodianship Statutes, Goblin 1612, sealed schedule. He read it twice. He set Burke's aside and went to the next shelf. The Goblin Custodianship Statutes of 1612 was a thin, brown book with brass corners. He had walked past it many times. It had the spine of a thing no one borrowed. He took it down. He sat with it on the floor. He opened it. The statutes were goblin work, which meant they were exact. The first chapter set out the powers of the bank. The second chapter set out the limits of those powers. The third chapter set out the doctrine of custodianship, by which the bank held inheritance records on behalf of the magical dead, and the duty of disclosure that ran from the bank to the living heir. He read the third chapter slowly. The doctrine was older than the Wiesengamot. It was older than the statute of secrecy. It predated the Confederation. It said in language that had been translated out of gobbledygook by a translator who had clearly been a goblin himself and had not softened the edges, that the bank's duty to the heir could be suspended by a wizard's blood ward only insofar as the ward bound the wizard who said it. The bank itself was not bound. The bank's duty ran to the heir regardless of any external charm. A ward could prevent a headmaster from speaking. It could prevent a guardian from writing. It could not prevent the bank from receiving a request directly from the heir in person and acting on it. He closed the book. He sat with his hand on the brass corner of the cover and ran through what he had learned. Dumbledore had set a blood ward at his door at the age of 1. He had felt the shape of it for years without knowing what it was. The silence around certain questions, the way certain adults had looked at him as though they wanted to say something and then had not said it. The ward bound the headmaster. The ward bound the people the headmaster had bound to himself by oath. The ward did not bind the bank because the bank had never been the headmaster's to bind. The loophole was not a loophole. It had been there since 1612. It had been there since before 1612. In the older statutes, the 1612 book footnoted. The thing Dumbledore had relied on was not the law. It was that Harry had not known to ask. He had now asked. He returned both books to their shelves and aligned their spines with the surrounding volumes so that no one looking for them would notice that they had been moved. He left the library. He took a different corridor back. He went up 2 staircases and along a passage that smelled of old varnish and turned into an unused classroom whose window looked out toward Hogsmeade and the dark forbidden forest beyond. The classroom had not been used in years. The desks were stacked against one wall under sheets that had once been white. The blackboard had a single equation chalked on it, half erased, in a hand that might have been Professor Vector's from a decade ago. He did not look at the equation. He went to the window. He stood with his hand on the cold sill and waited until his breathing was as quiet as the room. He drew the sealed letter from his pocket. He said the name into the empty air, not loudly, not softly, exactly. He said it once. Dobby arrived with the snap of a dry branch breaking. The sound carried in the empty room and did not echo, because the sheets on the desks absorbed it. Dobby was wearing a tea cozy and 4 mismatched socks and an expression of joy that was so immediate Harry had to wait for it to pass before he spoke. "Dobby, I need you to deliver this." Dobby took the letter in both hands and held it like a relic. Harry Potter is wanting Dobby to deliver a letter. To the manager of the inheritance desk at Gringotts Bank, by hand, tonight before dawn. To Gringotts, sir. To the inheritance desk, the manager, not the head teller, not the floor steward. The manager of the inheritance desk, by name if they will give you the name. The letter requests an after-hours audience. Dobby blinked once. He turned the letter in his hands. He looked at the seal which Harry had made with a drop of wax in the back of his ring. He looked at Harry, some part of Dobby that was not the tea cozy and the socks, and the joy understood what kind of letter this was. "Dobby will deliver it, Harry Potter. You will wait for an answer. If they will give you one, if they will not, you will return without one and tell me they would not give you one." "Yes, sir." "And Dobby, sir, you will not speak of this to anyone, not to the other elves. Not to any portrait, not to any owl, not to Professor Dumbledore." Dobby's eyes widened. He looked at Harry for a long moment. He nodded. "Dobby is not telling," Dobby said. "Dobby is Harry Potter's elf in this. Dobby is not the headmaster's." Harry registered the offered loyalty. He did not reach for it. "Good," he said. "Go." Dobby vanished. The snap of his apparition broke the dust off one of the sheets, which fell to the floor in a soft heap. Harry stood at the window for a long minute after the snap had stopped echoing. The Hogsmeade lights were small and yellow far below. The forest was a dark mass with no edges. He set his hand against the glass and felt the cold come into the palm. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel afraid. He felt a thing that had no name in the common tongue, which was perhaps best translated as the satisfaction of having taken the first move on a board where someone else had set the pieces. He waited. Dobby returned in just under 40 minutes. The snap was softer this time. He was holding a different letter of heavier paper, sealed with red wax and pressed with a stamp that Harry did not recognize but which he could see, by the lamp of his cupped wand, was a set of scales held in a clawed hand. He took the letter. He broke the seal. He read. The reply was 4 lines. The hand was small and exact and did not waste ink. "Master Potter, the inheritance desk acknowledges your request. The manager will receive you at the 3rd hour after midnight by the service door beneath the western arch of Diagon Alley. Bring your blood and your privacy. Ragnok, son of Bargnok, master of the inheritance desk." He read it twice. He folded it into the inside pocket of his robes. He looked at Dobby. "Will you take me to the service door when it is time?" "Dobby will take you, sir. At the 3rd hour after midnight, inside the western arch of Diagon Alley. Bring me cloaked. Bring me back the same way before dawn." "Yes, Harry Potter." He looked at the clock. The unused classroom did not have, and instead at the position of the moon, which was just past the highest of the towers and beginning to slide down. He had perhaps an hour. He sat down on one of the sheeted desks and pulled the cloak around him and waited. He did not think about the contest. He did not think about Ron's drawn curtains. He did not think about Dumbledore's silence under the rafters, or about the way Bagman had read his name with the air of a man enjoying a small play. He thought about the 4 lines on the heavy paper and about the phrase, "Bring your blood and your privacy." The goblins had answered him within 40 minutes in the middle of the night, with a sentence that assumed he understood what it meant. They had taken him seriously. He set that down beside the parchment in green ink and let the 2 facts sit next to each other. When the hour came he stood. He nodded to Dobby. The snap this time took both of them. The service door was set into the wall of an alley off Diagon Alley, behind a tobacconist's that had closed in 1956. The alley smelled of old stone and a thin smoke that was not coming from any visible fire. The door itself was bronze, low, banded with iron, and had no visible keyhole. A small set of brass scales was let into the center of the door at the height of a goblin's eye. Dobby pressed his palm to a flagstone and the scales tipped and the door opened inward without sound. Harry stepped inside under the cloak. A goblin stood in the passage beyond. He was old and broad-shouldered and his green coat was buttoned at the throat. He did not look at Harry. He looked with great deliberation at the air where Harry was, and then he bowed an inch. Harry took off the cloak. "This way," the goblin said. They went down. The passage was stone, sloping, lit by lamps set into the wall in iron brackets. The brackets were goblin work, the lamps were burning something that was not oil and was not whale fat, and gave a steady white light that did not flicker. They went past doors that had no handles and corridors that branched and were not labeled. The old goblin walked at a pace that was not slow but was not hurried, and he did not speak again until they came to the foot of a stair so wide that 10 goblins could have walked abreast along it, and so deep that Harry could not see the bottom of it for the curve. The goblin stair, the old goblin said. They went down it. The stair was carved into black stone. It turned twice. The lamps along its walls were spaced more widely than the lamps in the passage above, so that the light pooled and then dimmed and then pooled again, and Harry's shadow stretched and shortened as he walked. The stair did not echo. The stone absorbed sound the way the old sheets had absorbed Dobby's snap. At the bottom of the stair the air was cooler. They came out into a hall that was not the vault hall he had walked through with Hagrid at the age of 11. It was older. The pillars were black marble, taller than the surface hall's pillars, and the floor was inlaid with a pattern of brass that ran in long curves between the bases. At the far end of the hall a set of brass scales taller than a man stood on a plinth of green stone. They were lit by a lamp set into the ceiling above them. The brass glowed faintly, as if the metal itself were warm. A goblin stood at the foot of the scales. He was not the old goblin. The old goblin had stopped at the threshold of the hall and stayed there, with his hands folded behind his back. The goblin at the scales was younger by the goblin reckoning of years, which Harry did not know how to read but could see in the set of the shoulders and the steadiness of the hand. He wore a coat of dark blue trimmed in silver. He had a chain of office across his chest, 4 links wide in red gold. From the line of his chin to the curve of his ear ran a scar, white against the dark skin, old enough that the edges had softened but deep enough that the line of the jaw beneath it had been changed. "Master Potter," the goblin said, "I am Ragnok, son of Bargnok, master of the inheritance desk. You requested an audience. You have it." Harry inclined his head. He did not bow because he had read in Burke's that one did not bow to a goblin of the inheritance desk unless one was offering fealty, and he was not. He inclined. "Master Ragnok, thank you for receiving me at this hour. The hour is the bank's choice as well as yours. We do not transact inheritance matters where surface custom may interfere. You wrote a sensible letter. We are inclined to do business with those who write sensible letters." The goblin's voice was deep and dry. He did not smile. He had the kind of face that perhaps did not. "You wish a test of inheritance." "I do. You understand what you ask. I have read the statutes of 1612, 3rd chapter. I understand that the bank's duty to the heir is not bound by a wizard's blood ward set without the bank's consent. I understand that the test, once performed, cannot be unperformed. I understand that the writ produced is legal under Goblin law and under the Confederation Compact and is admissible before the Wisengamot regardless of objection from any party not present at the test. Ragnok's expression did not change. The scar caught the lamplight. "You have read the statutes carefully," he said. "Few do. Fewer of your age come to the bowl." He turned. Harry followed. The bowl stood on a low pedestal between the scales and the wall. It was silver. It was not large. It would have fit in 2 cupped hands. Its rim was cut with runes. The runes had been cut deep and then filled with something black, perhaps iron, so that they stood out clean against the silver. There were 32 of them, and Harry knew none of them, and he understood that this was a piece of older magic than the magic taught at his school. Beside the bowl on the pedestal lay a knife. The knife was not large either. Its handle was bone. Its blade was short and bright and had no fuller. It looked surgical. 7 drops, Ragnok said, into the bowl from the index finger of the wand hand. You will speak the words I will give you and only those. Do not improvise. The bowl is exact. It will give back exactly what is given. What words? Ragnok told him. The words were 5. They were in a tongue that was older than English and older than Latin and was perhaps not human at all. Harry repeated them once under his breath. Ragnok corrected one vowel. Harry repeated them again. Ragnok nodded. "Now," he said. Harry took the knife. He pricked the pad of his index finger. The blade was sharp enough that for an instant he did not feel it. The sensation arrived a moment later as a clean line. He held the finger over the bowl. The first drop fell. It struck the silver and did not roll. It stayed where it fell, like a drop of mercury. The second drop fell. The third. He counted aloud because he had been told to count aloud, and Ragnok stood with his hands folded and did not interrupt the counting. The 7th drop fell. The blood in the bowl began to climb. It rose first as a thin column, no thicker than a quill, dark red against the white light. It twisted as it rose. At waist height it began to thin, and at chest height it had become vapor, and at the height of Ragnok's eye it had become a fine red mist that spread sideways into the air and held its shape there like a small cloud. A parchment unrolled itself out of the air beside the bowl. Harry had not seen where it came from. It hung in the air at the height of his sternum and held itself flat, and the mist drifted down to it and settled into it, and the parchment darkened where the mist touched it. Words wrote themselves across the parchment. They wrote themselves not in ink but in a darker shade of the parchment's own color, as though the document were burning the names into itself from within. The hand was clean and old and slightly slanted. Harry stepped closer to read. Potter, confirmed, senior line. Issue of Charles Potter and Doria Black through James Potter, born 1960, deceased 1981, heir Harry James Potter, born 1980. He read the name of his grandparents and recognized the first and not the second. He set this aside. Black, heir presumptive, subject to confirmation. The line was named down a column: Arcturus, Pollux, Cygnus, Orion, Sirius. At Sirius the line broke into a marginal note: incumbent, status disputed under Wisengamot warrant. Heir presumptive, Harry James Potter, by adoption of magical guardianship under oath sworn 1981, pending confirmation by the head of house. He noted the line. He moved his eyes on. He did not let the name of his godfather catch in him. It was a thread, and threads could be pulled later, and tonight was not for pulling. PVRELL, confirmed, senior line. Issue of Ignatus Peveril, third of the three brothers, through the female line of 3 centuries, surfaced in the Potter house at the generation of Linfred of Stinchcombe, named the Potterer, thence by male line to the present claimant. Slytherin, confirmed, senior line by surviving issue. He read the last word twice. He looked at Ragnok. Ragnok was watching him. The watching was not unkind. It was the watching of a goblin who had administered the test many times and who knew exactly what was about to be said. He gave Harry the space of 2 breaths to speak. Harry did not speak. Ragnok inclined his head an inch in something that was not approval but was perhaps the goblin version of the same. You will wish to know how, Ragnok said. Yes. Then attend, Master Potter, for the telling is short in the count of years and long in the count of houses, and I will not give it to you twice. His voice changed. It did not become louder, nor did it become softer. It became older. The cadence lengthened. The vowels took on a weight they had not had before. Harry understood, listening, that he was hearing the goblin court tongue translated through the goblin's mouth into English without losing the shape of the goblin tongue beneath, and that the form mattered as much as the content, and that he was being given a testimony in the manner the goblins reserved for the binding of historical fact. In the year of the Surface Kingdom 1297, in the second moon of winter, in the hall of the bank that then stood beneath the hill of Cairnholt and is now beneath the hill where our hall stands tonight, there came before the custodian a man cloaked in grey, who gave his name as Ignatus, third son of the house of Peveril, brother to Antioch the Elder and Cadmus the Middle, both then dead by the sword and by the rope severally, as is recorded in the custodian's book. He came not alone. With him came a woman of 27 years, dark of hair, dark of eye, narrow of hand, who gave her name as Cassandra, daughter of Tobias, son of Corvinus, son of Salazar, called the founder of the 4th house, of the line that men have since named Slytherin. Ragnok did not pause. The cadence continued. She was the 3rd granddaughter of the founder, and at the time of which I speak she was the last carrier of the Slytherin name in the female line, for her elder sisters had died, the one in childbed of a daughter who did not breathe, the other of a fever of the lungs in the snows of the year before. There remained, in those days, a Slytherin line in the male, descended of an elder bastard of the founder, begotten upon a woman of the village of Little Hangleton in the years before the founder took to his wife the lady of Cornish blood, whose name the council afterwards struck from the rolls. That elder bastard line carried the blood without the name, and the name without the inheritance, for it was not solemnized under any law that the bank recognized. The female line carried both, by goblin custom and by the wording of the founder's own testament, the original of which lies in our keeping beneath 13 seals to this present hour. Harry stood very still. In the year 1295, 2 winters before the marriage I describe, the Council of Wizards then sitting at Caerleon passed the ordinance which men have since named the Slytherin Interdict. By this ordinance no person of the founder's blood in any line was to be permitted lawful marriage into any house of the realm, on the stated ground that the blood of Salazar Slytherin had been judged by the council to be a danger to the conquered of the founders. The ordinance was a thing of fear, not of law. It had no warrant in the older statutes, but it was enforced, and it was enforced with fire. Houses that took in Slytherin women in those years did not keep them long. The council was thorough. Cassandra Slytherin was the last of her name in the female, and she was, by the council's reckoning, the last to be unmade. She was sought. Ragnok's hands had not moved. The scar caught the light again as he spoke. She came to Ignatus Peveril, third of his name, in the autumn of 1296, by what road we do not know, for the custodian's book does not record her road. We know only that she came to him. He received her. He sheltered her through the winter of that year. In the spring he brought her to our hall. He spoke before the custodian, and she spoke beside him, and they made before our bank a marriage that the council had forbidden. They made it under our law and under our seal, and they made it in secret, and they made it under a clause of the older statute by which the bank may keep the marriage of any heir of inheritance in confidence, against the day when confidence is no longer required by the safety of the issue. He paused, only here, only for a breath. It is the law of our house that a marriage solemnized in our hall is solemnized forever, and is not undone by the ordinances of any surface council. It is also the law of our house that the issue of such a marriage shall be entered in the custodian's book in the name of the elder house. The elder house, by goblin reckoning, is the house that has held its name the longer in unbroken male succession from the founder of the name. Peveril in 1297 was elder by a margin of 3 generations to Slytherin. Therefore the issue of Ignatus and Cassandra were entered in the custodian's book under the name Peveril. The Slytherin name passed out of the female line and into the keeping of the bank, which has held it for 729 years to this present night. Ragnok looked at him directly. The blood ran beneath the name. It has run beneath the name in every generation of your house since. The Peveril name itself fell out of common use in the year 1497 by the failure of a male issue, and the inheritance passed to the House of Potter by the marriage of the surviving Peveril daughter into Linfred of Stinchcombe. The Potters did not know what they carried. The first Potter to carry the Slytherin blood in his veins was Hardwin Potter, who lived and died ignorant of it. So did his son, so did his grandson. The knowledge was lost in the surface world for 3 generations. It was not lost in our books. It has never been lost in our books. We are the bank. We do not lose what is given into our keeping. He did not raise his voice. There is one other matter you will wish to hear named. The elder bastard line of Salazar, of which I have spoken, persisted in the surface world under the name of Gaunt. The Gaunts are a line of half-bloods by goblin reckoning, half-bloods being defined in our usage as those who hold the blood without the name in lawful descent. The last surviving Gaunt of the male line was named Marvolo. Marvolo's daughter Merope conceived a son in the surface year 1926. That son styles himself in the world above by name we do not speak in our halls until the matter of his claim is decided. He has claimed the Slytherin seat. His claim is junior. His blood is the elder bastard's blood, which is to say, blood without the elder name, which is to say, a half-blood claim in goblin law. Your claim is from a marriage solemnized in our hall. Your claim is from the female line of the founder, surfaced through the male line of the elder house. Your claim is senior. There is no third claimant. He stopped. The mist had cleared from the parchment. The parchment hung still in the air at the height of Harry's sternum, and the names had set themselves into the page, and the page was cooling. The runes around the bowl had stopped glowing. The lamp above the great scales burned steadily and unchanged. Harry stood with his hand at his side and did not move for the count of 10 breaths. He counted them. He let them go. "Master Ragnok," he said, "thank you for the testimony." "It is given," Ragnok said. The cadence had dropped. The voice was again the dry, deep voice with which he had greeted Harry. "It will be entered into the custodian's book against your name within the hour. You may have copies. I would like copies. You may have 3 documents." Ragnok lifted a hand. A goblin Harry had not seen, who had been standing in shadow near a side door, stepped forward and laid on the pedestal beside the bowl 3 folded sheets, each sealed in dragonhide casings bound with thin red cord. The inheritance writ, the Slytherin lineage chart drawn in the goblin hand. A writ of placeholder issued by this bank for the signet of the House of Slytherin, the said signet being last attested in the possession of the Gaunt line and currently lost to record. The placeholder writ entitles you to the lawful exercise of the seat's privileges pending physical recovery of the signet itself. We do not, as a rule, issue placeholders. We are issuing this one because the senior claim is established and the junior claimant is in a condition we will not name in this hall. Harry took the 3 casings. He weighed them in his hand for an instant. They were not heavy. He set them inside the inside pocket of his robes against his chest, opposite the small wallet of 3 galleons. "There is a fee," Ragnok said. "It is not paid in gold, it is paid in oath. You will swear before you leave this hall that the test you have undertaken tonight is undertaken for the cause of lawful inheritance, and not for the cause of harm to any party, not yet adjudged enemy by goblin law. You will swear that the writs in your possession will not be used against the bank or against goblin custom. You will swear that should you find the signet, you will present it to this desk for verification within 30 days of recovery. You will not swear what you will do with the seat. We do not require it. We do not wish to know." Harry inclined his head. "I will swear." then swear. Harry swore. The words were in English. They were exact. Ragnarok did not correct him. When the third oath was done, the brass of the great scales at the far end of the hall chimed, softly, once, a single note that hung in the air for the space of a breath and then was gone. The note was the goblin equivalent of a notary's stamp. Harry understood this without being told. "Master Potter," Ragnarok said, "the inheritance desk is closed for the night. Mongol will escort you to the service door." Harry inclined his head a second time. He turned. The old goblin had stepped forward from the threshold and was waiting. They walked back across the brass-inlaid floor and through the doorway under the lamps and up the long curve of the goblin's stair. Harry did not look back. The stair did not echo. The lamps pooled and dimmed and pooled. At the top, in the passage of iron brackets, Dobby was waiting. The service door opened. The air of the alley outside was sharper and colder than the air inside, and it cut into his cheeks like a fact. He drew the cloak around himself. Dobby, back to the classroom, the same window. The snap took them. They came out in the unused classroom with the half-erased equation on the board. The dust on the floor had not been disturbed since they had left. The moon had moved past the towers and now sat low in the west. He had perhaps 3 hours until dawn. He had perhaps 4 until breakfast. He did not speak to Dobby. He nodded to him. The elf vanished more softly than he had arrived, as if he understood that the kind of silence Harry required now was the kind that one did not break with politenesses. Harry walked back through the corridors to Gryffindor Tower with the 3 dragonhide casings against his chest. He registered the weight of them as a fact of the body. He did not think about Cassandra Slytherin. He did not think about Ignatus Peverell. He did not think about the elder bastard's blood, or the junior half-blood claim, or the man who styled himself by a name not spoken in goblin halls. There would be time for thinking. The hour before dawn was not the hour for it. The hour before dawn was for returning, for sleeping the 4 hours he could afford, for waking, for dressing, for going down to the great hall, for sitting at the Gryffindor table, for eating what was put in front of him, for answering what was asked of him with what was minimally required. He returned. The portrait hole accepted him without comment. The common room was empty. The fire in the grate had gone out. He climbed the spiral stairs without sound. He undressed in the dark. He put the 3 casings under his pillow inside the cloak. He lay down. He slept. He woke when his internal clock woke him, which was 4 hours later, and the dormitory was beginning to gray at the edges. Ron's curtains were still drawn. The breathing behind them was the breathing of someone genuinely asleep now, the small, uneven sound of a person who had stayed up too late being angry and had finally surrendered to it. Harry rose. He dressed. He took the 3 casings out from under his pillow and put them, still wrapped in the cloak, into the bottom of his trunk under the false floor he had cut into it the week before. He closed the trunk. He locked it with the small lock he had paid Dobby to fetch from a Muggle locksmith in Camden over the summer. The locksmith had been chosen because he was Muggle and would not be in the Ministry's records of magical hardware. He pocketed the key. He went down. Hermione was at the Gryffindor table when he came into the great hall. She looked up from a piece of toast that she was not eating, and her face moved through 3 expressions in less than a second. Relief, then anger, then a careful arrangement of the relief and the anger into something she had decided was the right shape to show him. Ron arrived 2 minutes later and sat down opposite her without speaking and stared at his plate. Harry sat down beside Hermione. He filled his plate with eggs and toast and 1 rasher of bacon. He took a long swallow of pumpkin juice. He ate steadily because eating steadily was what he had decided to do. "Harry," Hermione said. "Good morning, are you all right?" He turned to her. He gave her a movement of the mouth that satisfied the surface definition of a smile. "I am well, thank you," he said. He observed her face mechanically. The lift at the corner of her eye, the small contraction at the bridge of her nose, the parting of her lips by 1/2 millimeter as she prepared a second question and decided against it. He noted these data and did not act on them. He looked at Ron. Ron was looking at his plate. The set of Ron's shoulders said one thing, the angle of his neck said another. The data did not need a response yet. He returned to his eggs. He had been raised in a cupboard. He understood what it was to be hidden. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Lord Slytherin confirmed the owl was not an owl. Scarn went on 2 feet, in a coat the color of wet slate, with the carriage of a creature that had been delivering documents to wizards since the reign of a king they had forgotten, and he had not. He crossed the marble floor of the Wisengamot Records office at the hour Harry had specified, 11:43 in the morning, when the chief recorder would be at his desk, when the apprentice clerks would be at lunch, when the corridor traffic would be light enough to be noticed and heavy enough to provide 3 witnesses if witnesses became necessary. Harry had chosen the hour the way one chooses a doorway in a duel, not the obvious one, not the hidden one. the one no one thought to defend. Scarn carried a single tube of dragonhide sealed in green wax, the wax stamped with the goblin sigil of account holder authority, a stamp older than the statute of secrecy and recognized by every magical jurisdiction on the continent except the Holy Roman Remnant in Trier, which did not matter today. Inside the tube lay one document, the inheritance writ, not the lineage chart, not the placeholder writ for the signet. Those Harry kept, one filing at a time, one door at a time. The chief recorder's antechamber smelt of old parchment and beeswax and the faintest undernote of iron, which was the silver-iron alloy used in the recording quills. Scarn waited a measured 40 seconds at the threshold before stepping forward, because to step forward sooner would be to suggest urgency, and to step forward later would be to suggest doubt. Goblins did not suggest either to wizards. Goblins arrived. Scarn of Gringotts, by writ proxy of an account holder under seal, for the attention of the chief recorder. The underclerk at the front desk, a thin woman with a quill behind each ear, did not look up at once. When she did, she looked at the seal first and at Scarn second. The seal made her sit straighter. She rose, she crossed to the inner door, she knocked twice and entered without waiting. Tiberius Ogden was 68 years old and had been chief recorder of the Wisengamot for 19 of them. He had a voice that had never raised itself in public memory, and a spine that had in 1979 refused a direct request from the then minister to backdate a death certificate. The minister had been one of the late Voldemort's quieter clients. Ogden had said no in the same tone in which he greeted his housekeeper, and the request had not been repeated. He was not a brave man in the cinematic sense. He was the other kind, the kind that simply did not bend. He looked up from a draft and folded his hands. "Show him in." Scarn entered. He placed the dragonhide tube on the desk between them, sigil up, and stepped back one pace. "By the Lex Antiqua of 1612, Scarn said, as amended in 1701 and recodified in 1842, a house seat dormant in the Wisengamot for more than 3 generations may be resurrected by the senior magical blood claimant upon presentation of first, a sworn inheritance writ certified by a recognized magical authority, and second, the house signet, within 1 calendar year of the writ's filing. I lodge the writ, the signet will follow within the prescribed term." Ogden's eyes moved to the seal and stayed there a moment. Which house? Slytherin. There was a silence in the office that was not surprise. Ogden did not deal in surprise. The silence was attention, the gathering of a mind that had spent 2 decades waiting for documents like this one and had begun to assume they would never come. He drew the tube toward him with both hands, the way one moves a chess piece one is sure of, and broke the seal. He read it twice. Did not read it a third time, because to read a Gringotts certified writ a third time was an insult to the bank, and Ogden was a man who did not give insults by accident. "The certifying authority is Ragnarok of the account holder bench," he said, "not a question. It is. The lineage cited is the cadet Peveril Slytherin line through Ignatus Peveril's marriage of 1297 to Cassandra Slytherin. It is. The claimant is named in escrow under the sealing clause." He, Ogden's eyes flicked up. The flick was the only fast thing about the man. "Very well, the clerk will draft the docket entry. The petitioner's identity will be sealed until the signet is presented or the year lapses, whichever comes first. Counterpetition rights are reserved to any house lodging a competing writ within the same term on the same evidentiary standard." He paused. "There are, to my knowledge, no other claimants of Slytherin blood in any active register." "There are not," Scarn said, which was not strictly a confirmation and not strictly a lie. The junior claimant was not in any active register. Gringotts had never recognized him. Gringotts did not recognize half-bloods who murdered their own fathers, and it did not recognize the corpses of men presumed dead since 1981. The bank kept its own counsel on the question of whether the second category was presently accurate. Ogden took up his quill. He wrote the docket entry in the long-bound book that lay always at his right hand. The book was 300 years old, and the page he wrote on was the next blank page in a sequence that had begun in 1701 and had not yet ended. Slytherin, House of, Petition of Resurrection, lodged by heir of body in escrow. Filed this day, the 28th of November, 1994, by Scarn of Gringotts, proxy. Sealing clause invoked. Signet term 1 year. Counterpetition term 1 year. He took the lump of green wax from the warming stand at his elbow. He pressed the Wisengamot seal into it. The wax cooled dark green at the edges and darker green at the center, the color of a forest pool with stones beneath. He set the seal aside. He blotted the entry. He looked up. "The filing is complete. Good day to you, Scarn of Gringotts. Good day to you, Chief Recorder." Scarn turned and walked from the office without haste and without lingering. The wax on the docket cooled to the color of old moss. In the antechamber, the underclerk watched him go with the expression of a woman who had just witnessed something she could not yet describe but would, she suspected, remember. Outside in the corridor, Scarn permitted himself a single short breath, not relief. Goblins did not feel relief in wizard buildings. He had completed an instruction. He would now return to Gringotts and report it completed. The boy who had given the instruction would be told. What the boy did with the telling was not Scarn's business, and Scarn, who had watched 4 generations of Potters come and go through the bank, had begun to suspect that the boy's business was not going to be anyone's business at all until the boy decided it was. The clock had started. Severus Snape received the daily Wisengamot docket at 4:07 in the afternoon by Raven in his office below the dungeons. The Raven left without waiting for an answer, because the Raven was not paid to wait, and Snape was not in the habit of giving it reasons to. He took the docket to his desk. He cut the seal with the silver knife he used for nothing else. He unrolled the parchment with the unhurried economy of a man who had read these dockets every working week for 11 years and could, on a normal day, dispose of one in under 3 minutes. This was not a normal day. The eye learned, after 11 years, where to look. New petitions came first, then warrants, then summonses, then the long tail of administrative entries no one read except the lawyers who specialized in reading them. Snape's eye went to the new petitions because new petitions occasionally concerned former students, and former students were to Snape the only category of human being he was professionally obliged to track. The 3rd line on the page stopped him. Slytherin, House of Petition of Resurrection, lodged by heir of body in escrow. He read it once. He set the docket down flat on the desk, both hands on the edges as though it might rise. He read it again. The parchment was heavier in his hand than parchment of that size had any business being. It was not heavier, in fact. It was heavier in the way a piece of news is heavier when the news rearranges a room. The room had been arranged a particular way for 40 years. The room contained a dark lord who had spent his life, his crimes, and his fractured soul attempting to claim the seat of Salazar Slytherin in the Wisengamot, and who had been refused by the goblins, refused by the Lex Antiqua, refused by the fact that the bastard line he descended from had never been entered into the recognized registers of blood. The room contained the Dark Lord's frustration on this point, and Snape had been present in the room for enough of those particular silences to have learned the exact shape of that frustration. The Dark Lord had failed at this for 4 decades. Someone else had not. Someone has done what the Dark Lord has tried for 40 years and failed. The thought arrived whole. He did not push it away. He looked at it. He weighed it. He set it on the desk beside the docket, in the part of his mind he reserved for the things he would not, under any circumstance, allow to surface in a room containing either of his masters. Who, the sealing clause meant he could not know. It also meant nobody could. The Lex Antiqua had, in its quiet 1612 draftsmanship, anticipated exactly this kind of moment, the moment when a senior claimant emerged with valid blood and would be assassinated before he could present the signet, unless his name was held in confidence until the signet was in his hand. The drafters had been, in their century, men who understood what happened to inconvenient heirs. The clause had been used twice in 382 years. This was the 3rd who would do it, who could. The candidate set was narrow. The Slytherin line had been in public memory, extinct in the male direct for 200 years and dormant in any recognized branch for the better part of one. The Gaunts had been the last claimants of the older bastard line, and the Gaunts had ended in a hovel with a half-blood child and an imperiused muggle and a great deal of squalor. There were no other registered cadet branches that Snape could recall, and he could recall a great many. Which meant a cadet branch existed that had not been on any register he had access to. Which meant Gringotts had certified it. Which meant the Gringotts certification was watertight, because Ogden would not have sealed a docket on a writ that was not watertight, and the underclerks would not have let it pass the antechamber if the sigil was not authentic, and Ragnarok of the account-holder bench did not put his name to documents he did not intend to defend in front of a council of his peers. Watertight, sealed, in escrow, with a year on the clock, Snape rose from his chair. He crossed to the small bureau against the back wall of his quarters, the one with the locking drawer he had warded himself in 1987 and rewarded in 1992 after Lockhart had broken into 3 other bureaus in the same week. He placed the docket inside. He closed the drawer. He laid his hand flat on the wood and renewed the ward in a syllable. He stood there a moment with his hand on the wood. Then he returned to his desk and began to draft, in green ink on a fresh sheet, the short note he would send to the Dark Lord's contact via the ordinary channel. The note would contain none of this. The note would contain a description of Karkaroff's nerves and the Beauxbatons' headmistress's drinking and the rest of the petty intelligence he was paid in pain to produce. The thing he had just seen, he would carry alone in his head until he had decided what it was. He had decided one thing already. He would not name it to either master until he knew which of them was, in this matter, the more dangerous to be wrong about. Albus Dumbledore received the courtesy notification at 9:10 the next morning, in his office, by a slim Harrenhal from the records office that did not deliver to anyone but Chief Warlocks and former Chief Warlock. Fawkes on his perch watched the Harrenhal depart with the indulgent contempt of a being who had outlived 4 orders of the species. Dumbledore read the notification. He read it twice. He set down his tea. He arrived at the records office at 11:15. He did not apparate. He took the public flue in his most formal robes and walked the public corridor, because to arrive any other way was to suggest the visit was urgent, and Dumbledore did not at this stage wish to suggest urgency. Tiberius Ogden was at his desk. The bronze paperweight on the corner of his desk, a stylized hippogriff, wings folded, the gift of his late wife, caught the morning light through the long window. Ogden rose when Dumbledore was shown in. He did not rise quickly. He rose at the speed of a man who would have risen for the postman. Albus, Tiberius, thank you for seeing me at short notice. I had not been given to understand, Ogden said, that the notice was short. A courtesy filing was lodged with this office, the House of Slytherin. I confess myself curious. Curiosity is permitted under the regulations. The petitioner, sealed. Dumbledore inclined his head the smallest fraction. Of course. I would ask, however, in the interest of the school, a great many of my students bear, at various removes, the blood of the old houses, and a resurrection of a house of this particular significance has a number of educational implications that I should wish to anticipate. The petitioner, Ogden said, is sealed. In my capacity as headmaster, sealed. In my capacity as a member of the Wisengamot, sealed to all members until the signet is presented or the term lapses. The Lex Antiqua does not distinguish. In my capacity, Dumbledore said, and here his voice took on the warm gravel that had in certain rooms in certain decades ended discussions, as Chief Warlock exercising the privilege of inquiry, withdrawn from this office in 1842, Ogden said, by the same statute that recodified the sealing clause. The drafters were careful. He folded his hands. The Chief Warlock retains the privilege of inquiry in matters of public order, treason, and capital warrant. Inheritance is none of these. And if I were to argue that the resurrection of the Slytherin seat is, in the present political climate, a matter of public order, you would argue it before the full bench, Albus. Not in this office, and I should be required to inform you with regret that your standing as Chief Warlock prevents you from arguing it at all. The Chief Warlock cannot petition his own bench. You would have to find a member to do it for you. There was a pause. Dumbledore smiled. The smile reached the edges of his beard and stopped there. You are, he said, a very precise man, Tiberius. It is the only quality this office requires. I shall not detain you further. You have not detained me at all. Dumbledore inclined his head a second time and turned and walked from the office at the same pace he had entered it, and Ogden watched him go with the same expression with which he watched the postman. When the door closed, Ogden sat. He drew the docket book toward him. He uncapped his quill. In the margin, in the narrow column reserved for the recorder's private annotations, a column read only by the next recorder, and only after the present recorder's death, he wrote a single line in a careful hand. Headmaster's interest unusual, 3 pretexts, note the file. He blotted it. He closed the book. He poured himself a fresh cup of tea, and turned to the next matter on his desk, which was a perfectly ordinary license application for a hippogriff sanctuary in Devon, and which he addressed with the same unhurried attention he addressed everything. Harry returned to Hogwarts on the Sunday evening night bus and was in his dormitory by curfew. He spoke to no one of where he had been. Ron was not speaking to him in any case. Hermione asked once, and he answered without lying and without informing, which was a skill he had been developing since the age of 6 and which had ripened, in the last 48 hours, into something he was beginning to recognize as a craft. He lay awake on the Sunday night and thought. The first move had been made. Scarn would have filed the writ on the Friday. By Saturday morning the docket would have circulated to the Wisengamot members, including Snape. By Sunday morning the courtesy notification would have reached Dumbledore. By Sunday afternoon Dumbledore would have visited Ogden. By Sunday evening Dumbledore would have failed. What would Dumbledore do next? This was not a hard question. Harry had been observed by the headmaster for 4 years. He had in that time accumulated a working model of the man, and the model had 3 reliable predictions. First, Dumbledore would not accept being blocked at the records office. He would root around. Second, the cheapest route around an information block was, for a legilimens of his caliber, the mind of any student in the castle who might know something, and the question was not which student, the question was which set of students. Third, the cheapest cheap route was Harry himself, because Harry was the obvious one to ask, and Dumbledore did not like asking, and Dumbledore did like reading. Therefore, legilimency, probably at the next office summons, possibly in passing in a corridor, possibly through the wards, although the castle wards did not permit passive scrying of the inside of a student's skull, and Dumbledore would not violate his own wards because Dumbledore was a man of principle in the technical sense of the term. Therefore, preempt, there were 3 categories of defense. 1. Train occlumency. This was the standard answer. It was also the slowest. Harry had begun to read the relevant texts in October, after the third Scardream had told him things he did not want anyone else to be able to take from him, and he was perhaps 2 months into a discipline that took most adepts 2 years. Insufficient. 2. Avoid the headmaster's eye line. Possible in the short term, impossible across a school year, especially the school year of a Triwizard champion who would be summoned to the headmaster's office at least 4 more times before Christmas. Insufficient. 3. A legal bar. He had found the relevant text in the library on the 2nd of November, in a volume titled Statutes of Magical Privacy. A compendium, on a shelf that was technically restricted to upper-year students but practically restricted to no one, because Madame Pince did not patrol the legal section, which she found dry. The occlumency statutes of 1812 had been drafted in response to a scandal involving a minister and the wife of an Auror and a privately commissioned legilimens, and they had been, in their plain language, exactly what Harry needed. A wizard or witch of any age of sound magical capacity could file a right of magical privacy with the head of their house, in the case of a minor enrolled at a school of magic, or with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in any other case. The filing barred any other party from performing legilimency on the filer without a warrant issued by a sitting Wisengamot panel of not fewer than 3 members, in a session of record, with the filer notified at least 7 days in advance and permitted counsel. The bar was absolute. It applied to teachers. It applied to heads of school. It applied to the chief warlock. It applied by name in Clause 6 to any party serving in a supervisory, custodial, or educational capacity with respect to the filer. Dumbledore was 3 of those 4. The cost of the filing was a single line in McGonagall's logbook and 1 signed parchment. The benefit was a legal wall around his skull. The asymmetry was unattractive enough that Harry had checked the statute 3 times against 3 different sources before believing it. He had believed it. He went to McGonagall's office on the Monday morning at 7:20 in uniform with the parchment already drafted in his own hand on standard form. He had copied the form from the back of the compendium. He had filled it in correctly. He had signed it. He had brought a quill. McGonagall was at her desk with a cup of tea. The tartan pin at her throat caught the lamp. She set down the tea. "Mr. Potter, Professor. I'd like to file a right of magical privacy under the occlumency statutes of 1812, Clause 1, with you as head of house." She did not move for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then she said, "Sit down." He sat. "May I ask," she said in a voice that was, if one listened carefully, exactly the voice she used in class, "what has prompted this filing?" "I have read the statute. I am entitled to file. The statute does not require me to give a reason." "It does not. I am asking." He had prepared the answer. He had prepared it the way one prepares a key for a lock one has already opened. "I am a Triwizard champion under contested entry, in a school in which my privacy as a student has been in the past subject to broad construction. I would prefer that construction to be narrowed." McGonagall looked at him. The look went on a beat longer than was bureaucratically necessary. Then she said, "Very well." She took the parchment. She did not read it carefully. She had read the form on other parchments in other years and knew its shape. She signed it without looking at him. She countersigned the school's copy. She filed both, one to the school registry, one for the owl to the department. "The filing will be logged by midday," she said. "Notification will go to the headmaster, the deputy headmistress, myself, and the school registrar. From this hour you are protected under the statutes. Do you understand the scope? No party may perform legilimency on me without a warrant of 3 Wisengamot members in session of record with 7 days' notice and right to counsel. You understand the scope. Good morning, Mr. Potter. Good morning, Professor." He rose. At the door he paused because he wanted to see her face and because seeing her face would be data. She was looking at the parchment in front of her. She was not looking at him. The line between her brows was the line that meant she was, in some part of her professional mind, reaching for the question she had not yet asked herself and had not on this morning decided to ask. He closed the door behind him. In the corridor he held the breath he had been holding since he sat down and let it out and walked to breakfast. The wall was up. It would not stop a man like Dumbledore from wanting to look. It would stop him from looking. The difference between wanting and doing was, in a legal system that worked, a chasm. Harry did not assume the legal system worked in all cases. He assumed it worked in this one because Dumbledore had, in 50 years of public life, never been caught violating a statute he had himself voted to uphold. The pattern was a pattern. It would hold for at least a year. A year was enough. By the end of breakfast, the headmaster knew. By the end of the day, the castle knew that the headmaster knew, which was useful in a separate way that Harry did not need yet but had not forgotten. Potions, that afternoon, was the brewing of a strengthening solution. Snape walked the rows in his usual manner, which was to walk them as though he were the only living thing in the room, and the students were a particularly disappointing kind of furniture. He stopped at the Gryffindor desks more often than at the Slytherin desks, because that was the etiquette of his classroom, and the etiquette of his classroom was a thing he maintained for reasons that were 9 parts cover and 1 part, on certain days, genuine professional disgust. He stopped at Harry's table. He did not speak. Harry was working the silver scale. The scale was set on his left, the mortar on his right, the burner ahead. He had measured the salamander blood to the gram. The cauldron was at the 3rd stage of the brew, the stage at which the solution turned from clear to faintly green, and the steam rose from it in a thin column that caught the light from the high windows and ran along the cool draft from the dungeon doorway, and the green of the steam was the green of a forest pool with stones beneath. Snape looked at his hands. He looked at the scale. He looked at the measure. He looked at the cauldron. He did not look at Harry's face. The looking took perhaps 4 seconds in the conventional way time is measured. Then he moved on. Harry did not raise his eyes. He continued to work the scale. There was a courtesy between enemies older than any treaty, older than the Wisengamot itself, older than the parchment of the Lex Antiqua and the wax of its seals. It was the courtesy of seeing, of acknowledging, without word or witness, that the other player had taken the board and that the game was henceforth a game. Harry tipped the salamander blood into the cauldron in a single steady pour. The color deepened by the half-shade the textbook predicted. He stirred 3 times anti-clockwise. He stirred once clockwise. He stepped back from the cauldron exactly the distance the lab manual recommended. Snape was 3 desks away, examining Neville Longbottom's brew with the expression of a man who had ceased to expect anything and was, for that reason, calm. Harry did the inventory in his head. Snape had been in the Wisengamot session on the Saturday. Snape had received the docket on the Saturday afternoon. Snape had therefore known since the Saturday afternoon that the Slytherin seat had a senior claimant. Snape did not yet know that the senior claimant was sitting 2 yards from him with salamander blood on his sleeve. Snape suspected. What Snape suspected and what Snape knew were 2 different countries, and Harry had no intention of helping him cross the border. The look at the scale had been the first measurement. Snape had measured the brewer's hands. He had measured the brewer's calm. He had measured the brewer's competence at a 4th-year potion that 2 months ago Harry would have ruined in the 2nd stage. He had drawn his own conclusions. The conclusions would be incomplete. They would be enough to make him watch. Watching was acceptable. Watching was, in fact, what Harry wanted from Snape for the moment, because a Snape who watched was a Snape who had not yet reported, and a Snape who had not yet reported was a piece on the board with a color Harry had not yet assigned. The bell rang. Harry decanted his strengthening solution into the vial. He labeled the vial. He set the vial on Snape's front desk with the rest of the class's vials. He left the dungeon at the pace he had entered it. Behind him at the front desk, Snape stood over the row of vials. He picked up Harry's. He held it to the light. The solution was the correct green, the correct viscosity, the correct everything. He set it down with a delicacy that was not, on any reading of his classroom manner, characteristic. Then he turned to the next vial and resumed his work. The library that evening was emptier than the library on a Monday usually was, because the Beauxbatons delegation had organized a recital in the Great Hall and half the school had gone to it. Harry had not gone. He was in the restricted section, in the alcove behind the stacks marked Heraldry and Precedents, with a list in his head and 3 books off the shelf already. He had been pulling books on the dormant houses. He had been pulling them at a pace that would not attract Pince's attention. He had been replacing them where he found them, with their spines aligned to the shelf edge, because Pince noticed disorder before she noticed thieves. He turned a corner of the stacks, and there was Daphne Greengrass. She was seated at the far end of the alcove's single table, in the cone of a lamp, the dust haloing the lamp like the inside of a snow globe held still. She had a book open. The book was thick. The spine, when he glanced at it on his way past, and he glanced at it on his way past because he was passing, read Wisengamot procedure. Standing, Privilege, and Precedence, the Carothers edition, the one revised in 1979 and used by every barrister in magical Britain who litigated peerage matters. She did not look up. Her stillness was the stillness of a creature that had learned in some earlier life that movement was what predators saw. He had seen the same stillness in a fox once in the field behind Privet Drive when a muggle had walked past it with a dog. The fox had not turned its head. The dog had not seen the fox. The muggle had not seen the fox. The fox had watched all three of them and remained throughout, a thing the field did not contain. He passed her table. She did not turn her head. He moved 2 stacks over to the section on the houses he was, this week, pretending to research as cover, Ollivander Cadet Branches, Selwyn Macmillan, and pulled a book at random from the Selwyn shelf. The book was Gregson's Cadet Lines of the Sacred 28, a perfectly innocent reference work that any fourth year doing extra credit might be expected to consult. He made his selection deliberate, fingers steady, no hesitation at the spine. He tucked the book under his arm. He walked back past her table on the way to the desk. This time he saw her see him see the book in his arm. She did not move. She did not look at him directly. The edge of her attention shifted by a degree that was, by any objective measure, undetectable, and by the measure of a player at the start of a long game, audible. He walked on. At the desk, Madame Pint stamped the book without interest and recorded his name in the ledger. He left the library. In the corridor he held the picture of Daphne and her book in his head and turned it over once. Daphne Greengrass, pureblood, Slytherin, 4th year. Father on the Wisengamot's commercial bench, mother retired, sister at home in delicate health. Known in the year as the girl who did not speak in class unless asked and answered, when asked, in sentences that ended before they were expected to. Not in Malfoy's circle, not against it either, neutral in a house where neutrality was a labor. She was reading Carothers in the restricted section on a Monday evening when the rest of the castle was at a recital. She was reading the chapter. He had glimpsed the page number on Standing and Precedence, which was the chapter that covered, among other things, the procedure for the resurrection of a dormant house. She did not know about the writ. She could not know about the writ. The writ was sealed. She was reading the procedure. He revised the picture. She was hunting succession law. Specifically, she was hunting the procedure. Specifically, on a Monday evening in late November, the Monday evening immediately following the weekend on which the Wisengamot docket had circulated. Daphne Greengrass was the daughter of a Wisengamot member. Her father had received the docket on Saturday. The docket had been sealed as to identity but not as to fact. Her father had come home and said to his wife or to himself or to his ledger that the Slytherin seat had a senior claimant, and Daphne, who did not speak in class unless asked, had within 48 hours taken Carothers off the shelf and opened it to the chapter on Standing. She was not on her father's errand. Her father did not need her to read Carothers. Her father had read Carothers. She was on her own errand. She was on her own initiative, learning the procedure by which a house was resurrected and by extension the procedure by which one positioned oneself in the orbit of a newly resurrected house before the rest of the school had thought to. First lever identified, he would approach her in the 2nd week of December. He would not approach her in the 1st. The 1st week of December would be the week of the first task, and the first task would absorb attention. He would need attention to be elsewhere. He walked on. The unused classroom on the 7th floor was the one with the cracked window and the desks stacked along the eastern wall, 3 doors down from the tapestry of Barnabas, the Barmy, and the Trolls. Harry had used it twice before in his 3rd year, for reasons that had seemed important at the time and were not, in retrospect, important at all. He used it now because no one used it ever, and because the wards on the door, when he set them, would not be noticed by any portrait in the corridor. He set the wards, he set them in 3 layers. Notice Me Not, Muffliato, and a low ward of his own devising that he had begun to develop in October, and which, when it worked, dulled the magical signature of the room by enough to make a passive scrying find an empty classroom and pass on. He stood at the window for a moment. The cracked pane caught the last of the November light and broke it into 2 sheets, one of which lay across the floor in a long shape like a fallen door. Then he sat on the desk at the center of the room and held the plan in his head. He did not write it down. To write it down was to make it a thing that could be stolen. He had decided in the 2nd hour after leaving Gringotts that this plan would exist nowhere but in his own skull, and that his own skull was, from this week onward, walled. The right of magical privacy was the wall in law. The occlumency he was building was the wall in fact. The 2 walls were in the present configuration of the board sufficient. Phase 1. Recruit 5 Slytherin upper years through 5 different levers, no 2 the same. The number was 5 because 3 was too few to constitute a network, and 7 was too many to control. The levers had to differ because identical levers were a single point of failure. A Slytherin who realized that he and 4 others had been moved by the same hand would feel moved, and a Slytherin who felt moved became, by the next sunrise, a Slytherin who moved. The levers on his present survey of the house were: ambition, greengrass on the evidence of Carothers; debt, he had not yet identified the bearer of debt, but the house contained at least 2 upper years whose families were, by public registry, encumbered; grievance, Theodore Knott, whose father had been imprisoned and released and would be imprisoned again on actuarial grounds within the next 3 years; curiosity, Blaise Zabini, on the evidence of his mother's career; and the 5th and the hardest, protection, the upper year, named to be determined, whose loyalty to the Dark Lord's circle was performative rather than ideological, and who would, when offered a route out of that performance, take it. 5 levers, 5 names by mid-March, Phase 2. Through the Slytherin network, identify a route into the Dark Lord's inner circle. The route had to be a route, not a person. Persons died, routes survived their deaths. He suspected the route ran through Malfoy Sr., who was at the center of the spider's web of the British wing of the circle, and who was, on the evidence of his son's behavior and his wife's expenditures and his ministry expenditures and the public record of his Wisengamot votes, vulnerable. Malfoy Sr. had not yet decided whether he was in the circle or above it. The decision could be influenced. Influencing the decision was not Harry's job, influencing the influencer was. The network would, in Phase 1, deliver the influencer. Phase 3, locate the snake. The snake had a name. He had heard the name in the Scar dreams, a long sibilant that was not English, and that the dream voice spoke with a tenderness it spoke nothing else with, Nagini. He had corroborated the name by silent observation, by listening in the corridors near the defense classroom, to a particular Slytherin upper year who muttered in his sleep when he napped in the common room, which Harry had no business knowing about and did, because the upper year was Crabbe's cousin and Crabbe's cousin had been at his father's house in October and had heard things. The snake existed. The snake was with the Dark Lord. The snake was the last of the animate Horcruxes. He had reasons for believing the inanimate ones existed too, but the inanimate ones could wait, the animate one could not, because the animate one was the one that fed. Phase 4. Kill them both, the body and the last animate Horcrux, in the same hour. Not the same minute. The body had to die first by a clean margin, because to kill the snake first would be to give the Dark Lord the warning of his last anchor severing, and to kill the body first would be to leave the snake alive and the Dark Lord, in the moments before re-anchoring, vulnerable in a way that would close the window inside an hour. The window was an hour. He would not be able to widen it. He could narrow it. Narrowing was the work of Phases 1 through 3. Phase 5, take the signet from the corpse. The signet of Slytherin had last been known to the Gaunt Line and had passed, on actuarial evidence and on the evidence of the Dark Lord's known habits, into the Dark Lord's possession at some point between 1942 and 1944. He would be carrying it. He had carried it for half a century. He would not have entrusted it to a vault, because the Gringotts vaults of the Lestrange line were the vaults of his lieutenants, not his own, and he had never had a vault of his own because he had never had a name the bank recognized. He carried it, on his finger, on a chain, in a robe pocket. The form did not matter. The form would be visible when the corpse was searched. Phase 6, walk into the Wisengamot and claim what is his. He held the sequence in his head with the steadiness one holds a chessboard already won 3 moves ahead. The board was not one. The board was a board on which the position, if played correctly, won. He would have to play it correctly. Each phase had a margin. The margins were thin. He was satisfied with thin margins because the alternative to thin margins was wide margins, and wide margins required time, and time was the resource he did not have. The clock in the records office was running. He had 1 year to present the signet. He had less than 1 year because the Triwizard Tournament would end in late June, and the political weather of the next autumn would be the weather of whatever the Dark Lord did with the corpse restoration he was, on the evidence Harry had assembled, presently planning. The Dark Lord would not wait beyond next summer to be restored. Harry would not wait beyond next summer either. 12 months, 6 phases, 5 Slytherins, 1 snake, 1 Dark Lord, 1 signet, 1 seat. He counted the phases once and then once again, and then he stopped counting, because counting beyond 2 iterations was a tick, and ticks were what got people killed. He stood. He took the wards down in reverse order. He closed the door behind him. In the corridor he paused before the tapestry of Barnabas, where the trolls were, as always, attempting to learn the ballet. The torches on the wall guttered. He watched the trolls for a moment without seeing them. He had never been the boy who lived. He had been the boy who waited. Waiting was over. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Slytherin recruitment. The 5th floor classroom had not been used since the war with Grindelwald. Desks stacked along the west wall in a pattern that suggested someone long ago had begun a system of shelving and given up. A chalkboard in the corner carried the ghost of a runic equation half erased. Late afternoon came through the high windows in a flat gray wash, the kind of light that did not illuminate so much as describe. Harry was already there. He had pulled two desks together in the center of the room and set out nothing between them. Daphne Greengrass closed the door behind her without sound. She was taller than her year. She came across the room, sat opposite him, folded her hands, and waited. There was chalk dust on the desk between them. A faint scattering, white against the dark wood, undisturbed since some Easter holiday a decade gone. Harry watched a single particle of it move briefly in a draft he could not feel. "Your father holds the Greengrass seat," he said. She did not nod, she did not blink, the folded hands did not move. "Your mother is dying," Harry said, "wasting curse. The family is denying it, the apothecaries are not. 3 of them between Diagon and Nocturne have been asked for the same set of stabilizers in the same order. The order is wrong for any disease but one." The first sign of motion in her face was at the eyes, not widening, only narrowing very slightly, the equivalent in her of a sharp intake of breath. "Your sister Astoria carries the Greengrass blood curse," Harry said. "I have read the line in the healer's register. She will not live past 40. The healers know, your father knows, you know. The House of Greengrass requires a male heir of the direct line within 2 generations of the curse manifesting, or the seat falls to the male line of your Uncle Cyrus, who beats his wife. The Aurors have been called 3 times. The cases were closed 3 times. Cyrus is on the docket to inherit. He is, in fact, expecting it. You have done your research, Potter," Daphne said. Her voice was lower than her year as well, and matched her stillness, not a performance, only an instrument she had learned to leave at rest until it was needed. "Lex Magici 1402, Harry said. "Daughter may inherit by precedent of demonstrated magical capability, provided she stands behind the protection of a senior house willing to put its name to her claim. The clause has been used twice in 7 centuries. Both times the senior house was Peveril. Both times the petition succeeded." He stopped. He let her work through the rest of the sentence herself. "There is no Peveril house," Daphne said. "There is about to be," Harry said. She held his eyes for a count of perhaps 4 seconds. Then she looked briefly at the chalk dust on the desk between them, and then back to him. The narrowing of the eyes was gone. In its place was the flat stillness with which she had entered the room. He understood that she had reached a conclusion. He understood further that she had already half reached it before she had come. "What do you want?" she said. It was not a question. She had elided the inflection. 5 names, Harry said. "Slytherin upper years. I will tell you which 5. You will tell me what you know about each of them, not what is rumored, not what is said, what you know. After that, your wand at my back, only when I ask, and in return." "In return," Harry said, "when I take the Peveril seat, the writ standing behind your inheritance is the first writ I sign." She considered this. The consideration was not visible on her face. It was visible only in the fact that for perhaps 15 seconds she did not blink, which Harry knew from the schedule of the eye was the length of a long internal calculation in a person who had taught herself not to externalize anything. "You have an enemy," she said at last. "Several. They are pointed at me. They have not yet noticed they are also pointed at you. Cyrus is not an enemy yet. He will be in 7 months, Harry said, or he will be a corpse, and I will not have done it. Choose." She did not answer for some moments. There was no fear in her, which Harry had also expected. He had not chosen her for fear. He had chosen her because she had been seen on a Tuesday, requesting from the restricted section a treatise on the inheritance precedents of female claimants under Lex Magici 1402. The librarian had recorded the request. Harry had read the record. Daphne Greengrass had been reading about her own survival in code for 6 weeks before he had selected her. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. He pulled a slip of parchment from inside his robes and slid it across the dust toward her, 5 names in his own hand. She read it in one pass and committed it to memory. Then she turned the slip over, took a piece of chalk from the runic equation in the corner and wrote a single word on the back of it, which she erased with her thumb. "That one first," she said. "You will need her to bring the others." "Davis," Harry said, who had already known. Daphne stood. The interview, she had decided, was over. He did not contest the decision. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the latch, did not turn. "Potter." "Greengrass, if you are lying about the Peveril claim, I will kill you." "If I am lying about the Peveril claim," Harry said, "you will not need to." The door closed behind her with the same noiseless precision with which she had opened it. The chalk dust on the desk between them, disturbed by the air of her departure, settled into a slightly different pattern. Harry sat for another minute in the empty classroom, registering the new arrangement of the dust, and then he rose and went to find Davis. 3 nights later, in Greenhouse 3 after curfew, she came alone. The greenhouse was warm with the metabolism of plants closed against the November cold. The mandrake bed had been moved, leaving a long table of empty soil. Harry had lit a single lumos on the table. It did not extend more than a meter in any direction. Tracy Davis stepped into that meter and stopped. She was shorter than Daphne, weight on the balls of her feet. Her defining feature was numerical. When she answered in fractions. Davis, he said. Potter. She looked at the lumos. She did not look at him. Daphne sent me. I know. She did not tell me why. I know. She waited. He did not begin. He had decided he would not begin until she looked at him. The soil smell moved between them, thick and brown. She looked at him. If the Dark Lord wins, Harry said, you are dead in the first week. Your mother is Muggle. The lists are already written. He has had 13 years to revise them, and he has used the time. The Davis name is on the second column of the second list. You are dead in the first week. And if Dumbledore wins, you are dead by the second. She did not speak. She did not laugh, which a lesser candidate would have done. She had heard the form of the sentence and was already calculating. Dumbledore will not save the half-bloods of Slytherin, Harry said. He has never tried. He did not save Snape from Riddle's circle in 1977, and he will not save you from the purges of 1996. Slytherin houses, after the war, will be searched. The half-bloods will be examined first, because they are the ones presumed compromised. They will be the ones the Ministry can least afford to leave in office and the Order can least afford to defend. Dumbledore will not spend political capital on you. He will not have any to spend. He will be too busy spending it on the Weasleys. You have done the math, she said. I have done the math, and you have decided you will win. I have decided I will not lose. The difference matters. To win requires luck. To not lose requires a structure. I am building the structure. She tilted her head slightly. The lumos lit her cheek on one side and left the other in soil-smelling dark. And in this structure I am what? You are alive. That is the offer. That is the floor of the offer. The ceiling is that you are a Davis with a seat near the throne. Not a half-blood waiting to be found out, a name on the new lists on the first column. And the price is your wand at my back when I call it, and your silence when I do not. The price is that you do not write home to your mother about what is happening in this castle. The price is that when I tell you to leave Hogwarts, you leave Hogwarts within the hour with what you can carry. And after. After Harry said, you are a Davis with a seat near the throne, I said. She did the math out loud. It was, he had been told what she did, and she did it now without performance, the way another girl might have hummed. 70-30 you actually do it, she said. 90-10 I die otherwise. 90 times 0.3 is 27. 70 times 0 is 0. Floor is 0, ceiling is 70. Other side, floor is 90, ceiling is 90. Expected value of yes is 35, give or take. Expected value of no is negative 90. Differential is 125 points of survival. She paused. She looked down at the soil between them. I have never seen the number that big, she said, in either direction. You will see larger, Harry said. Yes, or number, yes. Good. She nodded. She turned to go. At the door of the greenhouse she stopped. The way Daphne had stopped, Harry registered that they had learned the gesture from each other, or from the same place, and she did not turn. Potter, Davis, 70-30, not 80, not 90, 70. I know. Then we understand each other. We do. She left. The greenhouse closed behind her with the soft thud of warm wood against warm wood. Harry put out the lumos with a flick of his wand. The soil smell of the beds remained, breathing in the dark, and he stood for some seconds in it before he went up. The next evening, on the astronomy tower at dusk, the wind off the parapet was cold against the back of his neck. Harry had selected the tower because Blaise came here on Tuesdays to read a letter that was always the wrong letter. Blaise Zabini was already at the parapet, leaning on his forearms against the stone. The sky was the color of an old bruise. He did not turn when Harry came up beside him. He waited. Harry leaned on the parapet at a polite half-meter's distance and looked with him west. Your mother, Harry said, has buried 7 husbands. 8, said Blaise. 8, Harry said. I had not counted the Romanian. Most people do not. The current one is an Italian count, Harry said. He has begun to ask after your coming-of-age fortune. He has asked specifically after the Zabini vineyards in the Veneto, the Genoese shipping shares, and the Florentine fund. He has asked your mother about these. Your mother has not told him. Yet, you are very well informed, Potter. I am. The right eyebrow went up exactly once and came back down. And what does the well-informed Mr. Potter propose? Said Blaise. A magical guardianship lien on your estate, Harry said, in escrow at Gringotts. Sealed under my signet when it is confirmed. Your signet. Mine. You have a signet. I will. That is 2 different sentences, Blaise observed. It is one timeline. Blaise considered the bruised sky for a few seconds. The wind moved along the parapet and Harry kept his neck against it. Under the lay-in, Blaze said, "What happens to my principal? Your principal becomes inaccessible to your mother until you reach majority. The interest she retains as the custodian of record, the principal she cannot touch. She cannot sign against it, she cannot pledge it, she cannot grant any portion of it to any spouse, present or future, as dower or as gift. She also loses, by the structure of the lay-in, the motive. The motive to outlive me. Ah, quite." Blaze turned his head then and looked at Harry full on. His eyes were nearly black in the dusk, and the cost Potter. "Your house's vote when I call it." "My house," said Blaze, "has one vote in the Wisengamot, and my mother holds it. Until you are 17, then it is yours. You are willing to wait. I am willing to plan." Blaze looked back to the sky. Harry waited him out. "You understand," said Blaze, "that I do not particularly love my mother, but I do not particularly wish her in Azkaban either." "The lien does not send her to Azkaban," Harry said. "It removes the principal." "It removes, with the principal, the count. The count goes, your mother finds another. Your mother is good at finding another. Your inheritance becomes uninteresting to her current sphere of affection, and your throat becomes correspondingly uninteresting as well. The lay-in is a kindness, Zabini, to everyone in your house. You phrase a lien as a kindness." "I phrase it accurately." The eyebrow went up again. This time it took longer to come back down. "Yes," said Blaze. "Good. When do you want the documents?" "By Friday. Send them through Gringotts under the seal of the Zabini house. Bode in the Foreign Accounts Office will know what to do with them. He has been instructed." "He has been instructed." "Yes, by you, by a third party in my employ." "Potter," said Blaze, and the right eyebrow had not yet returned to horizontal, "I am beginning to think the hat was wrong about you." "The hat was correct," Harry said. "I asked it to be." He left first this time. He did not look back. The owlery the next evening. The smell of owl droppings and feather was the most honest smell in the castle. Theodore Nott was already there. He had come up 15 minutes before the appointed time, the precise interval a cautious person would arrive to check for a trap. Harry had arrived 20 minutes before, for the inverse reason. They stood near the north window. The owls watched them with the polite disinterest of an audience that knew the play. Nott stood with his hands clasped behind his back. It was his father's posture identically. It was not a stance one fell into. "Potter," said Nott, "Nott, you will tell me what you want." "I will, and I will say number, possibly." The owl above the north window shifted its feet. A small white feather drifted down between them and settled on the stone where the long ambient record of the floor absorbed it. "I do not require you to betray your father," Harry said. Nott's expression did not change. Harry registered, however, that the thumbs behind his back had gone slightly tighter because the stance had risen by perhaps a centimeter at the elbows. "I require you to listen at his table," Harry said, "and tell me only what does not touch his life directly. Names of attendees, dates of gatherings, the general subject of discussion where it concerns matters outside your father's specific portfolio. Nothing that could be traced back to you, nothing that could indict him, nothing that could be used against him in a hearing. The general weather of the Dark Lord's court, that is what I require. You are asking me to spy on the Dark Lord. I am asking you to overhear. There is no difference. There is, in a court of law, a substantial difference. I am familiar with the difference. I will keep you on the correct side of it." Nott looked at last at the owls. "And in return," he said. "In return," Harry said, "when the Dark Lord falls, and he will fall, your father will have two choices. The first is Azkaban, where he will die in the cold within 3 years. The second is my mercy. Stand with me, and the second door opens. Why would your mercy be worth anything? Because I will be the one writing the next set of laws." Nott was silent for a long moment. Two owls exchanged places overhead. The smell of the owlery rose and fell with the rhythm of the high air. "You are a fourth year," said Nott, "telling me you will write the laws." "I am the senior heir of the House of Peveril," said Harry, "telling you what will be required to keep your father out of Azkaban. The math will work or it will not. If it does not, you are no worse off than you would have been. If it does, your father is alive, and you will not, when you come of age, be the man who watched his father die in a cell because he refused a meeting in an owlery." He had used the word father 3 times in the last 40 seconds. He had used it deliberately. He watched, dispassionately, the small tightening at the corner of Nott's jaw as the third repetition landed. He had calculated that 2 would be insufficient and 4 would be excessive. 3 was, he had judged, the load-bearing number. "Why me?" said Nott. "Because your father is in the inner circle and you dread it, because you have not yet been marked, because there is a window of perhaps 18 months before they will require you to be, and within that window your choice is still your own, because I do not believe you will take the mark, Nott. I believe you have been deciding in private for some time that you will not. I am offering you a place to stand when you make that decision a fact instead of a hope." The clasped hands behind Nott's back came apart. He brought them forward, one at a time, slowly, as though disassembling a piece of inherited furniture. He looked at his own hands briefly, as if he were noticing them, and then he looked back at Harry. "Yes," he said. "Good. How will I send you what I hear?" "You will not send, you will speak to Daphne once a week in a place you will name. She will pass it on. You will not write any of it down. You will not commit any of it to a piece of parchment, even briefly. You will not say any of it aloud in a room with a portrait on the wall. Are these conditions clear?" "They are clear." "Then we are agreed." Nott nodded. He did not put his hands behind his back again. He left first, walking down the long stone stairs with his hands at his sides, and Harry watched the gait change between the first step and the fifth as a man practiced a new way of carrying himself. That night Harry sat in the disused alcove on the second floor and wrote nothing down. He counted 4, Greengrass, Davis, Zabini, Nott. He counted what each cost. He counted what each owed. He counted what each could give without knowing they had given it. Then he stopped counting and went to bed and slept 5 hours, which was the number he had decided to allow himself. The corridor outside the Slytherin common room, the Saturday after, 10 minutes past the close of the Quidditch match. Slytherin had lost to Ravenclaw 240-90. The dungeon hallway moved in clots 3 and 4 together, speaking too low to hear. Harry waited in a recess of stone. Pansy Parkinson came down the corridor alone. She had stayed back from the others because Draco had not walked beside her down from the stands. He stepped out of the recess as she passed. She did not startle. She stopped. "Parkinson, Potter." She looked at him with the flat assessment of a woman pricing a horse. "What?" The iron cold of the dungeon's stone wall behind her was visible in the way she did not lean against it. She had stopped a foot in front of it, and she stood in the gap because to lean would have been to relax, and Pansy Parkinson did not relax in unscheduled conversations. "Draco Malfoy will not marry you," Harry said. Her face did not change. Her face was a face that had practiced not changing. "His father," Harry said, "is negotiating with the Greengrass line for Astoria. The contract will be sealed at Yule. The dowry is set at 20,000 galleons in the Greengrass orchards near Tinworth, plus the right of first refusal on the Greengrass seat in the Wisengamot in the event of the failure of the male line. The draft is in the 3rd revision." Lucius and Cyrus Greengrass signed the term sheet on the 22nd of October. The marriage is contingent on Astoria reaching her 16th birthday in good health, which the healers privately doubt. If she does not reach it, Lucius retains the dowry and is released from the contract. If she does, Draco is married to her within 6 months of her majority. "You have read the draft," she said, flat, not a question. "I have." "How?" "Through a clerk in the Greengrass solicitor's office who is in debt to a third party in my employ." She absorbed this. Her face still did not change. Harry watched, however, the place at the base of her throat where the pulse showed, and he registered the change there, from regular to a fraction quicker, then back. She had been told. She had not, until now, been told to her face. "You can break the negotiation," she said. "I can," Harry said. With a single letter to Lucius, written from the Slytherin seat, suggesting that the senior house of the founder objects to the cross-binding of 2 of his house's female lines under contractual terms that would, in the event of Astoria's death, leave the Greengrass dowry in Malfoy hands without issue. The Slytherin seat has not been used to object in 200 years. Lucius will know the moment he reads it that the seat is occupied again. He will withdraw the negotiation rather than test the question. "Or you can let it close, or I can let it close. And what do you want?" "I do not want your love, Parkinson, I want your tongue." Slytherin gossip every Friday, written down, names, pairings, slights, the unofficial topology of your house, who is sitting with whom, who is no longer sitting with whom, the pattern of the dinner table week to week. "You will not record opinions, only data. I do not require interpretation, I require coverage." She did not answer immediately. The pulse at her throat had quickened again and held this time. "Every Friday," she said, "every Friday. For how long?" "Until I tell you to stop, and in return you break the negotiation. In return I break the negotiation, and Draco's father is told in language he will understand that the Slytherin seat has noticed his son. After that, Draco's marriage prospects narrow considerably. There will be 1 girl in his year who is acceptable to the senior house. The other houses will receive a quiet word. You will receive by the Yule of your 7th year a contract of your own. From him. She went white. It was not a slow draining, it was a single change of pressure in the small capillaries of her face, all at once, as though a door had closed behind a candle. She did not stagger, she did not speak, she nodded once. "Yes," she said. She did not say anything else. She walked past him toward the common room entrance, and her gait was the same gait it had been when she had come down the corridor, which Harry noted as a fact about her training and not a fact about her feeling. The cold of the stone wall stood behind where she had been. He did not watch her go. He looked at the wall, at the place she had not leaned on, and he counted to 10 before he moved. He waited until she had passed the next torch before he moved. Mid-morning, in a library carrel on the second tier under the window that gave east onto the lake. Susan Bones was at the carrel, a treatise on warding precedent open in front of her. Harry had selected the carrel because Madame Pince could not see it from her desk. He sat down opposite her in the carrel's second chair and she looked up. "Harry," she said, surprised and then politely composed. The Hufflepuff badge on her collar was a small enamel thing, and her thumb sought it when she was thinking. Her thumb went to it now. "Susan, did you want the ward's book? I came for you." She set down her quill. Her face was open in the way a Hufflepuff face was open. Bones required not the dropping of a hammer but the laying down of a fact. "Your Aunt Amelia," he said, "would die for the rule of law." Susan's thumb left the badge, her hand stilled on the table. "Yes," she said, carefully. "The minister is preparing to bypass the DMLE under emergency powers. The draft is in the hands of his senior undersecretary. I have read it. It removes the director's authority over Aura deployment for any case the minister's office designates as a matter of public confidence. It removes, in practical terms, your aunt's ability to investigate any case the minister does not want investigated. It will be presented to the Wisengamot in the 3rd week of February when half the moderate seats are abroad." Susan's hand went slowly back to the badge. "You have read the draft," she said. The thumb on the badge had stopped moving. "I have. How?" "By an arrangement I will not describe to you, because you should not have to perjure yourself to your aunt about the source. The point is that I can give her 3 months' warning, sourced through you, source shielded. She will know there is a leak. She will not know it is me. She will believe, if you handle it correctly, that it is one of her own people who has begun to worry about the minister, which will, in addition to being useful to her, be useful to you, because it will give her reason to begin including you in conversations she has hitherto been having about you instead of with you." Susan looked at him for some seconds. The slant of light through the library window came in across the carrel at a long, shallow angle, and it lit the parchment under her hand, and a piece of dust in the light moved up the page and disappeared into the stack of books at the wall. "You have been watching my aunt and me," she said. "I have been watching your aunt. You I learned of separately. From whom? From a portrait in the second-floor corridor who hears more than she is given credit for, and from your own face on the morning the Daily Prophet ran the editorial about the DMLE 2 weeks ago. You read the editorial twice. You touched the badge 11 times. You did not eat the second piece of toast on your plate. I deduced that you were being prepared by your aunt and not consulted, and I confirmed it with one further inquiry." "What inquiry?" "I asked Hannah Abbott in passing whether you had written home recently. She said you had written and that you had not yet received a reply." Susan's eyes closed briefly. She opened them. "Turn," she said. "In return, when I make my move in the Wisengamot, your house abstains, not for me, just not against me. The Bones seat votes present and votes nothing, once, that is all. My house," she said, "is my aunt. I am aware. The abstention can be cast in your aunt's name without your direct participation if you advise her in the months before that the matter is procedurally unclear. You do not have to lie, you have to suggest. That is all I am asking." She looked at her hands. The thumb on the badge, 3 months warning, she said. 3 months. If she gets the warning, she can move resources before February. She can have the Wisengamot committee already in session by the time the draft is tabled. She can, yes. She did not say it for a moment. The slant of light moved a centimeter across her parchment. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He stood. He did not extend his hand. He had not extended his hand to any of them, and he did not begin with her. "You will tell her," he said, "next Saturday in person at the Hog's Head, where her appointment with you is already scheduled. You will tell her that you have heard, through a fellow student whose family has connections in the minister's office, a rumor about a draft. You will not name the student. You will refuse to name the student even when she asks, and she will ask. She will trust you because you have refused. That is the source shield, you understand." "I understand." "Good." He left her in the carrel under the slant of light and her thumb on the badge and the dust moving up the parchment toward the shelves. The Ravenclaw common room, very late, the Tuesday after the others had gone to bed. Harry had obtained admission to the Ravenclaw common room by waiting outside the door with a question the Bronze Eagle would not have asked of anyone already inside. It had been about the Goldbach conjecture. The Eagle had ruled it sufficient. Anthony Goldstein was the only person still up. He sat in the deep window seat that gave north onto the lake, with a roll of parchment across his knees and his quill in his right hand, and a pot of ink balanced on the sill at his elbow. The blue starlight through the Ravenclaw common room window lit half his face and left the other half in the dim shadow of the common room's banked fire. Harry crossed the room without sound. He sat in the window seat opposite Anthony's on the other side of the bay. Anthony looked up, he blinked. He did not register for some seconds that he was still holding the quill. The quill dropped a small bead of ink onto the parchment, and he saw eventually that it had done so, and he set the quill carefully on the sill. "Potter," he said, "Goldstein, you should not be here. I am here. The eagle let you in." It did. Anthony's brow furrowed. It was not a furrow of suspicion. Goldstein had been taught instead that the world rewarded the noticing of patterns, and he was noticing one now. "You want my map," Anthony said. "I do." He had not, Harry registered, needed to ask which map. There was between them only one. "It is not finished," said Anthony. "It does not need to be finished. I want what you have. And I want the 7 you have not yet found and will find by Yule." "How do you know there are 7? "Because you publish, in a private journal kept in your bedside drawer, a tally of identified weaknesses against estimated weaknesses, and the difference between the two numbers as of Sunday was 7. Anthony went very still. "I did not enter your dormitory," Harry said. "I did not read the journal. A house elf I spoke with mentioned, in passing, a parchment with 2 columns of numbers on the bedside table, which the elf had not disturbed in its dusting. I extrapolated the rest. The difference of 7 is in your handwriting, set in a corner of the 2nd column, with a circle around it. The circle is a habit you have when you have set yourself a target." "That is accurate, yes. You do not know what is in the map." I do not need to. I will trust the map when I have it. The trust will be a function of having read your published work on ward decay, which is competent. You will find the remaining 7 because you do not stop until a tally is closed, and you have set the tally at the estimated total, not at the number you currently have. The remaining 7 exist. You will find them. I want them. Anthony looked down at the parchment on his knees. His left hand slowly found his right hand and held it. He had remembered after some seconds that his hands existed. "In return," he said. "In return," Harry said, "I will see your thesis on the harmonic decay of layered ward systems published under your name with a Slytherin endorsement when the Slytherin seat is confirmed. The endorsement carries the founder's seal. It will be unprecedented in 2 centuries. The journals will print it. The continental academies will read it. The British ministry will be required, by the standing of the seal, to consider it. You will, by 23, hold a chair somewhere on the strength of 1 piece of parchment passed to me in this room. Academic immortality. For 1 piece of parchment." Anthony was silent for a long moment. The blue starlight on his face moved by a half-degree as a high cloud passed and uncovered the window again. "You are aware," he said, "that the map could be used to harm the school." "I am, and you are telling me that you will not use it that way." "I am telling you nothing of the kind. I am telling you that the school is going to be attacked by parties other than me before the end of next year, and that I would prefer to be standing in the corridor with the map when they arrive. That is the use I will put it to. I will defend with it. I will not breach with it. But I will not give you my word, because my word will not be worth anything to you until you have seen me keep it. I will give you the contract. The contract is the seal on the thesis. You can have the contract in your hand by Saturday. Drawn up by whom? By a solicitor in Diagon you have not heard of, paid by a third party I will not name, with the seal of the Peveril House left blank to be impressed when the petition is confirmed. The contract is binding now. The seal is the witness." "Yes," Anthony said. He had said it without preamble. Harry registered the absence of preamble as the signature of a Ravenclaw who had run the calculation in his head while the conversation was still in motion, and had arrived at the answer ahead of the spoken offer. Harry adjusted his model of Anthony Goldstein by 1 degree toward sharper, and he stood. "You will deliver the map," Harry said, "to Daphne Greengrass in this common room on the 2nd Saturday after Yule. She will know the parchment by a watermark of 2 stars I will describe to her separately. You will not deliver to anyone else. You will not deliver to me. The watermark is the proof of carriage. The contract will reach you by owl on Saturday morning. Have you any further question?" 1. "Yes. Are you planning to win?" "I am planning," said Harry, "not to lose." "There is a difference, there is. I have been writing a paper on the difference also." "I know," said Harry. "I would like to read it when it is finished." Anthony picked up his quill. He set it down again. He had remembered again that his hands existed. "Then we understand each other." "We do." He left the Ravenclaw common room by the door he had come in. The eagle did not require a question to let him out. The portrait at the foot of the spiral did not ask after his business. The blue starlight through the common room window behind him lit the parchment in Anthony Goldstein's lap and the quill on the sill beside it and the dropped bead of ink which had begun to dry. The week before Yule, an unused dungeon room, 3 corridors past the Slytherin entrance, that had been a potion store in the 18th century and had not been opened since. Harry had cleaned it himself by hand over the course of 3 nights. He did not want a house elf in the room, a lamp on a stool, a parchment on the floor weighted with 4 small stones from the lake. The ink was goblin-made and dissolved on the 3rd reading. Harry had paid 12 galleons for the vial. He read the parchment once. The names in the order he had written them, 8 nights apart in 6 different rooms. Daphne Greengrass, Tracy Davis, Blaise Zabini, Theodore Knott, Pansy Parkinson. Susan Bones, Anthony Goldstein. He read it twice. Greengrass, succession. Davis, survival. Zabini, inheritance. Knott, father. Parkinson, Draco. Bones, family. Goldstein, knowledge. He memorized the parchment. He had memorized the names a week ago. He memorized now the spacing, the place where his quill had skipped on the second name, the smudge on the fourth. He committed the artifact to memory because the artifact was about to cease to exist. He picked up the parchment from the floor. He held the corner of it to the flame of the lamp on the stool. The flame took the corner with the small, efficient appetite of fire for parchment. The ink went black before the parchment did, and then both went together, curling up from the corner in a slow spiral toward the rest of the page. The names blackened in the order he had read them, which was not the order he had written them, and he watched each name darken and lift in a small flake of ash toward the low stone ceiling. The flame ate the parchment. It took, from corner to corner, perhaps 14 seconds. When it had eaten all of the parchment but the last triangle that he held between his fingers, he dropped the last triangle into the lamp's well, and the flame finished it there. The cold satisfaction of a structure standing where there had been nothing rose in him once, and he registered it once, and he set it aside. The strongest network is the one that does not know it is a network. Daphne knew of Tracy because Daphne had sent Tracy. Tracy knew of Daphne. Neither of them knew of Zabini. Zabini knew of no one, not reported to Daphne, and did not know that anyone reported to Daphne but himself. Parkinson reported to no one but Harry, and would write her Friday parchment to a drop box in an unused classroom on the 4th floor that she believed to be his, and that was in fact a relay. Bones did not know she was a recruit. She believed she was a sympathetic ear. Goldstein had been told there was a contract and not a network, and would not ask further because the contract was sufficient to him. 7 people, 7 levers, 7 different reasons. None of them shared a meeting. None of them shared a code. None of them would, if questioned under Veritasrum tomorrow, name more than 2 other people on the list, and most would name only Harry, and Bones would name no one at all because she did not know there was a list to name. The lamp on the stool burned with the small, steady flame of a lamp burning paper. He had built his. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Infiltrating the Death Eaters. The fire in Snape's grate was burning low when Harry came in, and the edges of the flame had the green tinge that meant the flue had been used within the hour. Harry registered this and continued to the desk. He was past curfew by 40 minutes. He had not knocked. Snape looked up from a stack of essays, set down his quill, and did not speak. The stillness was complete, not the stillness of a man surprised, but the stillness of a man calculating what he was being shown. His hands rested where they had been when the door opened. They did not move. Harry unrolled the parchment he was carrying and set it on the desk between them. The Slytherin lineage chart, fetched from the Gringotts vault 3 days prior, with the Peveril branch traced in red ink and his own name terminating the senior line. The chart had been goblin stamped along the lower margin. The stamp was a small black worm with its tail in its mouth. "I am about to ask you a question," Harry said, "whose answer you will pretend you did not give." Snape's eyes flicked down to the parchment. They flicked back up. He said nothing. "I require an introduction to the Dark Lord's inner circle. As a recruited dark wizard of senior blood, you will sponsor me to Lucius Malfoy. You will not tell the headmaster. In return, when I sit the Slytherin seat in the Wisengamot, your house debt is forgiven." The silence that followed was longer than any silence Harry had ever heard in the castle. The fire ticked. A drop of green wax fell from a guttering candle and pooled on the brass holder. Snape's hands on the desk did not move. "Which house debt?" Snape said. "All of them." Snape inclined his head 1 degree. It was not assent. It was the gesture a man made when an opening move had been recognized as competent. Harry waited. He had counted the variables of this conversation for 11 weeks. He knew that Snape would not refuse on principle. He knew that Snape would test the terms. The boy has his mother's eyes. He has nothing else of her. The thought passed through Snape's head once complete and was not permitted to recur. He did not let it move his face. He looked at the chart, at the red ink terminus, at the goblin stamp. He looked at the boy standing on the other side of the desk with his hands at his sides and his weight even on both feet, and he priced the bargain. The Snape ledger, as Snape kept it, listed 17 debts owed by his house line to other houses of the Sacred 28, of which 6 were enforceable, 3 were potentially ruinous, and 2 were black family debts that had been transferred to the Malfoys at Bellatrix's marriage and now sat with Narcissa. The Slytherin seat had not been claimed in living memory. If it were claimed by a wizard willing to absorb those debts into his own ledger and discharge them at the seat's discretion, The value of that gesture, in pure arithmetic, exceeded the value of the secret Harry was asking him to keep. It also exceeded, by a margin Snape would not name, the value of Snape's standing oath to Dumbledore. The oath had been sworn over Lily's body and was, by its terms, an oath to protect her son. The oath did not forbid Snape to sponsor him to Lucius Malfoy. The oath did not require Snape to inform the headmaster of anything the boy did not wish the headmaster to know. Snape had reread the oath, in the silence of his quarters, every September for 14 years. He knew its margins. The arithmetic in Snape's preferred form ran as follows. The headmaster did not know the boy was the Slytherin heir. The headmaster could not know, having been barred at the records office by a filing Snape had observed on the docket without yet attaching the boy's name to it. The bar was an Occlumency Statutes filing of 1980-12, and the docket number had been processed in the second week of November. The boy in front of him had filed it. The boy in front of him had also fetched the lineage chart. The boy in front of him had walked into this office at 40 minutes past curfew and asked for an introduction to Lucius Malfoy. The chain of those three facts terminated at a single conclusion, which Snape did not state, and which the boy had not asked him to state. Snape revised the ledger one further line. Under the column marked cost, he wrote in his own internal hand, the headmaster. Under the column marked gain, he wrote the seat, the debts, and the son she asked me to protect, who is asking me, by his presence, to protect him in a way she did not foresee. The arithmetic balanced. He did not pretend it balanced cleanly. The terms have a price beyond the seat, Snape said. Name them. A potion. I will not name it yet. You will drink it when I brew it. And your wand for 3 minutes paired casting later in the week. I will not tell you what we cast until we cast it. Agreed, Harry said. He did not ask why. He did not ask what. He had not flinched at any of it. Snape's eyes narrowed by a fraction. He had expected a counter. He had not received one. Thursday, Snape said. After 10, bring nothing. Tell no one. If you are followed, do not enter. I will not be followed. Harry rolled the parchment, put it inside his robes, and turned to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. The chart stays with me, he said. You have already seen what you needed to see. He left. The door closed behind him with the soft click of a well-hung mortise. Snape sat where he was for a full minute, then drew a fresh sheet of parchment toward him, dipped his quill, and began to compose a letter that he would not send for 6 days. The hand that wrote did not shake. The fire in the grate burned low, and the green edges flickered, and the room was quiet. The potions classroom was warded on Thursday at 10:15. Snape sealed the door with 3 layers, a notice me not, a privacy ward keyed to his own signature, and a third Harry did not recognize, which Snape laid with 3 taps of his wand against the lintel, and a single syllable Harry could not catch. Cauldron on the central bench was small hammered copper and had been polished on the outside to a dull mirror. You will not assist, Snape said. You will sit there, you will not speak. If you speak, the potion fails and we begin again at first dawn, which I have no intention of doing. Harry sat. Snape brewed. The brewing took 2 hours and 17 minutes. Snape's hands moved over the ingredients with the economy of a man who had brewed worse things for worse reasons. Belladonna ground to a paste. A drop of phoenix tear, the smallest vial Harry had ever seen, dispensed by glass dropper. A flake of dragonhide, shaved from the inside of a glove. A single hair which Snape produced from a folded paper and added without identifying its source. Harry did not ask. He suspected it was Snape's own. He did not need to confirm. The recipe was not in any book Harry had read, and he had read the 4 published recipes for deep glamours and the 3 unpublished ones that circulated in copy among the older houses. The persona velata was a binding glamour, and a binding glamour required a donor, the hair, the implication being that the glamour took the donor's bone structure as its template and overlaid it on the drinker's signature. The donor's bone structure was not the donor's face. The drinker would not look like Snape. The drinker would look like a man who shared Snape's framework of cheek and jaw and brow without sharing any of Snape's particular features. It was an old technique. It had not been brewed in the British Isles for 60 years, by Harry's calculation, and the last brewer of record had been a man who had brewed it for a recruit of Grindelwald's. Harry registered the precedent and did not wait it. The potion finished as a clear liquid with a faint silver iridescence that moved across the surface like oil on water. Snape decanted it into 3 phials, set 2 aside in a locked box, and pushed the third across the bench. Drink it, Harry drank. The taste was cold iron, the way a knife tasted when one had bitten a knife on a dare as a child, except that there was no warmth of blood behind it. It was iron without flesh. It coated the back of his throat. It went down. He felt the magic catch at his sternum hook upward into his jaw and travel out along his cheekbones. His skin tightened. His hair lengthened by half an inch and shifted from black to a sandy brown. The bridge of his nose lifted into a thin, hawkish ridge. His shoulders broadened by a finger's width. He grew an inch. When his voice returned, it was a quarter tone lower. He looked into the polished side of the cauldron. The face that looked back was not his face. It was no one's face. It had the bones of a respectable old line, the kind of bones that turned up in tapestries. The scar was gone. The eyes were the same color and the same shape in the same set, but the bone around them had changed, and so even the eyes read as someone else's eyes. He looked at his reflection. He recognized nothing. He did not require recognition. He was the same beneath. The cancellation, Snape said. One word, Ifma, Old Norse. You will not pronounce it within earshot of any other wizard. The glamour holds for 6 hours. At 4 hours, you take a quarter file of the refresher. He tapped one of the locked-away files, and you have 4 more. If you fail to refresh by the 5-hour mark, the glamour begins to thin. If you reach 6 hours without refreshing, it collapses. If your face is being probed by legilimency at the moment of collapse, the collapse is felt by the probe as a wave of cold air. The probe will know you are wearing a glamour. The probe will not, by that fact alone, know who you are. Surface-deer probes, hold against surface-deer probes. Yes, the Dark Lord, if he chose to look, would see through it. He will not choose to look. He does not, by long practice, legitimize his own recruits at first audience. He considers it beneath him. He has the mark for verification when he chooses to give it. And the mark is given when, after the second ritual season, not before. Harry nodded. He pocketed the cancellation word, the refresher schedule, the failure mode, and the political timeline as 4 separate items in the same accounting. Your wand, Snape said. Harry placed it on the bench, but then towards Snape. Snape did not touch it. You will hold it. I will cast through your hand on my count. You will not resist. You will not assist. The casting requires only that your wand register the spell as having been performed by you. The spell will not be one you would have chosen. It will not harm anyone. It will appear in any subsequent priori incantatum of your wand as the most recent dark casting. The Dark Lord will, at some point, request such an audit. He will see what I require him to see. He will conclude what I require him to conclude, which is, that you have already killed. Harry's hand on the wand did not move. Whose name will the spell reach for? No one's. It will be cast at a stone. Then cast. Snape laid his fingers over Harry's on the grip. The Old Norse word he had used on the door came again, longer this time, and it was followed by an incantation Harry did not know, in a language he did not know, and the wand discharged a flat green light that hit the bench stone and went out without sound. The stone did not crack. There was no smell. The wand felt in Harry's hand exactly as it had felt before. Snape lifted his fingers away. It is done. The wand will read as having cast the killing curse last, at a target it did not destroy. The target will be read as having been a creature, not a wizard. That is the most plausible failed casting in the Dark Lord's view. He will conclude you are a young man who attempted and failed, and who came to him to learn to succeed. Useful. Yes. Harry pocketed the wand. The face in the cauldron was still not his face. Snape was already drafting the letter on the corner of the bench. He wrote on Hogwarts' letterhead. He wrote one line. A young man of Peveril descent and certain views requests audience. He is sponsored. He signed with a single letter S and folded the parchment and sealed it with black wax and no crest. It goes by school owl tomorrow morning, Snape said. Reply by his personal owl if it comes. It will come. Yes. The reply came the next afternoon. The owl was a velvet gray eagle owl with eyes the color of clarified butter, and it landed on the windowsill of the potions office at 3:45 with the punctuality of an owl that had not been kept waiting in 14 years. Snape took the letter from its leg. The owl departed without waiting for a reply. Snape read the letter once and handed it across the desk. The parchment was heavy. The seal was dark red wax and bore the Malfoy crest, a wyvern coiled around a wand. The wyvern's eye was a single dot of paler red, set deliberately, the way a portraitist set the gleam in a sitter's eye to indicate intelligence. Harry registered the eye, registered the weight of the parchment, and read. To the young gentleman of Peveril descent, sponsored by our mutual acquaintance, you are invited to dine at Malfoy Manor on the second Saturday of the Easter recess at 8 in the evening. The flue address is the reception grate keyed to your name for the evening. We dine simply when we dine alone. Lucius Malfoy. Harry read it twice. He folded it once along the existing crease and put it inside his robes. You will need an alibi, Snape said. I have arranged one. Pansy Parkinson will let it be known, by the usual channels, that I am spending Easter at the Greengrass townhouse on a study weekend. Daphne has confirmed she will be present in the townhouse for the duration, and that she will respond to any owl in my name. The story will hold through any inquiry short of Veritaserum. And the flu, you're great if you will allow it. Snape inclined his head, the same 1 degree. It was, again, the gesture of a competent move recognized. 8 in the evening, he said. You will arrive in glamour. You will not refresh in his manner unless you can do so unobserved. If you cannot, you cut the evening at 4 hours and excuse yourself on the pretext of a family obligation. Lucius will accept the excuse because Lucius accepts all excuses delivered without explanation by men he is considering as peers. Understood. Harry left. The Easter recess was 9 days out. He spent the 9 days walking the school grounds in the early mornings, rehearsing the bearing of a young man raised by older men in a country house. The bearing in which the shoulders sat back without being held back, the bearing in which the hands were set on the back of a chair before sitting, the bearing in which a servant was addressed without being looked at. He had read the relevant chapters of Wilberforce's comportment among the older houses in the Hogwarts library, and he had cross-referenced them against the 3 pensive memories Daphne had lent him from her grandfather's collection. He practiced until the practice was no longer practice. He practiced until it was the only way he stood. He also worked the ancillary preparation. Pansy was given the cover story over a breakfast that featured no mention of cover stories. She was given instead a casual remark that the Greengrass townhouse was, on the second weekend of recess, hosting a study circle on sacred 28 inheritance law, and that Harry intended to attend in pursuit of his Peveril petition. Pansy accepted the remark, repeated it within the hour to 2 of her preferred listeners, and the story was in circulation by lunch. Daphne in the corridor gave Harry a single nod, and the keyword that would activate the alibi at the Greengrass Inn. Tracy, who needed the least, was told the least. She was told only that Harry would be unreachable for 1 evening, and that she should not worry, which she understood to mean that she should worry about specific people on his behalf in his absence, and reach Susan if anything unusual occurred at the school. Theo was not told. Theo's father was a Death Eater of the Inner Circle, and Theo's father would not be told either, because the Inner Circle did not inform itself of recruitments before the recruit was ratified. Blaise was given a single sentence: I will be away the second Saturday. If anyone asks at the table, I am at Greengrass. Blaise inclined his head the half-inch that, among the Slytherin 5th years, served as the gesture of received instruction. Anthony's contribution was the warding of the flu. Snape's grate was warded by Snape, but the grates of the school were also monitored by an instrument in the headmaster's office that recorded outbound destination. Anthony had spent 2 weekends in the Ravenclaw library, cross-referencing the instrument's known interrogation patterns against the 8 categories of flu bypass listed in Mervyn's concerning the hidden hearth, and had identified a single hour of the Saturday, 8 to 9, in which the instrument's recording roll was changed by a house elf, and in which any outbound destination would be lost in the roll change. 8 to 9 was, by no coincidence, Harry had failed to engineer, the hour of his invitation. He arrived at Snape's grate at 4 minutes to 8. The flu arrival was Klein. He stepped out of the reception grate into a vestibule of black marble with a single brass umbrella stand and a single oil portrait of a sleeping wyvern. He brushed ash from his sleeve. The candelabras were silver and 10 generations old, and the air carried the unmistakable cold of a place that had not been laughed in for a century. A house elf in a clean white cloth bowed and indicated the corridor. He followed. Narcissa received him in the small drawing room. She was tall, pale, and impeccable, and she did not extend her hand. She inclined her head 1/2 degree less than Snape's and said, "Mr. Peveril, my husband is in the library. Tilly will show you through." "Madam." That was all of her. She withdrew through a side door and was gone. Harry followed the elf along a corridor of dark wood paneling and oil portraits in heavy frames, and the elf stopped at a door of black oak and tapped once. The door opened of its own accord. Lucius Malfoy was standing at a sideboard pouring 2 glasses of a wine the color of a healed bruise. He did not turn when Harry entered. He completed the pour. He set down the decanter. He turned. He was a tall man with white blonde hair drawn back from a high forehead, and he wore his robes the way a duelist wore his guard. His hands were long and clean. The cane he affected was in a stand by the hearth. He looked at Harry for 3 seconds before he spoke, and his eyes went in that time to the cut of the robe, to the polish of the boots, to the set of the shoulders, to the line of the jaw. He did not stare, he measured. "Mr. Peveril," Lucius said, "welcome, sir. Severus's introductions are uncommon. I am by long habit interested in any young man who can occasion one. He was good enough to write on my behalf. He was good enough to write a single sentence on your behalf. The economy of the sentence is itself a recommendation." Lucius handed Harry one of the wineglasses. Harry took it. He did not drink. Lucius noted that he did not drink. Lucius did not drink either. They both held the glasses. Your view of the Statute of Secrecy, Lucius said without preamble. It is a treaty that the wizarding world signed under the gun of its own fear. It has produced in 3 centuries a class of magical citizens who do not know what they are, and a class of mundane citizens who would dissect us if they knew what we were. The treaty is past its term. Renewing it serves no one but the timid. I have no view on whether it should be renegotiated or abolished. I have a view that it should not stand as it is. Lucius's mouth moved at one corner. It was not a smile. It was the muscular precursor to a smile that he had not yet decided to issue. And your view of Muggles, they are an inferior people whose inferiority is a matter of equipment, not malice. I have no quarrel with them. I have no use for them. If their numbers must be reduced for the wizarding world to breathe, the reduction is a matter of policy, not of pleasure. Pleasure in the reduction is the province of men who have not thought the matter through. Lucius's head tilted a fraction of an inch. It was, Harry understood, the gesture Snape had warned him to watch for. The head tilt was amusement in Lucius. Amusement was the warmest thing he was capable of expressing to a man he had known for under an hour. You are very composed, Lucius said. I was raised by men who valued composure. And those men were dead now, sir. The cadet branch of the Peverills did not survive the Second War. I am the last of that line. It was the story Snape had constructed, and it had been seeded into the Department of Records the previous month through a chain of intermediaries that ended at a clerk Harry had never met. The record was thin enough to be plausible and thick enough to be checked. Severus did not mention your vaults. He would not. Number he would not. May I ask what is in them? You may ask, sir. I will tell you the truth, which is that I do not know in full, having only recently come of inheritance. I know what was in them at the time of the last audit, which was 1978. The audit listed 1,007 galleons of fluid coin, a small library of unspecified provenance, 3 sets of family jewelry, and a single ledger of debts owed to my line by the older houses. The ledger has not been called. It has also not lapsed. Lucius's head tilted the same fraction the other way. The ledger of debts owed to a Peveril line, uncalled and unlapsed, was the kind of asset that altered a man's position at a table without his ever spending it. Lucius did not need to see the ledger. He needed only to know it existed. Come through, Lucius said. There are others waiting. He set down his wineglass and crossed to the far end of the library where a tapestry hung in front of a wall. He drew the tapestry aside. There was a door behind it. He opened the door. He gestured Harry through and went after him, and the tapestry fell back into place. The inner room was octagonal, low-ceilinged, paneled in the same dark wood and lit by a single chandelier of black iron and candles. The table was round. There were 9 chairs. 8 were occupied. One was Lucius's. Lucius indicated the empty seat between his own and a woman who was standing behind her chair. Bellatrix Lestrange did not sit when others sat. She stood behind her chair with both her hands on its back, and she watched the door, and she watched Harry come through it, and her eyes went from his face to his hands to his face again. Her hair was loose. Her teeth were good. She was thinner than the broadsheets had suggested, and she stood very still. The others were arranged around the table in the order Snape had described to Harry the previous evening, in case he should need to identify any of them at speed. Augustus Rookwood on Bellatrix's left, with a face that gave nothing, not even the impression of withholding. Mulciber 2 seats farther, leaning back in his chair with the loose posture of a man whose laugh came a beat earlier than the joke deserved. Avery between Mulciber and the Carrows, who glanced at Bellatrix every 11 or 12 seconds with the regularity of a clock that had been wound to do so. The Carrows, side by side, Amicus with his hands flat on the table, Alecto with hers in her lap, and a smile on her face that did not change throughout the meeting. At the head of the table, on a small lectern set on the wood, stood a roll of parchment in a brass clip. The parchment was the kind they called black-veined, charcoal dark, with thin lines of darker pigment running through it like the veins in a leaf. A quill stood upright in an inkwell beside the parchment. The quill was bone-white. Its barbs had been stripped to the spine. "This is the young Mr. Peveril," Lucius said, and sat. The quill moved. It dipped itself into the inkwell, lifted, and began to write on the black-veined parchment in a small spiked hand. The scratching was audible. It would be audible, Harry understood, in every pause of every conversation for the rest of the meeting. Peveril of the cadet branch. The quill paused. It dipped again. Continue. Lucius said, "Mr. Peveril, you will be examined briefly by those present. Answer as you would answer me." Bellatrix spoke first. She did not move from behind her chair. "Who was your line's most honored kinsman boy?" "Ignatus Peveril," Harry said, "who outwalked death himself." Bellatrix laughed. The laugh was a single sharp note, and the second note was bitten off before it could leave her throat, and her teeth came together on the silence after it. She inclined her head a fraction of an inch toward the parchment, which was already writing. Rookwood spoke next. His voice was a low, even baritone, and his face did not move when he spoke. Your view of the Department of Mysteries. A repository of artifacts the Ministry does not understand and cannot afford to release. I have no view on its dissolution. I have a view on its access, which is that it should be available to those with the breeding to handle what is in it. Rookwood's face did not move. The quill scratched. Mulciber laughed before he spoke, which was the laugh Snape had warned about, the laugh that came a beat ahead of any joke. And your view of the Mudbloods, Peveril, don't be coy. I have no view of them as individuals. As a category, they dilute the magical inheritance of the older lines. The dilution is gradual and reversible at the level of policy. I have no taste for the spectacle of correcting it by violence, but I have no objection to the policy. Mulciber's laugh continued for a second after the answer. The Carrows did not laugh. Alecto smiled. Amicus said in a voice that was higher than Harry had expected from his frame, reversible by policy. Hear that, Alecto? Alecto's smile did not move. Avery glanced at Bellatrix. Bellatrix was looking at Harry. Avery glanced at Bellatrix again. The questions went on for 20 minutes. Each member of the inner circle asked Harry one question, and Harry answered each question without inflection, and the quill scratched in the pauses, and the parchment filled with Voldemort's small spiked hand. Avery asked, when his turn came, whether Hadrian had served in any prior cause. Harry answered that he had not, that his guardians had withdrawn him from the country during the First War and had returned him only after the disappearance, and that his service, such as he intended to render, would begin with the Lord and not before. Avery glanced at Bellatrix. Bellatrix did not return the glance. Amicus asked whether Hadrian had a preferred field of magic. Harry answered that he had been raised on the older curses, the family curses of the Peveril line, which were 3 in number, one of which had been used in living memory and 2 of which had not, and that he had a working competence in standard dueling forms, a passable competence in wards, and an unfinished competence in necromancy, which his late guardian had begun to teach him and had not lived to complete. Amicus smiled. Alecto's smile did not change. The quill scratched out the answer in full and added one small additional spike at the end of the line, which Harry took for the equivalent of a marginal note. Alecto asked nothing. Bellatrix asked her second question. Who, she said, do you blame for your guardians? Harry answered without pause. Dumbledore for the policy, the Order for the prosecution, and the Aurors who served the Order under his direction by name, of whom I keep a list which is not relevant here. Bellatrix's mouth moved. It was not this time a smile and not a laugh. It was the movement of a woman registering that a recruit had supplied an answer that exceeded the question. She inclined her head a second time toward the parchment. The last question came from Lucius. You are aware, Lucius said, of what is required of you in the second ritual season. I am aware that I will be asked then to take the mark. I am aware that I am not asked now. You are aware correctly. Until then you have access to the inner circle and to the Dark Lord through this parchment. You have no mark, and the absence of the mark protects you from being identified as ours by those who would search. We find that absence useful in the early months for the work we put to our newest. I am at the Lord's disposal. The quill wrote one more line, and then it set itself back down in the inkwell, and the parchment ceased to fill. Lucius rose. You will have an errand by the end of the week. Severus will pass it to you. The meeting was over. Harry was in. The errand reached him on Wednesday by a sealed note Snape left in his potions kit during the lunch period. The note was short. Tobias Wittering, Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Junior Clerk, 3rd Sublevel Records, takes his weekly lunch at the Greenshank in Diagon Alley Thursdays 12 to 1. Subject to Imperious. Instruction, the docket of the Thistral Census, currently in the misfile tray for verification, is to be moved to long storage and forgotten. 3 months he is to remember misplacing it himself. He is not to be harmed. Harry burned the note. He went to the Ministry on Thursday under the glamour, refreshed at 4 hours, and waited in the Greenshank from 11:45 at a corner table with a copy of the Prophet held up at reading height. Wittering came in at 5 past, ordered a steak and kidney pie and a half of dark beer, and sat at his usual table by the window. He was a man of about 30, balding early, with ink stains on the cuffs of his left sleeve and a slight squint in his right eye from years of close reading. The pub smelled of pipe smoke. The pipe smoke had a heaviness that suggested a particular Cornish blend favored by older clerks. Harry registered the smell. He folded the paper. He stood, made his way past Wittering's table, and let his wand tip clear his sleeve as he passed. The Imperious caught Wittering on the back of the neck. Wittering's eyes did not change. His hand continued lifting the half of beer to his mouth, and he drank, and he set the glass down, and Harry, who had taken the seat opposite him, said in a voice pitched lower by a quarter, "You will finish your lunch. You will return to your office." You will take the Distral census docket from the misfile tray, and you will place it in long storage under the wrong subclass. You will mark it as having been misplaced by yourself. You will not remember meeting me. You will remember misplacing the docket, and you will be mildly annoyed at yourself for it. Confirm. I will finish my lunch. I will return to my office. I will take the Distral census docket from the misfile tray and place it in long storage under the wrong subclass. I will mark it as misplaced by myself. I will not remember meeting you. I will remember misplacing the docket. I will be mildly annoyed. Good. Harry released the Imperious. Wittering blinked once, looked at his beer, took another pull, and resumed eating his pie. Harry stood, paid his own tab at the bar, and left. The Diagon Alley afternoon was bright. Harry walked from the Greenshank to the Leaky Cauldron at a pace that did not draw the eye. He had crossed a line. He had known the line was there. He did not look back at it. He noted the calculation as he walked. The clerk was unharmed. The docket would be lost for 3 months. The policy that would follow in 3 years would harm specific people whom he by then would be in a position to protect or not. The protection, if it came, would come from a position of access he could not have built any other way. The choice to walk this path was the choice to be the man who could, later, refuse the worse path. It was also the choice to be the man who could not, later, refuse anything at all. He did not know which of those it would prove to be. He did not let the not knowing soften the assignment. The Imperious itself was, as a piece of magic, more straightforward than the published commentaries suggested. It required intent, attention, and the willingness to subordinate another person's volition to one's own for as long as the casting held. Harry had no objection to the willingness. He had objection, in principle, to the use of it on a person whom he did not know to have done him or his any wrong. The objection was, in the abstract, a moral objection. In the immediate, it was a calculation of risk. The clerk, if he ever recovered the memory of the casting, would constitute a witness, and the clerk had been told to misplace the docket and to be annoyed at himself for it, and the clerk would not therefore recover the memory unless someone subsequently went looking for it. Someone might subsequently go looking. Harry calculated the probability at 1 in 9, weighted by the political importance of the Distral census docket in the next 3 years, and accepted the probability as a cost of the operation. He had also calculated before the casting the number of clerks of comparable position who could have been used in Wittering's place, and had found that the inner circle had chosen Wittering specifically. Wittering had no family. Wittering had no political affiliation. Wittering was, in the language of the trade, expendable in a way that would not generate inquiry. Harry registered that he had been asked to perform an Imperious that the circle considered cheap, and that the circle had not considered the question of how Hadrian Peverell would perform on a more expensive subject. They would test him on that in a subsequent errand. He prepared in his head for the second errand and the third and the fourth, and for the point at which the errands would become indistinguishable from the inner circle's actual work. He prepared also for the point at which he would refuse one. He did not yet know where that point was. He suspected he would not know until he was past it. He took the flu back to Hogwarts from the Leaky's grate at 1:45. He was in his afternoon charms class by the second bell. The second audience was arranged the following Sunday by an owl from Lucius delivered to Snape and passed on without comment. The audience was in the Manor Library at 9 in the evening with the snake quill recording. Harry arrived in glamour through the reception grate. Tilly met him. Tilly took him to the library. Lucius was at the sideboard with the same wine. The wine was not poured for Harry this time. The black veined parchment was on a small lectern by the hearth. The bone-white quill was upright in its inkwell. The chair on Lucius's left was set out for Harry. Harry took it. He is satisfied with the errand, Lucius said. He will speak to you in his fashion. Answer the parchment as you answered the circle. The quill moved. It dipped, lifted, and began to write. What is your house? The House of Peverell, Cadet Branch. What is your view on the statute of secrecy? It is past its term and serves the timid. What is your view on the Wisengamot? It is a body of seats held by men who have forgotten the obligations of their seats. The seats are valid. The men are not in the main worthy of them. The body can be reformed by the assertion of the senior seats, properly claimed in proper number. The quill paused. It dipped. Lucius did not move. What is your view on Albus Dumbledore? Harry answered without pause. He is a great wizard and a small statesman. His greatness has served him in the duel, and in the duel by letter that constitutes most public politics in our age. His smallness has served his enemies, of whom I count myself one, because he has confused the protection of the magical world with the protection of his own conception of it. He is a legilimens of the first rank, a politician of the second, and a strategist of the third. He has won by virtue of opponents who underestimated his patience. He has not yet faced an opponent who matched his patience. I have no view on his removal. I have a view on his isolation." The quill stopped. It hung above the parchment, motionless. The pause that followed was the longest pause of the audience. Harry sat. Lucius sat. The quill hung. The fire in the hearth ticked. The black-veined parchment was still. The quill dipped. It wrote, "You will attend the next ritual in person. Bellatrix will portkey you with the inner circle. The location is the Department of Mysteries. The date is the 7th night after the full moon of May." Harry inclined his head 1 degree to the parchment, as if to a man. He did not speak. The quill set itself back in the inkwell. The parchment was rolled up by an invisible hand, and the brass clip closed over it, and Lucius rose, and Lucius walked Harry to the door of the library, and Lucius said at the door, "He likes you. I am at his disposal. You are. The next ritual is not a small one. You will not be asked to act. You will be asked to be present. Presence at the 7th after full moon ritual is in itself a step. You understand. I understand. Severus will brief you on dress. There is a robe. There is an order of standing. You will be at the back. Bellatrix will be at the front. You will not speak. You will not move until the Lord moves. If you must move, do not move." "I will not move." Lucius's head tilted the fraction of an inch. "Good night, Mr. Peveril." "Sir." Harry was flued back to Snape's grate by 10. He cancelled the glamour in the potions office with the Old Norse word. His face came back to his face. His hair fell back to black. The scar returned where it had been. He looked at himself in the polished side of the cauldron briefly and registered that the face that looked back was his own. He had access. He had a date. He had a location. He had the calendar of the Second War in his hand, and the 7th night after the full moon of May was 8 weeks away, and the Department of Mysteries was a building he had been in once before in a dream and would be in again under his own power. The trap was set. He had built it from inside. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, The Department of Mysteries Hunt. The Room of Requirement had given him what he asked for, a slate floor wide enough to spread 6 rolls of parchment edge to edge, 4 oil lamps at the cardinal points, and silence. Harry weighted the corners of the diagrams with stones the room had also provided, because he had asked for stones, and because a draft would cost him 40 minutes of realigning ink lines that converged within a millimeter. Anthony Goldstein drew like an architect, red ink for masonry, blue ink for warded zones. Black ink for doors, annotations, and a margin script so tight Harry had to line in. He had paid Anthony for those diagrams in the only currency Anthony asked, a standing promise that if anything happened to Anthony's mother in Sheffield during the next year, Harry would route the Peveril Seat's medical retainer to her physician without asking why. Harry had signed it. He had meant it. It had cost him nothing he was not already willing to spend. Level 9, the Department of Mysteries. 12 doors arranged around a circular antechamber that rotated when the entrance door closed. An old anti-intrusion charm built by an unspeakable named Falco Izalin in 1772 and never overwritten. 9 of the 12 doors were sealed against forcible entry by ministry magic older than the building above them. Doors that opened only when the chamber wanted them to, and the chamber's wants were not a thing one negotiated with. 3 doors were habitually unlocked: the Hall of Prophecy, the Time Room, the Death Chamber. Harry traced the third with a piece of chalk Anthony had also supplied, white chalk against black slate, and the chalk left dust on his fingers as he worked. The Hall of Prophecy could not hold a soul right. The crystal spheres in the hall were inert recording media. Any working that strained against them would shatter half the shell files in the first minute. Voldemort would not risk that. The Time Room could not hold a soul right either. The time turners in that chamber were calibrated to a closed temporal loop, and any divergent ritual magic introduced into a time room collapsed the loop and threw the working back to its caster in fragments. There were 3 documented cases. Voldemort had read all 3. Harry was certain of this because the marginalia in Voldemort's library at Malfoy Manor, which Harry had skimmed during the Inner Circle meeting under the persona Velata glamour while pretending to study a tapestry, included a tight, precise hand annotating exactly those 3 cases. That left the Death Chamber. The Death Chamber was an amphitheater. Anthony's diagram showed it in elevation as well as plan. Ascending tiers of black stone, 23 rows from the floor to the gallery, a central dais of polished basalt 16 feet across, and the veil at its center. Anthony had written gauze of nothing, swaying without wind in a tighter script than the rest of the legend, and Harry recognized the quote. It was Callias Vance, 1697, on the geometry of soul-anchored spaces, a monograph Anthony had located in the restricted section by way of an interlibrary transfer Madame Pince had not been told to refuse. Anthony had cross-referenced Vance against 3 later unspeakables. The eastern arch of the death chamber was, in every soul rite recorded in monograph or marginalia, the position of the sacred beast. The southern arch was the position of the celebrant. The western arch was the position of the witness. The northern arch was where the working entered the chamber and where, if the working failed, it left. He marked the eastern arch with a small black square, Nagini's position. He marked the southern arch with a circle, Voldemort's position. He marked the dais and the veil with a single chalk line each, because the dais was the dais and the veil was the veil, and neither needed embellishment. He stepped back and looked at the geometry on the floor. The amphitheater geometry was identical to a chamber he had walked in a scar dream 3 nights ago. The dream had given him the rows of black stone, the dais, the swaying veil, and a figure in a robe so dark the torchlight had passed across it without catching. The dream had not given him the eastern arch as the snake position. The dream had given him a snake at the southern arch where Voldemort stood. The convergence was partial. He noted it without naming what the convergence confirmed. He noted only that 2 independent sources, Anthony's research and a scar dream he had not asked for, placed him in the same room with the same geometry, and that the difference between them was the placement of the snake. The snake would move. The snake was animate. The southern arch was Voldemort's position because Voldemort would stand there. The eastern arch was Nagini's position at the start of the rite, before she was called to the celebrant's side. There was a window, Anthony had estimated it from Vance's chronology of comparable rites, of approximately 11 to 14 minutes between the snake's entrance at the eastern arch and her summoning to the dais. 11 minutes was the lower bound, 14 was the upper. He took the lower because margins were what you spent on the lower bound, not the upper. He considered the antechamber rotation. The Ezelin charm spun the 12 doors on a fixed offset each time the entry door closed. The offset was not random. It was driven by a small ledger of prior entries, which the unspeakables kept current. The offset for the ritual night would be set by Voldemort himself, who would walk in first and lock the rotation behind him. Harry would arrive by portkey, not through the entry door, and the rotation would not lock against him. That was the design of the Death Chamber's northern arch. It received portkey-bound parties and did not trigger the spin. He had verified this from a 1903 Unspeakable's pension memoir Anthony had located in a footnote chain that began with a paper on warding theory and ended, 4 citations later, in the memoir's Chapter 8. He took the verification at face value because the chain was tight and because the memoirist had died in 1907 and could not be cross-questioned. The chalk dust had worked its way into the creases of his palm. He flexed his hand once and looked at the white powder caught in the lines. He let it stay. He rolled the diagrams in the order he would need them. Level 9 antechamber on the outside, Death Chamber elevation second, Death Chamber plan third, the goblin ink overlay of Vance's soul rite chronology innermost, and stored them in the cedar tube the room had also provided. What changed? The eastern arch was where the snake would be at the 11th minute. He had 11 minutes from her entrance to her summoning, and within that window he had everything he needed. He left the diagrams and went to the second piece of work. The ledger had been in his head since Yule, when Bellatrix had said Horcrux in passing at a small dinner Snape had brought him to under the persona Velata, and Harry had walked back to his rooms at 3 in the morning and asked Anthony that same week to find the word in the restricted section without giving the reason. Anthony had found it in 11 days. Harry had read what Anthony brought him in one night. He sat now on the slate floor with a fresh sheet of parchment, not goblin ink this time, because this list he wanted to keep, and wrote the ledger in his own hand. He wrote it once in clean prose because he had built it in his head 100 times and the writing was only confirmation. The diary was destroyed. It had been destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets in Year 2 by a basilisk fang driven through its center, and the boy who had done that had not known what he was destroying. The boy had known a girl was dying and a memory was killing her, and the fang was the only weapon to hand. The boy had not known the word Horcrux. The boy who wrote this ledger knew it now. The diary's destruction had been an accident in the strict sense, an unintended consequence of an intended act. The diary counted. 1. The ring. The ring had been located by Albus Dumbledore in the Gaunt Shack in late summer of the previous year. Dumbledore had handled it. Dumbledore had touched it with his right hand. Dumbledore's right hand was now blackened to the wrist and concealed under the sleeve of his outer robe in late evenings, when he thought himself unobserved. Harry had this from a Hogwarts house elf named Mippy who served the headmaster's evening tea and had been asked, by a polite student who had brought her a thimbleful of nettle wine at Yule, whether the headmaster's hand was well. Mippy had answered that the headmaster's hand was not well, sir, not well at all, sir, and Mippy is not to look at it, sir, but Mippy looked. The ring's stone, Mippy reported, was black and cracked. Dumbledore had located the ring and broken its anchor. 2. The locket. The locket had been taken from the cave by Regulus Black in 1979 and brought to number 12 Grimmauld Place, where Creature had been ordered to destroy it and had failed because nothing Creature knew could touch the locket's protection. The locket had passed to Mundungus Fletcher's hands in the autumn cleaning, and Mundungus had sold it to Dolor's Umbridge for 40 galleons, and Umbridge had hung it from her neck as a family heirloom, and Creature, under the Black family heir authority Sirius Black, had signed over to Harry by writ at Yule, witnessed by Andromeda Tonks and recorded with Gringotts as a precaution Sirius had not understood the full weight of. Had retrieved it 2 weeks ago from Umbridge's office in the 3rd hour of the morning, while Umbridge slept under a draught of living death that Tracy Davis had brewed and labeled as pepper-up. The locket had then been doused in basilisk venom drained from the fang Harry had pulled from the basilisk's jaw at 12 and kept wrapped in oilcloth in a trunk in his dormitory ever since. The locket had screamed. The locket had gone silent. 3. The diadem. The diadem of Ravenclaw had been hidden in the room of requirement in its hide things configuration in 1944 by Tom Riddle, who had walked back into this very room at age 16 and placed it on a bust of an ugly warlock between a stack of cauldrons and a moth-eaten chess set. Harry had walked the hide things configuration in March, looking for a fairly specific thing, a place to put diagrams he could not let his roommates find, and had walked past the diadem twice before he understood what was on the bust. He had taken it, he had doused it. The diadem had screamed in a voice that was almost a woman's and had gone silent. 4. He paused. 4 was the easy count. 4 were dead. 2 were trivial, the diary and the diadem. 2 had required setup, the locket and the ring he had not destroyed himself, but the ring was destroyed, and the ledger did not care who held the hammer. 5 remained on the original count, of which 1 was already conditionally accounted for if the ring was indeed broken, which Mippy's testimony in Dumbledore's hands suggested but did not strictly prove. He held the ring at 90% destroyed. He proceeded as if it were 90, not 100. The remaining 10% he would resolve by Susan's aunt's orders, recovering the ring from Dumbledore's office in the aftermath, when the aftermath came. He held 1 further line on Dumbledore. The headmaster's hand had been blackened in late summer and had not been healed by Christmas. The rate of progression suggested a curse of the kind that ran on a clock and not on a variable. Snape had attended the headmaster's office in late evenings on the 3rd Tuesday of every month since October. Snape was buying time on a clock, and the clock was the headmaster's life. Harry took this as data, not as cause for action. The headmaster's clock was not his to wind or to stop. The cup. The cup was in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts, sub-vault 721, behind a Gemino curse so dense the goblins had stopped offering audit services to the Lestranges in 1978. The cup was Hufflepuff. Theo had heard his father describe it at a family supper as the Lord's Lesser Cup, and Harry had triangulated Lesser against the diary, the ring, the locket, and the diadem, and concluded that the cup was the 5th in Voldemort's original sequence. 5. The body of Voldemort, regenerated in the graveyard at Little Hangleton in June of the previous year using the bone of the father, the flesh of the servant, and the blood of the enemy. The body was a Horcrux because the soul fragment in the body anchored all the others. The body was the master Horcrux. The body counted as one of the 7 only by the convention that you counted soul fragments, not vessels, and Voldemort had been generous with his soul. 6. Nagini, the snake, the last animate Horcrux, the most recent made, Harry calculated from Snape's careful sideways mention of a working at Albania in 1995, after the regeneration and before the inner circle reformed. Nagini was the 7th. The 7th would be at the death chamber on the ritual night at the Eastern Arch, 11 to 14 minutes before her summoning. He wrote the count at the bottom of the parchment, and then crossed the bottom out and wrote a single line in its place. 2 of 7 remain destroyable this week. 1 of 7 will be destroyed in the same hour as the body. The air in the room was cold. He took a breath, and the breath felt iron in his mouth, the iron tang of cold air over the back of his tongue, and beneath it the chalk dust drying his lips. He held the breath for a 4 count and let it out for a 6 count. The account was closing towards 0. He folded the parchment in thirds and burned it in the lamp at the eastern point of the room. The ash fell on slate. He swept it into a corner with the edge of his hand. He left the room and let the door unmake itself behind him. What changed? 5 of 7 were down. 2 were a week's work and an hour's work in that order. The hour was the hour the world realigned. 2 nights later he met Daphne and Theo on the second-floor corridor outside the unused Charms classroom and walked them up to the 7th floor without speaking. He did not need their voices yet. He had their voices when he needed them. In the room, reconfigured as a small, windowless study with 3 chairs around a low table, he laid out the Lestrange vault writ on the table between them and waited for Daphne to read it. She read it in under a minute. Daphne read fast because she had been trained to read fast. Her father had taught her at 8 that a contract you read slowly was a contract you had already lost, because the person across the table watched your eyes move and learned from them. Daphne's eyes did not move on the writ, they walked across it. My father has filed the audit motion under House Greengrass's escrow privilege, she said. Scarnet Gringotts is the goblin assigned. He has met you once. He has. He approved you. He found me acceptable, a small lift of the corner of her mouth gone in half a second. Scarn approves of no one. Acceptable from Scarn is approval. Theo, beside her, said nothing yet. He was holding a piece of parchment in his lap, a copy of his father's family supper menu from a Tuesday in March, the menu his mother kept in her diary and Theo had copied without his mother knowing. The menu had the line fish in the manner of the Lord's Lesser Cup against the 3rd course, which Theo's father had ordered out of a private joke the family did not share. Theo had triangulated that joke. Theo had given Harry the cup. You will not be in the vault, Harry said to Theo. You have already done your part is finished. Do you understand the order? I understand, Theo said. Say it back. My part is finished. I am not in the vault. Good. Daphne folded the writ in thirds with the same motion Harry had folded his ledger. 3 in the morning, the night of the new moon. Scarn will meet you at the cart platform with the sub-key. Yes. What do you do if the cup is not in 721? I walk out and we revise. What do you do if Scarn changes the audit terms at the platform? I walk out and we revise. What do you do if the cup is in 721 and the Gemino is denser than Anthony estimated? I have a 3-tiered nullification. Anthony built it for the upper bound of the curse density recorded in the Black Family Vault audits, which is approximately 1.8 times what the Lestrange Vault is rated at. If the Gemino exceeds that bound, I walk out and we revise. You walk out and you revise. 3 times you have asked, 3 times the answer is the same. She nodded once. Daphne's nods were never twice. Good, Theo. Theo looked up. You are to do nothing, Daphne said, and it was the first time in Harry's memory that Daphne had taken a line from him and said it to a 3rd person, and Harry registered it without comment because Daphne would have said it whether he had taught her the line or not. Your part is finished. You are reading a book in your room on the night, and the door is locked, and your father is wherever he is. My father is at the death chamber on the night, Theo said. Yes, he will not come home. Probably not. Theo's hands were flat on his knees. They had been flat on his knees the whole conversation. He did not lift them. He said, in the same voice he had used at 11 when he had told Harry on the Hogwarts Express that his father had hit his mother twice the week before. Good. Harry left them in the room and went down to the dungeon. 2 nights after that, at 3 in the morning, he stood at the cart platform of Gringotts under the Slytherin signet placeholder writ, a thin silver band the goblins had issued in lieu of the Peveril signet, which was still missing, with the understanding that the placeholder carried Lex Antiqua weight until the proper signet was recovered. Scarn met him with the sub-key. Scarn was 4 feet tall, gray-skinned, with eyes the color of old pewter and a habit of not blinking. Scarn said Heir and Harry said Master Scarn, and the cart took them down. The cart descended at a gradient steeper than the public lines because the Lestrange vault sat in the old gallery, below the Dragon Pen tier, where the air was colder and the air pressure spell that kept the lower vaults breathable was running on a charm renewed in 1812. Scarn rode without holding the rail. Harry held the rail because he had not been raised by goblins, and the cart took the lower turns at a speed that would have thrown a man who was not braced. They did not speak on the descent. Goblins did not speak on descent. The silence was a courtesy to the iron of the cart, which the goblins held to remember its origin. Vault 721 opened on Scarn's sub-key and Harry's writ in a sequence the goblins had used for 900 years. The door swung inward. The vault was gold-flooded to the height of Harry's knees, and the gold was multiplying as he watched, each coin he stepped on becoming 2, the 2 becoming 4, the 4 becoming 8, until the floor where he had stood 3 seconds ago was a small mountain. The Gemino curse worked on contact. The curse was rated, as Anthony had said, at 1.1 times the standard residential Gemino baseline. Harry was rated to handle 1.8. He pulled Anthony's nullification rune from his pocket, a copper coin engraved on both faces, waited to fall obverse up and tossed it ahead of him. The coin landed obverse up, and a 1-meter radius of the gold around the coin stopped multiplying. The gold within that radius lay still. He stepped into the radius. The cup was on a shelf above the still gold. Small, gold itself, two-handled, with a badger engraved on its belly. It was so small that for a moment he could not believe it had earned the word Horcrux, and then he remembered that Horcruxes earned the word by what was inside them, not by their size, and the cup had earned the word the way every small thing in Voldemort's collection had earned it, by being the right small thing. He took the cup off the shelf with his gloved hand. He set it on the still gold within the radius of Anthony's coin. He pulled the vial of basilisk venom from his inner pocket, black glass, sealed with wax he had melted himself, and broke the wax with his thumbnail. He poured the venom into the cup. The cup screamed. The voice was not Voldemort's. The voice was not Hufflepuff's. The voice was a thin layered sound that contained, Harry thought, every voice the soul fragment in the cup had touched since it had been forged. The voices of the cup's victims, perhaps, or the voices the fragment had imagined for itself in the long dark of the vault. The scream rose for 3 seconds. It cut off mid-note. The cup, when Harry lifted it, was cold. The gold inside had blackened to slag. He set the empty cup back on the shelf where he had found it. He turned. Scarn was watching him from the vault door, expressionless. "The audit is complete," Harry said. "Nothing has been removed." "Nothing has been removed," Scarn agreed. The floor of the vault was cold through Harry's boots. He felt the cold come up through the leather as he walked out. He felt it the way he felt every confirmed datum that fell into place as something that did not have to be named, but which named would be called the satisfaction of an account closing toward 0. 6 of 7. 3 remained. 1 was a snake. 1 was a body. 1 was the man he was about to be. He walked out of Gringotts at 4 in the morning with nothing in his pockets the goblins could object to. What changed? 6 of 7. The cup had screamed and gone silent. The Lestranges' vault records would show an audit completed without removal. The Lestranges, when they next visited their vault, would find an empty cup on a shelf above a small patch of blackened gold, and they would not understand what they were looking at until it was too late to matter. The following night the room rearranged itself for the 7. He had not had to ask. He had walked the corridor with the diagrams under his arm, and the room had pulled stone out of itself in the configuration he needed. A long table of cold gray stone, 7 high-backed chairs, a single oil lamp at the head of the table, the walls bare. He sat at the head. He did not stand. Standing was a posture for someone who needed to perform authority. Sitting was a posture for someone who already had it. They came in over a span of 7 minutes, one at a time, on a schedule he had given each of them and which none of them had compared with the others. Daphne first, Anthony second, Susan third, Blaise fourth, Tracy fifth, Pansy sixth, Theo last. They sat where they sat and did not look at each other because he had told them not to and because they trusted that the instruction was for cause. He leaned forward on his elbows and set his palms flat on the stone of the table. The stone was cold under his palms. He did not lift them. "Daphne," he said, "you hold the Wisengamot logistics for the morning after. Prearrange the emergency session protocols with Ogden's clerk under the standing precedent of an unforeseen attendance. You will file the precedent reference but not the cause. You will not say my name. The session opens at 9. Daphne nodded. "Tracy, you secure the Hogsmeade evacuation route for the students under the cover of a fire drill protocol. You will file through Professor McGonagall on the basis of a structural concern in the dungeon arches. The documentation is in the folder I left in your trunk between your 2nd and 3rd potions textbook. The concern is genuine. The arches genuinely have a structural defect. Anthony confirmed it 3 weeks ago. The drill is timed for 10 o'clock on the night. By 11, the students are in Hogsmeade and the 3 broomsticks has been notified to expect them. Yes, Blaise, you ensure your mother's manor in Florence is a fallback safe house with a portkey keyed to my signet. You will not tell your mother why. You will tell her it is a courtesy from the Slytherin seat, and that the Slytherin seat is offering the courtesy because the Zabini name has stood at the edge of the Italian Wisengamot for 3 centuries and the courtesy is overdue. Your mother will accept the framing. Your mother accepts framings. She does. Theo, stay out, do nothing. You are not to be near your father that night. You take the train home on the Friday afternoon and you go to your room and you lock the door. You read a book. The book is Curses and Countercurses because your father bought it for you when you were 9 and your father will look at the spine when he looks at the room later and he will know you were home. The order is do nothing. It is the hardest order I will give you. It is the most important order I will give. Say it. I do nothing, Theo said. His hands were on the table now. They were not shaking. He had practiced, again. I do nothing. Good, pansy. You are in the Slytherin common room from 6 in the evening to midnight running ordinary gossip. You are the alibi for me and for Daphne. You will not know what we are doing. You will know only that we were studying together in the dungeon library. You will mention it twice, once at 8 and once at 10, in a tone that is neither rehearsed nor important. You will mention it to Millicent Bulstrode at 8 because Millicent will repeat it without thinking, and to Vincent Crabbe at 10 because Vincent will mention it to his father in his next letter, and his father will mention it to my enemies. Pansy's eyes were bright. Pansy enjoyed being the one in the room. 8 to Millie, 10 to Vincent, studied in the dungeon library. Susan. You warn your aunt the DMLE will be needed at the atrium of the ministry at midnight. You give her the date, you give her the level, you source shield. You tell her the source is a young person who has earned the right to be believed once. You do not name me, you do not hint at me. If she asks, you say I will tell you who after. She will accept that. She will, Susan said. Susan said it because Susan knew her aunt better than anyone in the room except Susan's aunt, Anthony. You open the visitor lift to level 9. You jam the alarm by the coil loop you showed me in March. You are not at the ministry on the night. You are in the Hogwarts library between 10 and 1 with 3 books open in front of you and the Hogwarts wards as your alibi. The wards record student presence in the library to the minute. You will not be near the ministry. The visitor lift will open because the coil loop will hold. It will hold. You all have your pieces. None of you has more than your own piece. You will not compare pieces. You will not ask what the others have been told. After the night, you will compare nothing for 1 week until I tell you the silence is over. He let his palms come off the stone. The stone had warmed where his hands had been. I am asking each of you in turn. Daphne, yes. Tracy, yes. Blaze, yes. Theo, yes. Pansy, yes. Susan, yes. Anthony, yes. The single oil lamp at the head of the table did not flicker. The stone was cold under his hand as he leaned on it. What changed? The 7 were aligned. None of them had asked why beyond what they needed. The satisfaction of that did not need to be named. 2 days before, in the corridor between the potions classroom and the dungeon stair, Severus Snape passed him. Snape moved the way he always moved, a stillness that traveled. His head did not turn, his stride did not break. He spoke under his breath as he passed, in a voice pitched for 1 set of ears. Whatever you do, Snape said, do not look at the veil. He was 3 paces past before Harry registered which veil. He did not turn to ask, he did not slow, he kept walking toward the stair. Snape's robes had smelled of old smoke as he passed. He had been burning something private. He burned things private about once a month. Harry had catalogued the smell pattern in 2nd year, before he understood what Snape was, and the burnings happened in the hours after the headmaster's office had been visited, and before the dungeon classroom had been opened for morning. The smell was juniper and burnt parchment, and something acrid that Harry suspected was a memory vial cracked over flame. The smell took 20 minutes to clear his robes. He had been carrying the smell for 15. Snape would not have said what he had not paid for. The warning was a debt repaid. Harry had paid the debt months ago, in a piece of information about Lily Evans's 7th-year potions essay that no one alive should have had access to, which Harry had pulled from a pensive vial Sirius had not known he was inheriting, and which Harry had handed to Snape across a desk one evening in February with no comment and no expectation. Snape had not thanked him. Snape was not the kind to thank. The warning in the corridor was the thanks, and it was worth more than thanks. Do not look at the veil. He noted it. He turned the corner. He went down to the dungeons. The veil's effect on a focused mind was documented in 2 of Vance's 3 later commentators. The veil drew the eye drew the working drew the soul 1/2 step toward the gauze. A glance was a glance, a look was a transaction. Snape's instruction was a counter to a known failure mode in soul rites conducted near the veil, a failure mode in which the celebrants' attendants lost their focus to the gauze and the celebrants working consumed them in passing as fuel. Voldemort would not protect his juniors from the gauze. Voldemort would expect his juniors to know. What changed? A piece of advice he had not had. He revised the plan to incorporate it. 1 night before in the room, he diagrammed the plan in goblin ink on a scrap of parchment the size of his palm. Goblin ink dissolved on the 3rd reading. He had bought the ink from a stationer in Diagon Alley who served the Gringotts clerks, and he had paid in galleons rather than letters of credit because he did not want the purchase recorded in his name. The ink was the deep blue-black of a wet stone at night. He wrote with a quill cut from his own hair end, an old paranoia of Lex Antiqua practice, that the quill that wrote the secret was the body that held it. He wrote the plan once. Arrive at Malfoy Manor as Hadrian Peveril at 10 o'clock. Persona velata at full draw, the inner circle robe Snape had transfigured from a Hogwarts cloak 2 months earlier, the signet placeholder on his right index finger turned inward to the palm. Greet Lucius at the door with the half-bow that the inner circle protocol required from a junior in the 3rd tier. Do not look at Bellatrix, Bellatrix red eyes. Look at Rookwood, Rookwood red mouths. Drink nothing that was offered. Eat nothing that was offered. Stand near the eastern window, because the eastern window of the manor drawing room was the only window the house elves did not pass under during the gathering, and Harry needed an arc of clear line of sight to the door he would leave through. Portkey with the inner circle at 10:45. The portkey was a length of black silk cord that Voldemort's inner ring carried. The cord activated by Voldemort's word and pulled the 17 of them through to the Death Chamber's northern arch in a single jolt. Harry had practiced the landing. The landing was hard on the left knee if you did not bend it before the pull. He would bend it. The ritual began at 11. Voldemort would enter from the high gallery in a robe so black it did not catch the torchlight, the same robe the Scardream had given him, which Harry now took as a small confirmation that the dream had been at least partially accurate, though he did not trust the dream beyond the geometry. Nagini would enter at the eastern arch at Voldemort's side, and then move to the eastern position to coil there for the opening chant. At 11:17, 11 minutes after the eastern entry, before the summoning to the dais, Harry would trigger the persona velata collapse. The glamour would drop in a wave of cold air. He had built the collapse to vent its disintegration energy as a cold pulse precisely because cold pulses startled in a way that bought him a half-second of inner circle confusion. A half-second was all he needed. Simultaneous casting from the dual-channel wand, the wand he had spent 3 months building. The wand-maker was Calavar Vance, of Hogsmeade, niece of Calius Vance the Unspeakable, and she had owed an honor debt to Lily Evans Potter for an act Lily had performed in 1979 that Calavar would not describe and Harry had not asked about. Harry had presented at her shop in March under the persona velata and had collected the debt in his mother's name. Calavar had accepted the collection without comment and had built the wand to his specification. Holly on one channel, you on the other. A single core split between them, phoenix feather laid down the holly side, dragon heartstring laid up the yew side, bound at the center grip in a brass collar engraved with the peveril triangle. The wand was 9 7/8 inches long. It was slightly off balance because holly and yew accepted spell charge at different rates. The holly side held a killing curse without strain, and the yew side held fiendfur for 3 seconds before the wood gave way. From the holly side, Avada Kedavra at Voldemort's chest at 11:17. From the yew side, a fiendfire lance at Nagini, shaped as a lance because shape was intent and a lance was what he meant. The yew side would shatter on the cast, the holly side would hold. The aurors would arrive at 11:18, 1 minute after the cast, to seal the chamber. Susan's aunt had received the date and level by the path Harry had specified. Amelia Bones did not move on a source she had not vetted, she moved on a source she trusted once. She would move on this source once because Susan would tell her once and Susan was Susan. He would exit the chamber with the body. He would take the signet from Voldemort's cold finger, the Peveril signet, which had been Voldemort's grandfather's, which had been hidden under a stone in a shack and brought to a graveyard and worn on a regenerated hand for almost a year, and would carry it out. He would portkey from the chamber to the Wisengamot atrium, where the emergency session Daphne had prearranged through Ogden's clerk would be opening at 9 the next morning, and where the signet presented at 9:03 would confirm under Lex Antiqua a claim that had been pending since Yule. 6 steps. Each step had a margin. The margins were thin. He read the plan once on the parchment. The goblin ink was still wet. He read it again. The ink was drying. He read it a 3rd time. The ink began to dissolve, character by character, into the grain of the parchment, until there was nothing on the page but a faint blue tint that would fade by morning. The exit portkey was a brass button sewn into the inner seam of his cuff. It was keyed to the Wisengamot atrium under a clause of the Slytherin signet placeholder writ that permitted emergency presentation of evidence within 12 hours of a Lex Antiqua-relevant event. Daphne had filed the clause invocation in advance under the unforeseen attendance precedent. The portkey would carry him with 1 passenger if the passenger was dead and in physical contact. The body counted. He held the wand in his hand. The dual-channel grip was slightly off-balance to the yew side, where the heartstring had been laid up. The off-balance was deliberate. Calavar had said the spell you mean most will be the spell you cast hardest, and the wand will sit toward that spell in your hand, and Harry had specified you toward Nagini and had built the imbalance into the grip. The wand sat toward Nagini. He was satisfied with thin margins. What changed? The plan had reached final form. It existed nowhere on paper. It existed in his head and in the angle of the wand against his palm. The Hogwarts Express on the Friday afternoon ran south through countryside that was greening too fast for the time of year. May had come in cold and then warm and then cold again, and the hedgerows beside the tracks were a confused mix of late blossom and early leaf. Harry sat alone in a compartment near the rear of the train. He had told Ron and Hermione that he wanted quiet to study. They had accepted the framing Hermione because she approved of quiet study on principle, Ron because Hermione had accepted it, and were 2 compartments down with the trolley suites between them, arguing about a Quidditch result that did not matter. He had a book open on his knee. He was not reading it. The book was Curses and Counter-Curses in a 1958 edition. He had brought it because Theo had brought the same title to his own compartment, and the small symmetry pleased him without quite being a comfort. The window beside him was clean. He watched the countryside pass. He did not feel afraid. Fear was a state that arrived when a calculation contained an unresolved variable, and the calculation he had built over the last 3 months contained no unresolved variables larger than the 11 to 14-minute window for Nagini's position, which was a known window with a known margin. He had spent the margin already. He did not feel exhilarated. Exhilaration was a state that arrived when a calculation overshot its prediction, and the calculation he had built was designed to land precisely on its prediction. Overshoot was failure of a particular kind. He felt exact. The world was about to be reordered along the geometry he had chosen, and the geometry was clean. The eastern arch held a snake for 11 minutes. The southern arch held a man in a robe so black the torchlight did not catch. The holly channel of his wand held a curse, and the yew channel held a fire, and his hand held both. Tomorrow was a Sunday. Sunday was the 7th night after the full moon of May. Sunday was the night. The rain began on the window halfway through the journey. It came in single drops at first, struck the glass at an angle, and then thickened. He watched the drops slide. The drops slid backward, the train's motion carrying them against the apparent direction until they reached the lower edge of the window and gathered. He thought of Dumbledore at the high table, white-bearded and certain, and felt nothing at all. The headmaster had not chosen him. He had chosen himself. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Voldemort falls. The last Horcrux the flu set him down in Malfoy Manor at 3 minutes past 10, and the drawing-room received him without sound. Silver candelabra burned in pairs along the walls. The flames did not move. Glamour and silence were the first conditions of the place. The room was designed to absorb both. He stepped clear of the hearth, adjusted the cuff of his left sleeve, and let Hadrian Peverell stand where Harry Potter would have been visible. Bellatrix stood at the western window, posture loose enough to be casual and tight enough to be ready. She did not turn at the sound of the flu. Lucius sat in the high-backed chair nearest the fire, one hand resting on the carved arm, his head tilted at the angle that meant nothing he wished it to mean. Rookwood occupied the chair opposite, hands folded, eyes lowered to the cushion of the seat across from him, on which lay a velvet bolster and a ceremonial dagger. Mulciber stood 3 paces behind the bolster, in the shadow cast by the standing candelabra. The shadow was deeper than it should have been. Hadrian registered the room as a grid, 4 sentries, 2 avenues of exit, 6 candelabra at full burn, the bolster centered on a low rosewood table, the dagger laid along its long axis with the point toward the hearth and the hilt toward the chair on which Bellatrix would later sit. He registered the dagger as a portkey and the bolster as its anchor. He registered each face. He moved on. He took the room a second time. The geometry held 4 sentries, 2 avenues of exit, the table at the center, the hearth at the west wall, the velvet bolster at 38 inches from the table's east edge. He checked the candelabra against memory, the same 6 in the same 6 positions that he had counted 3 weeks ago at the senior house dinner, where Daphne's father had set the signet ring into his palm with a phrase about hereditary protocol and a half-smile that had been load-bearing. He registered the recurrence of the geometry. He set it down. He noticed the child after a minute and a half. The boy stood close enough to Mulciber's leg that the shadow took him entirely, until Hadrian's eye traced the line of Mulciber's robe down to the floor and found a smaller line beside it that should not have been there. The child was perhaps 7. His hair was light brown and combed in a way no 7-year-old combs his own hair. His clothes were a child's robe of the kind sold in Diagon Alley for 42 galleons, clean to the seam, unworn at the cuffs. His eyes were open and did not track. The imperious lay on him at a low setting, the kind that holds posture and breath but does not need to hold thought, because there was no thought to hold. Hadrian's face did not change. He inclined his head to Bellatrix, to Lucius, to Rookwood, to Mulciber in that order, and took the seat that had been left vacant for him on the south side of the table. The cushion was warm from the room, not from a previous occupant. He registered that as a courtesy and discounted it. He recalculated. The The recalculation took 2 seconds. The immediate plan held: arrive at the death chamber, wait for the geometry to set, strike at 11:17. The after did not hold. A child under Imperius in the room on the night of a rite. The child was a vessel candidate, or a witness, or both. If a witness, the child would not survive the first panicked Death Eater hand in the seconds after the strike. If a vessel, the strike geometry itself would need to revise. He set the question aside until the death chamber confirmed which. He registered the after as, the child must be extracted alive. The extraction would require an aura present at the moment of removal. The child could not be carried out by Hadrian himself, because Hadrian leaving the chamber with a child in his arms before the auras had counted bodies would be the first frame in a story Hadrian did not wish to write. The child had to be handed across. The auras had to be in the chamber at the moment of the handover. The strike had to precede the auras by no fewer than 90 seconds and no more than 10 minutes, so that the chamber would be settled enough for the handover, and not so settled that any other hand could move toward the child first. He registered the window and set it. Bellatrix turned from the window. She crossed to the table. She did not look at Hadrian. She looked at the dagger. She picked it up by the blade, 2 fingers along the flat, the edge held away from her palm, and brought it to her mouth and kissed the steel where it met the hilt. She set it down. The blade hummed faintly with the portkey charm, which had been keyed to her lip first because she was the Lord's left hand and the protocol required it. She nodded to Hadrian. He rose. He crossed the 3 paces to the table. He took the dagger by the blade in the same grip and brought it to his mouth and kissed the steel. The steel was cool. He set the dagger down and returned to his chair. As he sat, his left hand closed once on the hilt of the dagger to register the portkey signature in his own magic. The hilt was warm under his fingers. The warmth was wrong. It was too even, too constant. A natural hilt warms from the room and from the hand. This one warmed from inside, from the spell, and the temperature did not vary along the length of the grip. He filed the wrongness against the rest of the data and let his hand fall away. Lucius spoke. The Lord arrives by his own route. We are to attend at the hour. Understood, Hadrian said. Rookwood inclined his head a 1/4 inch. Mulciber did not move. The child did not move. Bellatrix took the chair to Hadrian's left. She crossed her ankles. The hour is 11:15. Understood. The clock on the mantel ticked. The flames did not move. Hadrian sat with his hands open on his knees, palms up in the posture of a man who has nothing to conceal, and ran the geometry of the after again. The child was at 4 feet and an inch from his right shoulder. Mulciber was at 5 feet behind. If the child traveled with them through the portkey, and the child would, the protocol bonded the dagger's reach to whoever stood within 6 feet at the moment of activation, then the child would arrive in the death chamber, and would stand where Mulciber stood, and would be in the line of any spell aimed within 7 degrees of Mulciber's chest. He revised his arrival posture by 2 paces to the left in his head before they had gone. The clock struck the half, the clock struck the 3/4. At 10:45 exactly the dagger flared once, the air closed around the 5 of them and the child, and the manor unmade itself. The death chamber received them on the black stone floor of the lower amphitheater, 3 feet from the central dais, in the alignment that protocol prescribed. Hadrian stepped clear of the others and let his eye take the room. The amphitheater rose around them in 3 tiers of black stone, cut into broad, shallow steps that had been worn smooth in the center and rough at the edges, where no foot had reason to go. The torches along the upper tier burned in copper sconces. The light was not red and not gold. It was the color of polished iron heated almost to forging temperature, and it did not flicker. The chamber smelled of cold stone and a faint sweetness like cut grass left too long in a closed room. He breathed the air once and registered it. The veil stood at the center of the dais. He did not look at it. He looked at the eastern arch. Snape's warning lay in his mind, waited. Do not look at the veil. He took the warning as a stone laid across a doorway. He set his eye on the curve of the eastern arch and let the center of the dais blur into peripheral data. The veil was a gauze of nothing in his side vision, swaying without wind, the sway not matching any current the room could produce. He held his eye on the arch. The eastern arch was empty. He registered the arch as empty, which meant the ramp had not yet been ascended, which meant the rite had not yet begun. He had built his map from Anthony's liftcoil sketch and a memory of the department's older floor plans. The map had shown the arch reached by a single stair. The room as it stood had a ramp instead, wood, freshly built, the planks pale and the joins still bright with the cut. The ramp curved from the floor to the foot of the dais and then climbed 3 steps to the eastern arch in a line that had not existed 3 days ago. He revised the map. The ramp was a ritual addition. The wood was new. Fiendfire, even glancingly, would consume it inside 2 seconds. He noted the wood, the joined lines, the angle of approach from the eastern arch back down to the dais. The lance he had prepared in his U-side would travel the ramp's full length without the ramp impeding it. He took the upper tier in his peripheral field. 2 doors on the second tier, one north, one east, and a single arch on the third tier, behind which the gallery stair began. The torches numbered 18 along the upper tier. He counted them once because torch count was load-bearing for any chamber that anchored its illumination to the casting at its center, and 18 was the number the older texts named for a soul-anchoring chamber set at the standard depth. The chamber confirmed itself. Voldemort entered from the high gallery. The high gallery was a balcony cut into the upper tier of the amphitheater, accessed by a hidden stair behind the second-tier wall. Voldemort came onto the balcony at a measured pace and stopped at its rail. The robe he wore was black to a depth that did not catch the torchlight. The torchlight slid off it and gave nothing back. His face was the face Hadrian had memorized in the photographs Snape had provided, pale, narrow, the nostrils slit, the eyes the color Snape's notes called crimson do not match. Hadrian did not match the eyes. He inclined his head a quadrant to the balcony and let his gaze rest on the lower edge of the robe. Voldemort raised his right hand. Nagini rose from the floor along the new ramp. The serpent ascended the ramp at the pace of a man walking. Her coils were the width of a man's thigh at the thickest. The scales caught the torchlight where the robe had not. She moved without sound. She reached the foot of the dais, coiled there for one breath, and then ascended the 3 steps to her marked position on the eastern arch. She settled into the marked coil, 3 full turns, head raised. The angle of the head pointed precisely back across the chamber at the dais. The geometry matched his map. He breathed once. The cold sweetness of the air drew through his nose and out again. The plan held. The after with the child remained the variable. Mulciber stood at his left with the child in the shadow of his robe. Hadrian shifted half a pace away from Mulciber, so that the line from his right hand to Voldemort's chest did not cross within 6 feet of the child, and so that the line from his left hand to Nagini did not cross within 4 feet of Mulciber. He marked Mulciber as the man who would not survive the next 2 minutes for purely tactical reasons. The child was in Mulciber's shadow. The child had to be moved. Mulciber had to be removed. He set the geometry and waited for the right. Voldemort spoke. The parcel tongue rolled down from the gallery into the amphitheater, and the chamber caught it the way the chamber caught the torchlight. It gave nothing back. The opening cadence was 11 syllables long. Hadrian, who had been taught by Snape to recognize the structural beats of a soul-anchoring rite without being taught Parseltongue itself, counted the cadence, first quarter. The cadence had 4 quarters. The right circle would close at the third. He felt the Parseltongue at the back of his lower teeth as a pressure that was not sound. He registered the pressure and held it at the level of data. The cadence had a meter. Each beat was 3 syllables long, with the third syllable held for the length of a slow heartbeat, and the beats came at intervals of approximately 4¼ seconds. The 4 quarters of the cadence ran 16 beats each. He counted the first 4 beats and confirmed the meter. He set the metronome in his head. The cadence broke and resumed. Hadrian shifted his weight a 1/4 inch onto his right foot and looked briefly at the floor at the center of the dais. The floor at the center of the dais was marked with a circle that had not been visible when they had arrived. The circle was drawn in something darker than the stone, not blood, not ink, a worked residue of an older rite made visible now by the cadence. The circle had 2 concentric rings. The inner ring was perhaps 3 feet across, the outer ring perhaps 7. Around the outer ring stood the Death Eaters, Bellatrix at the north quarter, Lucius at the west, Rookwood at the south, Mulciber at the east. Hadrian, who had been positioned as the new sponsor, stood at the southeast between Rookwood and Mulciber. The child stood inside the inner ring. Hadrian recalculated. The recalculation took 3 seconds. A soul-anchoring rite of this cadence and this geometry, the inner ring for the vessel, the outer ring for the witnesses, the central caster on the dais, pulled the dispersed soul fragments of the caster's existing horcruxes into a single new anchor at the center of the inner ring. The vessel was the child. The vessel had been prepared with Imperius to keep him still and to keep his magic quiescent. The rite required a quiet vessel, a vessel whose own magic would not resist. The vessel was a half-blood child of 7. Voldemort had a taste for the older symbolism, and an orphan-coded half-blood of 7 was the closest reproduction available of a particular boy he no longer had. If Hadrian struck at 11, 17 with the child standing in the inner ring after the circle had closed at the third quarter, the soul magic would collapse through the child. The vessel was already keyed and might, depending on the residual binding between Voldemort's magic and Hadrian's scar, collapse through Hadrian as well. He would not take that risk. The right circle had not yet closed. The cadence stood at the first quarter. The third quarter would arrive in approximately 12 minutes by his count. The cadence was metered, he could count it. He revised the strike time downward to 11:11 immediately in his head. 11:11 gave him 6 minutes from now. He marked the child's exact position, center of the inner ring, facing east, weight even, hands at his sides. He marked Avery, who was not at the outer ring. Avery had been left as a perimeter sentry at the upper tier, and reassigned Avery from outside the engagement to the constant Bellatrix glancer, who will reach for his wand at the sound of her scream, and will not finish the reach. He marked the nearest Death Eater between him and the child, Mulciber, at the east quarter of the outer ring, 3 feet from the child's right shoulder. The line of approach from Hadrian's position to the child crossed the outer ring at the southeast point and continued 5 feet to the inner ring's edge. He waited, the cadence continued. The second quarter began. He counted under the level of his breath, kept his face on Hadrian Peveril, and let his right hand drift to the wand pocket at his hip in the gesture that the protocol expected from a sponsor. Hand on wand, wand undrawn, the courtesy gesture of a man who would draw if asked. He drew the holly and yew wand to the level of his cuff and held it concealed there. The wood was warm in his palm, both sides. The holly and the yew had run hot in the last quarter hour of preparation, and they ran hot now. He registered the warmth as confirmation. The parcel tongue clicked once at the back of his teeth. The cadence reached the midpoint of the second quarter. He breathed once. The plan revised cleanly. 11:11 drop glamour, dual channel, holly to the chest, yew to the throat, ring blade to whatever came at the child. The revision held, the geometry held. He set his weight onto the ball of his right foot and counted 3 more cadence beats. He waited. 11:11. He stepped forward as if to take his place in the chant. He took half a pace into the outer ring, his right foot crossing the residue line, and at the moment his foot completed the step, he spoke a single word at the level of breath. Ephma. The persona velata slewed off. It came off as cold air. The glamour Snape had built into him for 9 months left along the surface of his skin, in a wave that the chamber caught and amplified. The black stone took the cold and threw it back along the tiers, and the cold reached the upper gallery and crossed Voldemort's robe and did not touch it. Hadrian Peveril's face went with the cold. Harry Potter's face appeared in the chamber. The scar showed. The hair was black, the eyes were green, the jaw was a Potter jaw under the cheekbones his mother had given him. Bellatrix's mouth opened. The first sound of her scream began in her throat. He cast. The dual-channel wand split the casting in 2. The holly side, Avada Kedavra, at Voldemort's chest. The yew side, Fiendfire-shaped lance at Nagini. The green light from the holly traveled the diagonal across the chamber. The angle from Hadrian's foot to the balcony was 42 degrees rising and 17 degrees east of true. He had measured it from the position he had taken at arrival, against the eastern arch and the gallery rail. The light traveled the diagonal in a straight line because killing curses travel in straight lines. They have no curve to them because death has no curve. The light struck Voldemort between the second and third rib on the left, where the heart sat behind the bone, in a regenerated body whose Horcrux dispersal had not yet activated. The strike was clean. The body fell. It fell forward over the gallery rail, the black robe catching for half a second on the carved stone of the rail and then sliding free, the body turning once in the air and landing on the dais 3 feet from the inner ring. The skin on the face went gray in the first second of the fall and grayer in the second. The eyes were open. The eyes did not match. The yew shattered at the same moment. It shattered in a single dry crack along the grain. He felt the crack as a strike against his palm. The yew had been built to channel 1 Fiendfire lance and to be expended in the casting. The construction had been a yew core with a yew shell, sympathetic bound, and the binding had given the wood 1 casting and 1 only. The shell broke first, the core followed. The pieces fell from his left hand and were already burning before they reached the floor. The Fiendfire lance crossed the chamber. The lance was a column of fire perhaps 2 feet across and 20 feet long, shaped at the leading edge into a point and at the trailing edge into a taper, and it traveled at the speed of a thrown spear. He had shaped it to that geometry because shape was intent and a lance was what he meant. A lance crosses a distance once, strikes once, and consumes. The lance left his left hand at an angle of 17 degrees rising and 73 degrees east of true, climbed the curve of the ramp by following the geometry of his arm without touching the ramp, and met Nagini at the throat. The fire caught her at the throat and crossed her length in 1.5 seconds. The serpent did not scream because serpents do not scream for the same reason struck matches do not scream. Their bodies have no chamber for it. The fire reached the tail. The tail was gone. The arch was clean. The new ramp where the fire had passed within 4 feet of the wood was burning along its full length and the wood was going fast. The Horcrux in the serpent dissolved with the body. The Horcrux in Voldemort's body, which had been the body itself, was already gone with the chest strike. The chamber's soul magic, primed by the cadence to transfer the dispersed fragments into the child at the third quarter, had nowhere now to go. The cadence had reached the midpoint of the second quarter, the inner ring was not yet sealed, the vessel was not yet bound. The soul magic collapsed. It collapsed into the black stone of the dais with a sound like a struck bell muffled under wool. The sound carried, it rang once and did not ring again. The black stone took it the way the stone took everything. The child was alive. Avery turned. Avery turned from the upper tier with his wand half drawn and his eyes on the place where Bellatrix's scream had begun and not finished. The holly side of Hadrian's wand discharged its secondary load, a cutting curse he had precast and stored on the third trigger of the holly's channel, keyed to discharge on the completion of a killing curse from the same channel within the same second. The cutting curse left the holly at an angle of 9 degrees rising, crossed the chamber, and took Avery at the throat. Avery fell from the upper tier into the second tier with his hand at his throat and his wand falling from the other hand. The wand struck the stone first. Mulciber lunged for the child. Mulciber crossed the 3 feet between his position at the east quarter of the outer ring and the inner ring's edge in 2 strides. His hand was open. His intent was to lift the child and use him. The signet ring under Hadrian's left glove discharged. The ring was a greengrass piece. Daphne's father had handed it to him 3 weeks before with the language of a senior house recognition and a phrase about hereditary protocol that Hadrian had registered as load-bearing at the time and had registered as load-bearing again now. He had not authorized the ring. The ring's protocol authorized itself. The discharge took the form of a shield that hardened into a blade. The shield came off the back of his left hand as a flat plane of light, rotated through 90 degrees in the air, took on edge and weight and length, and crossed the chamber on its own line. The blade entered Mulciber under the sternum and exited at the back of the ribs. Mulciber's stride did not complete. He fell short of the child by 1.5 feet. The chamber held for half a second. The fiendfire, untended after the lance had spent itself, was burning along the ramp and along Mulciber's robe and along a section of the second tier where the lance's heat had caught a tapestry. Hadrian flicked the holly side once and the fiendfire on the ramp went out. He could not yet quench the rest. The torches along the upper tier were still burning at the color of polished iron. The veil at the center of the dais was still swaying without wind. He did not look at it. The chamber clock, there was a chamber clock set into the south wall, brass-faced, read 11:12. He noted the time. He noted the precedent of the ring as a thing to study later. He had no later now. He had 6 minutes. The Aurors were not 6 minutes away. Susan's warning had specified midnight. Anthony's coil loop had been built to pull the lift alarm forward by approximately 40 minutes. If the alarm had tripped at the moment of his glamour drop, the lift would have moved at 11:11.5. The Auror strike team would arrive at approximately 11:18. He had 6 minutes to set the chamber so that the chamber's first impression on Madame Bones would be the impression he wanted. He crossed to Bellatrix first. She had fallen forward at the edge of the dais and was already drawing her wand arm up. The sticking charm came off the holly at a low setting and pinned her wrists to the stone. He did not stun her. A stunned Bellatrix was a Bellatrix the Aurors would have to revive and bind. A conscious Bellatrix with her wrists fixed to the stone was a Bellatrix the Aurors would find as she was, screaming or not screaming, the wand still in her grip and the grip going nowhere. He left her. He crossed to the child. The Imperius had broken at Mulciber's death and the child was beginning to track. The tracking was not yet purposeful. The eyes moved without committing to anything in the chamber. Hadrian did not approach within 3 feet. He set a low-grade shielding charm at the edge of the inner ring, a dome at chest height for the child, transparent to him and opaque to Spellfire from outside, and stepped back. The child would be visible to the Aurors when they arrived. The dome would hold against any panicked hand for the 4 seconds it would take an Auror to reach the dais. He crossed to the body. He did not yet take the signet. That was for after the Aurors had seen the body and counted it. He confirmed the body was the body, the chest wound clean, the eyes mismatched in the way Snape had warned would persist for as long as the regenerated tissue held its shape, and he stepped back. He set the holly wand against the inside of his right cuff and held it there. The Aurors would arrive on a chamber whose center was a body, a child under a dome, a bound Bellatrix, 3 stunned or surrendered Death Eaters, a quenched ramp, and a Potter boy with his wand visible at his cuff. The frame was the frame he wanted. He breathed once. The smell was fiendfire, wood smoke, and copper, and under it the cold sweetness of the chamber's older air. He set his weight evenly on both feet. He began the work of the next 6 minutes. The cold satisfaction of a plan that had executed with a clean revision sat in him as a single line, and he registered it and moved on. 11:18. The Aurors apparated into the chamber in the formation of a six-pointed star, with Madame Bones at the center point of the star and the 5 others at the outer points. They came in within the inner perimeter of the second tier, which meant their intelligence had been good. Hadrian noted the precision of their entry and discounted nothing. The 6 Aurors took the chamber in the formation they had practiced. Bones at the center, the eastern point to take the highest threat target on visual confirmation, the northern point to suppress any active casting at range, the western and southwestern points to hold the doors on the second tier, the southeastern point to read the room and call adjustments. The formation was clean and the entry took less than 2 seconds. Bellatrix had recovered her scream in the 7 minutes since the strike. She had been on her knees beside the dais, hands flat to the stone, and she had been silent for those 7 minutes because Hadrian had bound her wrists to the stone with a low-grade sticking charm the moment her scream had broken. When the Aurors arrived, she found her wand again under her knee and brought it up. The stunner that took her came from the Auror at the easternmost point of the star, a woman of perhaps 23, hair the color of a hibiscus, the color changing as Hadrian watched to a dark blue at the roots and traveling outward as her concentration tightened. The stunner crossed the chamber and took Bellatrix at the shoulder. Bellatrix fell forward onto the stone. Lucius surrendered with his hands open. He stood from where he had been kneeling beside Mulciber's body. He had been kneeling there for the last 3 minutes, palms up on his thighs, reading the chamber, and raised his hands above his head and opened them. He did not speak. Lucius was reading the room. Lucius had always read rooms. This room had a corpse of the Dark Lord on it and a Potter boy standing over it, and Lucius read what that meant for the next decade. Rookwood moved. Rookwood crossed the dais in 3 strides toward the veil. He had been at the southern edge of the outer ring. The strides took him past the body and past the inner ring and into the line of the veil's gauze. Hadrian saw him move and ran the cost-benefit. Cost, pursue Rookwood, cross the dais, engage the veil, risk being drawn through. Benefit, deny the Death Eaters a witness with Department of Mysteries internal knowledge. The cost-benefit was negative in the current moment. Hadrian did not move. Rookwood reached the veil and was gone. The veil did not change. The gauze swayed once, and the second sway was indistinguishable from the first. The Caros dropped their wands when the pink-haired Auror, Tonks, Hadrian heard Bones say the name once across the chamber to call her forward, turned her body a quarter turn toward them. The wands struck the stone with 2 thin cracks. Amicus raised his hands, Alecto raised hers. Tonks stunned them both in the same motion. Madame Bones walked through the wreckage with the gait of a woman who had seen worse. The monocle in her right eye caught the torchlight and threw it back as a single white circle on the iron-colored floor. She crossed the chamber at the pace of a woman who had no need to hurry and no patience for delay. She passed the dais. She passed the body. She stopped 3 feet in front of Hadrian. She did not speak. He did not speak. The chamber breathed once. The fiend fire suppressed now by the Auror at the northern point of the star with a charm Hadrian recognized as a Bones House invention. The controlled flame charm, a quenching geometry that pulled the heat into a single point and then voided it, had left the air too still, the silence after fire that has too much room to settle into. The torches along the upper tier had been steadied. Their light had not changed color but had become regular. The veil swayed at the center of the dais. He still did not look at it. The cold knowledge sat in him as a single line. The next hour was the law's hour, not his. He registered the line and let it lie. Madame Bones moved her eyes from his face to the body and back to his face. "Mr. Potter," she said. He inclined his head 1 degree. Madame Bones, she did not nod. She turned her head a quarter and looked at the body on the dais. The gray of the skin had become the color of old paper. The eyes were open. The eyes did not match. She turned back to him. "You will need to come with me." He inclined his head 1 degree. He held her eyes for a count of 2. The chamber held. The pink-haired Auror crossed behind Bones to the place where the child was huddled at the foot of the dais and knelt beside him without speaking. The child did not look at her. The Imperius had gone with Mulciber and the child's eyes had begun to track, but they tracked nothing yet. They were the eyes of a boy who had been somewhere and was now here and had not been told the difference. Bones did not move her eyes from Hadrian's face. He held her eyes for the count of 2 and let the count complete. He crossed to the body. He crossed the dais in 5 strides. The black stone took his bootsteps and gave nothing back. The body lay on its side, the robe fallen open along the chest, the left hand half curled on the stone. The skin of the hand was the color of the rest. The signet ring sat on the index finger of the right hand, which had fallen palm up. The serpent on the ring caught no torchlight, and the basilisk eye sliver at its center held a thin green line that was not a reflection. He knelt. He knelt on his right knee once, the knee against the stone for the time it took to free the ring from the finger. The ring resisted the knuckle for a moment, the finger had begun to stiffen, and the joint had set against the gold. He worked the ring with his thumb and forefinger and brought it off. He stood. The signet sat in his palm. It was Slytherin's, the serpent eating its own tail, set in black gold around the basilisk-eye sliver. The gold had been worked at a depth that the candlelight in the manor would not have caught and the torchlight in the chamber could not. The serpent's scales were cut as small as fingerprint whorls. The signet warmed in his palm. The warmth was right. The iron knew its smith. He closed his hand around the signet. The warmth steadied at the temperature of a hand that had been holding the ring all day. He transferred the signet to his left hand and pocketed it in the inner robe pocket that would not open without his blood. The pocket took the signet and closed. The cold of the signet sat through the lining of the pocket against the skin of his chest. He stood very still over the body. He did not say anything. He did not gloat. The body was a body now. He stepped over it, over the legs, which had fallen straight and not over the head, and walked to the child. The child was at the foot of the dais where the Auror Tonks had knelt beside him. Tonks looked up at Hadrian's approach. Her hair had settled to a dark blue at the crown and a paler blue at the tips. Her face was open and tired and young. Hadrian did not bend down. He put his hand briefly on the child's shoulder. The shoulder was thin under the clean robe. "You are safe," he said. "You will be returned home." He let his hand fall. He looked once at Tonks. "He needs his mother," he said. "He is a half-blood." The Imperius was a low tear and has lifted. He will not remember the chamber, but he will remember the cold. Tonks nodded once. She gathered the child up in her arms with a gentleness that was practiced. She had carried children before in other rooms, and the child, who had not tracked Hadrian's face, tracked hers. He turned his head into her shoulder. Hadrian turned. The cold of the signet sat through the lining of his pocket against the skin of his chest. The recognition that the warmth of the signet was the only warmth he would permit himself sat in him as a single line. He registered it and walked back across the dais to Madame Bones. Madame Bones was waiting where he had left her. Tonks crossed behind him with the child in her arms and passed out of the chamber through the door the Aurors had opened on the second tier. The fiendfire had been quenched. The air carried only the aftersmell of it, the copper trace and the wood smoke that had nowhere now to rise to. The torches along the upper tier had returned to their iron color. The veil at the center of the dais swayed. Bones spoke. "Mr. Potter, you are going to need to come with me." He held her eyes. "Madam Bones, I will be at the Wisengamot atrium at 6 o'clock this morning. I will answer every question that is asked of me, under oath, including under Veritas Manifesta, if the body wishes to invoke it. I require 6 hours. Will you grant them on the courtesy of your office and the standing of your niece?" Bones did not answer immediately. She held his eyes for the count of 4. The monocle's white circle stayed on the iron-colored floor between them. The Auror at the northern point of the star, who had quenched the fiendfire, stood 10 feet behind Bones with his hands at his sides. The other Aurors held their positions. The body of the Dark Lord lay on the dais behind Hadrian's left shoulder. 6 hours, Mr. Potter," Bones said. "Your niece will need to be a great deal of explaining. She has done nothing she will need to explain. I have done all that needs explaining." "I will do it at 6. Bones inclined her head 1 degree. He inclined his 1 degree in return. He turned. He walked toward the door on the second tier through which Tonks had taken the child. The holly wand was in his right hand. The signet was in the inner pocket of his robe, against his chest, cold through the lining. He crossed the dais without looking at the body. He crossed the inner ring and the outer ring, which had not been sealed and now would never be sealed, and past Lucius Malfoy, who knelt with his hands on his head and his face turned toward the stone. He did not look at Lucius. Lucius did not look at him. The pink-haired Auror Tonks, who had carried the child out, would meet him at the lift. The lift would carry him to the atrium. The atrium at this hour was empty. The boot-step on the marble of the atrium would sound the same as the boot-step on the stone of this chamber, because the marble and the stone were both polished to a dead surface and would both take a footfall and give back the same sound. He registered the sound he made now, the click of his boots on the chamber stone, a clean 2-beat at his walking pace, the same click as the marble of the atrium where he would stand at 6. The cold satisfaction sat in him as a single line. He had set an hour against the world, and the hour had run on his geometry. The body of the Dark Lord lay on the black stone behind him. The signet was on his hand. The law was, for the next hour in the 6 after, a room he had built the floor of. The corridor beyond the door was lit by a single lumos that one of the Aurors had set on a sconce at the second bend. The light was a steady white at the color of an unflinching star. The walls of the corridor were the same black stone as the chamber, and the floor was the same. His boots made the same two-beat click on the floor that they had made on the dais. He passed under the door on the second tier and into the corridor that led to the lift. He walked out of the Department of Mysteries with a signet in his fist and the law on his side. The hour had reordered the world. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The throne of magic claimed the atrium at 5:50 in the morning was less a building than an inheritance. The lamps along the high vaulted ceiling had been kept burning by an ordinance set down in 1707, when the ministry had first claimed this hollow beneath the city and laid the marble in patterns that no clerk now living could fully read. The black floor, polished by centuries of souls that had crossed it on errands of state, threw the lamplight back in pools that did not so much illuminate as remember. The fountain of magical brethren stood silent. Some clerk in the night, exercising a discretion that belonged more to instinct than to regulation, had stopped its waters and shrouded the figures so that the gilt witch and wizard and the lesser bronze beings stood under linen as though laid out for a wait. It was a fitting omen for an hour that intended to bury one thing and unveil another, and the linen muffled what little echo the chamber would have given back, so that the great stone hollow was as quiet as a cathedral before lauds. There was along the western wall a long brass plaque listing every minister for magic from 1707 to the present, and the brass had been polished so recently that the names of the last 3 ministers gleamed brighter than the names above them. The plaque was a kind of unintentional augury, a record into which the chamber would, before the morning was out, be required to inscribe a category for which no ministerial name had ever been written. The ceiling, painted in a fresco that had darkened to near blackness over 3 centuries of lamp smoke, depicted a council of stars in a configuration no astronomer had been able to identify, and the stars looked down at the floor as they had looked down on every coronation, every disgrace, and every quiet morning of administrative routine, with the steady inattention of constellations that have outlasted the institutions they were painted to oversee. Harry walked into it alone, in plain dark robes, and the click of his boots on the marble was the only thing moving in the chamber. The robes were the dark, serviceable kind he had worn into the Department of Mysteries 6 hours before. The Slytherin robes would come later, for now, deliberately, he wore nothing that would announce him. Only the signet on his right hand spoke. It was a heavy ring of black gold, its bezel set with a single carved emerald shaped like a serpent coiled to strike, the carving so old that the serpent's scales were worn smooth on the back where ancient thumbs had rubbed them in unconscious habit. It caught the lamplight as he walked and threw it back in a green that did not match any other color in the room, a green older than any glass in the atrium's windows, a green that belonged to a house and not to a pigment. The signet had warmed against his finger when he had taken it from Tom Riddle's still-cooling hand at 37 minutes past 11, and it had not cooled since. It warmed now in the dim atrium air, as if responding to the marble it had not crossed in 300 years. 2 Aurors fell in behind him without being asked. They were Bones's people. He recognized them by their cloaks, by the silver pin at the throat that marked them as members of her personal detail, and most of all by the way they did not look at him directly but at the air a foot in front of him, which was the discipline of those who had been trained to escort a body or a minister or any other object of state. They did not speak. They walked at a measured pace, 3 steps behind and 1 step apart, and their boots made a sound that was a quieter echo of his own. Madame Bones had granted him 6 hours. 3 of those hours had been the slow work of bodies and writs and healers attesting to the death of Tom Marvolo Riddle, the burning of what remained of Nagini, and the formal logging of the destroyed locket and ring and diadem and cup and diary, and the boy himself who had been the 7th vessel and who was no longer one, his scar quiet at last. 2 hours had been the writ. 1 hour was this, the walk to the chamber, the robing, and the ascent. He registered as he crossed the seal of the ministry inlaid in the center of the floor that the atrium had become his stage and that the play would be in 5 acts. He had rehearsed each act in his head between Gringotts and the holding cells in the recorder's desk. He had set each beat against each beat the way a duelist sets his footwork against the floor before the bell. He did not need notes. The signet warmed. He passed the silent fountain without turning his head, and the lifts at the far end opened for him as though they had been waiting, and the Aurors stepped in behind him and the gate folded across, and the ascent began. The Wisengamot robing room lay 2 levels above the chamber itself, in a part of the building most of the ministry's clerks did not know existed. The door bore no plate. It opened on a long room whose walls were paneled in oak so old the grain had darkened to the color of dried tea, and whose ceiling was lost in shadow above 3 iron chandeliers that had not been rehung since the reign of George III. Down the center of the room ran a single black runner. At the far end stood a wardrobe of plain dark wood, taller than a man, with double doors and a clasp of tarnished silver. The room smelled of old cedar and a permanent house-elf charm and the particular dust of garments that have not been worn in the lifetime of any man currently breathing. Tiberius Ogden met him at the door. 51 years in the Wisengamot, the longest tenured recorder living, he had robed 3 chief warlocks, 2 ministers for magic on the morning of their elevation, and now a 4th thing for which no name had been needed in his lifetime. He was tall, stooped only at the very last degree, and his beard was white and trimmed close to the jaw in the older fashion. He wore the recorder's chain over plain dark robes. He bowed. The bow was shallow exact and aimed not at the boy in dark traveling robes, but at the writ Harry carried folded in his inner pocket. He had read it, he had stamped it himself an hour before, and he knew what was about to walk past him into the chamber. His hands, when he lifted them to take the writ for safekeeping during the robing, were age-spotted and steady. Not a tremor, not the slightest. They were the hands of a man who had signed a great many documents that mattered and had not yet learned to be afraid of one more. "My lord," he said, which was the form of address required by procedure once the signet had been verified, and not a flattery, and he opened the wardrobe. The double doors parted upon their tarnished hinges with a dry, quiet sound that was not the sound of disuse, but of long, patient maintenance. The hinges had been kept oiled by the same permanent charge that had kept the cedar fragrant and the silk uncreased, and they swung open at the half-degree of pressure that an unaccustomed hand would have given them, because an old recorder's hand knew the half-degree and did not exceed it. The robes hung within in a long fall of dark green that drank what little light the chandeliers gave. Silk, weighted by 3 centuries of silver thread, worked into the hem and the cuffs and the inner lining where no one would see it but the wearer. The thread had not tarnished, having been laid against silk that did not breathe, and the silver lay along the green like a tracery of frost set under deep water. At the throat hung a clasp of black iron in the shape of a coiled serpent, the same serpent as the signet, though smaller and rougher, as though the smith who had wrought it had been working from memory rather than from sight. The cloth had outweighted its bearers, it knew the weight of a house. Ogden lifted it from the wardrobe with a care that was neither reverence nor formality, but the practical respect of a man who had handled too many old things to mistreat them. He helped Harry into the robes without ceremony. The silk fell about Harry's shoulders with the heaviness of armor and a great deal more of memory. The silver hem swept the floor. The cuffs settled at his wrists with the precision of a garment cut for a body that was not his and had still understood him, the way a tide settles into a harbor shaped by other water. Ogden closed the iron clasp at his throat. The iron was cold. It bit faintly through the silk and through the linen beneath the silk and through the bone of his collar. It was a real bite, and Harry registered it without movement. He did not look in the mirror that stood beside the wardrobe. There was nothing in the mirror he needed to see. He was becoming the office. He was not putting on a costume. The two things were not the same operation, and the latter would have required the mirror. The former required only the cold of the iron at the throat and the weight of the silver at the hem, and the steady hands of an old recorder fixing the inner cord beneath the clasp. The silver thread along the cuffs caught the chandelier light and threw it back in points that traveled the length of his arms as he lowered them to his sides, and the thread did not flash so much as it acknowledged the light, the way an old coin acknowledges the lamp that has been brought to read it. Ogden stepped back 1 pace. He looked Harry over with the practical eye of a recorder who had robed 3 chief warlocks and would, if the morning continued as he believed it must, robe a 4th thing in the same hour, and finding the robes settled correctly upon a body for which they had been altered by no tailor, he inclined his head. "The chamber is full," said Ogden. "The oars have closed the visitors' gallery. The chief warlock is in his chair. Madam Bones holds the floor under Article 12 and will yield to you upon entry. The chair is uncovered." Harry inclined his head. Ogden returned the writ to his hand. Ogden bowed once more, this time not at the writ but at the robes, and then walked ahead of him along the black runner toward the chamber door, his recorder's chain catching the chandelier light in measured flashes that traveled along the linked silver like a slow ignition. The doors to the chamber were of dark wood 20 feet high, and banded with iron in patterns that predated the ministry itself. They had been removed from an older building, and hung here when this chamber had been carved out of the bedrock under the Thames in the 14th century. They opened inward without a hand being laid on them, swinging upon hinges enchanted in 1389 by a witch whose name no one any longer recorded except as mistress of the doors. They opened, and the chamber lay below. It lay below in tiers, 3 tiers of seats curving in a horseshoe around a central floor of inlaid marble, the floor a single great mosaic whose central figure was a coiled serpent inset in green stone against a field of black. 300 members in their plum robes filled the tiers, the upper for the light factions, by tradition and not by rule, the middle for the neutrals, the lower for the old families that had, by usage if not by statute, claimed the lower benches for centuries. Lucius Malfoy's seat was empty, as was Mulciber's, as was Avery's. The Knots held theirs. The elder Greengrass held his with his hands folded on his lap, and his face set in the particular expression of a man whose calculus had been done and finished some time before he sat down. The Macmillans, the Bones Bench, the Diggorys, the Abbotts, the elder Longbottom, these filled the upper tier in their accustomed places. The neutrals between, hands in laps, faces composed. Snape sat at the very back of the upper tier in his Hogwarts proctor's robes, his arms folded inside their sleeves. He did not turn his head as Harry walked past beneath him. The stillness was its own answer. The chief warlock's chair stood at the apex of the horseshoe upon a raised dais of its own, and Albus Dumbledore sat in it. His beard had been combed. His half-moon spectacles caught the chamber's lamps. For a moment, only a moment, before he had recomposed his face, his eyes were unguarded. Then they were guarded again, and the great long hands rested on the carved arms of the chair, and he watched Harry come down the aisle without rising. The whispering ceased as Harry walked the central aisle. He walked without hurry. The silver hem of his robes caught against the marble of the floor with a soft hiss that was less a sound than a presence. He climbed to the Slytherin seat. It stood upon a dais set apart from the others, a single chair of black marble veined with green, the back high and carved with the same serpent coiled to strike, the arms worn smooth in 2 places where ancient palms had rested. The chair had been empty for 3 centuries. It had not been removed, no statute had ever called for its removal, and no Wisengamot had ever convened the courage to draft one. It had merely stood there in the chamber, a kind of architectural memorial, and the chamber had grown around it. A narrow channel of red carpet ran from the central aisle up to the foot of the dais, faded almost to brown by the few feet that had crossed it in 3 centuries, the feet of recorders performing the annual verification of the empty chair, the feet of cleaning staff with permits stamped in 2 colors of wax, and now at last the feet of a bearer who had cause to walk it. The carpet was not the chamber's most impressive ornament, it was the chamber's most patient one, and the patience had been worth keeping. Harry did not sit, he turned to face the tiers. The chamber's air felt older than the chamber, which was the particular sensation of a room that had been built to hold something larger than itself. He looked over the tiers and recorded each face he intended to recognize later, Bones at the rail of the middle tier, her monocle catching a single point of light, Ogden taking his place at the recorder's lectern below the dais, Dumbledore in the high chair, his eyes now perfectly composed, the Diggorys 2 rows behind Bones, Amos's jaw set, Cedric's mother's hand on her husband's wrist, the Macmillans at the end of their row, the elder Greengrass in the lower tier. Who did not look at him but at the serpent on the floor, Snape at the very back, motionless. He noted them. He set them in the order in which they would be addressed later, when the chamber had become a court of his making, and not the inheritance he was about to claim. He turned back to the front and waited. He set the goblin writ on the lectern of the Slytherin seat, which had a lectern, though the chamber had forgotten the lectern existed. The writ unrolled itself with the quiet obedience of parchment that had been told what to do by a goblin court 2 hours before. It bore the seals of Gringotts in 3 colors of wax and the sigil of the director of the goblin court in a 4th. Tiberius Ogden, below, inclined his head toward it, and the chamber understood that the writ had been verified. Harry raised his right hand, palm inward, so that the signet faced the chamber. The serpent on the bezel turned its carved head 1 degree to the left in the lamplight, which was a trick of angle and which was also not a trick of angle. The chamber's recognition magic answered. It had been set into the floor at the Wisengamot's founding by 4 wizards, of whom Salazar Slytherin had been one, in the form of 4 mosaics of which the central serpent was the surviving fragment. The serpent moved once, not the lamplight, the stone. The green inlay of its head turned 5 degrees toward Harry on the dais, and the marble did not crack and did not protest, because it had been waiting 617 years to do this, and the patience of stone is not the patience of men. The chamber felt the motion before it saw the motion. The air along the floor stirred faintly, the way the air stirs in a great hall when a far door has opened in a corridor too distant to be heard, and the lamps along the lower tier dimmed by a single degree and recovered, which was the signature of an old enchantment registering a successor it had been programmed to recognize. The motion was brief, the motion was sufficient. The chamber had not seen the serpent move since 1389, when Theodoric the Tempered had stood where Harry now stood, and the chamber had answered for him in the same way. A murmur rose. Ogden lifted one hand and the murmur hushed. "By the Lex Antiqua," said Ogden, and his voice had the carrying quality that old voices acquire when they have been making themselves heard in the same room for 51 years, "and by the proof manifest upon this floor, and by the writ of the Goblin Court here presented and verified, the seed of Slytherin is called to its bearer. Seed Slytherin resurgit per sanguinem antiquum et sigillum manifestum." He paused and translated the central phrase for the chamber as the statute required. "The Slytherin seat rises by ancient blood and manifest signet." The Latin had been pronounced in the older fashion, with the long vowels held a fraction longer than a modern recorder would have held them, because Ogden had been taught the formula by a recorder who had been taught it by a recorder, and the chain of teaching ran back through the chamber's history to the men who had drafted the formula in a tongue they had themselves learned from the men who had drafted the chamber. He bowed toward the dais. Harry sat. The chair, made for a man not yet born when it was carved, accepted him without complaint. The marble of the seat was cold through the silk of the robes, a cold that did not warm under him as ordinary stone would have done, a cold that had its own opinion of warmth and was indifferent to it. He rested his hands on the worn places of the arms. The signet warmed further on his finger. He registered, while the chamber adjusted itself to what had just been done in its hearing, that he was now, by every law the Wisengamot knew, the senior surviving claimant to one of the 4 founders' houses, and that this was no longer a thing capable of being undone by any motion that any wizard in this chamber could draft. Madame Bones rose at the rail of the middle tier. She had her notes in one hand and her wand in the other. She had been holding the floor under Article 12 since the dark hours, and she now moved under that article to introduce the night's events to the chamber. Her monocle caught the lamp again. Harry rose. He requested the floor. He granted himself the privilege, as the bearer of a newly resurrected senior seat, of giving his own account of the night's events under Veritas Manifesta, the voluntary truth charm older than Veritaserum and impossible to fake. The chamber stirred. Bones inclined her head, a single sharp motion, and yielded. She sat. Ogden stepped to the floor with the silver case and the ashwood wand that were the recorder's instruments for the charm. He spoke the formula. He laid the wand tip first against Harry's brow, and then against Harry's throat, and then against the back of Harry's right hand, where the signet warmed. The chamber's lamps brightened by 1 degree. The brightening was a known sign. The lamps were enchanted to register the settling of Veritas Manifesta on the speaker, and they had brightened in this manner only a handful of times in the chamber's history. The brightening held. Harry spoke. He spoke for 9 minutes and did not embellish and did not soften and did not justify, he reported. He told the chamber of the inheritance test taken in the director's office at Gringotts on the morning of his 16th birthday, of the Peveril line that had been hidden and the Slytherin line that had been buried deeper still, of the filing of the writ under the Lex Antiqua and the formal sealing of it in 3 colors of wax. He told them of the 7-person network he had assembled lever by lever, and he named each of them without flinching, because Veritas Manifesta would not permit elision. He named Madame Bones, who had granted him the legal scaffolding within which he had worked. He named the elder Greengrass, whose subkey had opened the Lestrange vault. He named Tiberius Ogden, who had stamped the writs under his recorder's seal at hours of the night when no recorder was supposed to be at his desk. He named 2 members of the Goblin Court, whom protocol allowed him to identify only by their offices. He named the sponsorship that had placed him within the inner circle of Tom Marvolo Riddle as a sponsorship I am not at liberty to name, and the chamber heard the precision of the construction and noted the protection it conferred. Bones noted it most. Snape, at the back of the upper tier, did not move. He told them of the Lestrange vault operation under the Greengrass subkey and the recovery and destruction of the cup. He told them of the destruction, in earlier weeks, of the locket and the ring and the diadem and the diary, of the boy himself who had carried the 7th fragment, and of how that fragment had been let go without a body's death by a procedure he described in 2 sentences, and would describe more fully in deposition. He told them of the Department of Mysteries strike at 11 minutes past 11, of the dual-channel wand work that had broken Tom Marvolo Riddle's defenses, of the killing at 37 minutes past, of the burning of Nagini in the same hour. He said the word Horcrux aloud. The chamber went very still. The word had not been spoken on this floor since 1612, when a Wisengamot of an older shape had outlawed even its mention. It was a word the chamber had been built to forget, and the chamber heard the word and remembered. He named then, in the cadence of a deposition rather than the cadence of a confession, the further fragments he had not previously catalogued in any official record, the order in which they had been located, the order in which they had been destroyed, the wards that had been laid around each destruction, so that no echo of the broken vessels might recohere in some unobserved corner of the country. The chamber listened. The chamber, which had not been built to receive such an account, and which had been built to receive every account a Wisengamot might be called upon to receive, accommodated itself to the unfamiliar shape of the testimony, the lamps holding their brighter degree without strain, the lectern's lamp steady, the recorder's quill at the lectern moving in the air to transcribe each word in the silver ink reserved for testimony given under veritas manifesta. The quill did not pause. It did not hesitate over the word Horcrux. It set the word down in the silver ink and moved on. He concluded with the 4 sentences he had set down in his head between the holding cells and the recorder's desk, and he spoke them in the cadence in which he had set them. I have presented the signet of the House of Slytherin taken from his hand. I have presented the writ of inheritance sworn before the Goblin Court. I have presented myself under veritas manifesta. I will answer every question this chamber asks. He sat. The lamps held their brighter degree for a moment longer, and then settled, which was the sign that the charm had completed without strain. Madame Bones looked at him for a long beat. She did not lift her notes. She did not call her witnesses. She had nothing to add and nothing to challenge. She had been the architect of the legal scaffolding within which the night had been conducted, and she had heard her own work read back to her under a charm older than her office, and she sat down. There would be no charge. He had confessed to nothing that was not lawful self-defense under the Aurors Compact of 1812, and lawful execution of a known enemy of the realm under the Statute of Unforgivables Attainder Clause. The second of those was a procedure the chamber had not invoked in living memory, but had not repealed, and the conditions for its invocation had been satisfied in the dark hours of the morning by a writ Madame Bones herself had countersigned at 4:15. He sat back into the marble of the chair, and the chair's cold did not warm under him, and as the chamber drew breath to consider what came next, he ran the count. Dark faction in their seats, 47, the Malfoys gone but their proxies present, Knots present, Travers present, Yaxley present, Selwyn present, Parkinson present, Greengrass present. Light faction, 113, the block anchored on Macmillan and Bones and Diggory and Abbott and Longbottom the elder, the lesser houses arrayed behind them in the customary fashion. Neutrals, 140, Ogden chief among them but voting last by convention, Shaffick present, Carruthers present, Vance present, the lesser neutrals filling the middle tier in their accustomed silence. Acclamation by the rare statute required unanimity by silence then voice, no voice to rise against, voices to rise in favor from each recognized faction. The procedural risk lay in who spoke first. The chamber gave the first voice, by tradition, to the dock if the dock held a peer. The dock held Lucius Malfoy, currently being processed for surrender in the antechamber behind the chamber's left-hand wall, and Lucius was reading the room through the spell glass that linked the dock to the floor for procedural purposes. Lucius would speak. Lucius would speak because Lucius, having lost everything else, would not lose the chance to be the first voice on the right side of a coronation. The dark faction would follow Lucius. The light would follow on principle. The neutrals would follow on calculation. He had the math. The signet warmed. Albus Dumbledore rose from the chief warlock's chair. He rose slowly, as he did everything in this chamber with the deliberate economy of a man who had been the chief warlock for 36 years, and who knew the precise weight that each of his movements carried in the room. He stood in his plum robes, with the long beard combed and the half-moon spectacles catching the lamps, and he placed his great long hands on the rail of the dais, and he spoke. His voice was the voice the chamber knew. It was the voice that had ended debates and opened sessions and pronounced sentences on dark wizards and pronounced acquittals on the wrongly accused. It was the voice of a chief warlock at his fullest authority. He attempted the only move he had left. "My friends," he said, "there is, before us this morning, much that is unprecedented. I move, under the chief warlock's residual privilege, to convene a closed session on the matter of young men carrying houses too large for them." The phrase was gentle. The chamber heard the gentleness as authority. A murmur stirred, not in opposition, in recognition. The phrase was old. The phrase had been used to good effect against 3 claimants in the chamber's history. The phrase invoked a tradition of paternal review that had diffused crises of inheritance in 1697 and 1812 and 1903, and the chamber knew the phrase because the chamber's memory had been shaped by the men who had used it. The murmur began to settle into assent. The chief warlock had not in 36 years moved a procedural motion that had failed at the murmur. The chamber's habit was to gather behind the phrase he offered, because the phrase he offered had, by long usage, been the phrase the chamber would have offered to itself if asked. And the chamber had grown accustomed to being asked in this manner and to assenting in this manner, and the gentleness of the phrase was the gentleness of an instrument that had been calibrated to a chamber that no longer existed at this hour. Harry did not rise. Spoke from the chair in the voice he had carried out of the Department of Mysteries 6 hours before, clean, surgical, fact-laden, and the chamber's hush set itself around his words like a frame around a smaller and sharper picture. "Headmaster," he said, "I have this morning killed the Dark Lord." The chamber drew breath as one body. He did not pause. "I have presented his signet, taken from his hand, before this body. I have answered every question put to me under Verita's manifest. The house you wished to take from me was hidden from me for 14 years by a blood ward of your making, which I have already had the Goblin Court annul on the grounds of unauthorized custodianship of a minor's magical inheritance. The annulment is filed under docket Gringotts 1894-6. You may read it. You may sit down, sir. There is no closed session to be had today." He did not raise his voice. He did not punctuate the sentences with flourish. The 4 propositions ran from the chair to the chief warlock's dais in the cadence of an indictment that had been drafted in advance by a hand that had not trembled, and the chamber received them in the order in which they had been spoken: proposition, 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 instruction. The instruction was the last and shortest, and was the one the chamber heard most clearly. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long beat. The chamber held the beat with him. The half-moon spectacles caught the lamplight, and behind the spectacles the eyes were no longer unguarded. They had been composed and recomposed in the span of the 4 propositions, but the silver beard in this moment no longer made him look old. It made him look weary. The weariness was not the weariness of a man defeated by a younger one in argument. It was the weariness of a man who had been holding up a particular conception of the world for a long time, and who had just been informed, with documentation, that the conception had been overruled at a higher court. He sat down. He sat slowly with the same deliberate economy with which he had risen, and his great long hands rested again on the carved arms of the chair, and the chamber breathed. Harry had loved the headmaster once. He felt nothing at all. Tiberius Ogden moved to the floor. The lectern's lamp brightened by 1 degree. The lamps along the gallery rail brightened with it, and the chamber understood that a statute was about to be invoked that the chamber had not heard invoked in its lifetime. "My lords and ladies of the Wisengamot," said Ogden, and his voice carried as it had carried for 51 years. "Under the rare statute of acclamation, set down by this body in the year 1389 and not invoked since the laying down of the title in the same year, when one wizard has, within the compass of a single hour, ended a recognized Dark Lord, taken the senior signet of a founder's house, and presented himself under Verita's manifesta, the Wisengamot may, by acclamation, name him Magus Princeps, Lord Magic, the title last held by Theodoric the Tempered, who laid it down in the same year of this chamber's founding. The motion requires acclamation, not vote. Acclamation requires that no voice rise against, and that voices rise in favor from every recognized faction. I am moved by the recorder's privilege to put the motion to the chamber." He turned to face the tears. He raised one age-spotted, steady hand. "Do you acclaim?" The silence held for a heartbeat that lasted a generation. From the dock behind the chamber's left-hand wall, through the spell glass that linked the dock to the floor, Lucius Malfoy's voice came clearly. He had been processed for surrender 10 minutes before. He had been informed, at the moment of his surrender, of the events of the night, and he had spent the 10 minutes thinking. He had reached the same conclusion Harry had reached for him. "I do," said Lucius Malfoy. The dark faction followed, one voice at a time, the names old and the voices low. Not the elder who had 2 sons in the dock and a third in a holding cell, and who had calculated that a coronation in which he was the second name spoken would purchase his son's processing. Parkinson, who had no sons in the dock and who voted out of the older calculation of where the wind was setting. Travers, whose voice was hoarse. Yaxley, whose voice was clear. Selwyn, who had not been seen to vote with anyone for 19 years, and who voted now. Greengrass, whose voice was steady, who crossed the line and voted with the dark faction not because he was of them, but because his daughter's network had reordered his calculus 6 weeks ago, and the calculus had been waiting for this morning to surface. 6 voices, in a cadence that the chamber recognized as the cadence of a faction closing ranks behind a winner. Bellatrix Lestrange was unconscious in DMLE holding and could not. Then the light. The procession was a procession of fewer voices, but of greater weight, each voice spoken in the deliberate manner of the upper-tier families, who had not raised their voices in haste for 100 years. Macmillan, who had been Bones's right hand in the calling of this session, his voice carrying. Bones herself, who had been waiting for the privilege of saying the words and who said them now. Diggory Amos, whose son had been killed at Little Hangleton 2 years before and who had said nothing in the chamber since, and who said this. Abbott, the elder, whose daughter had been in the upper tier and who spoke for the family. Longbottom, the grandmother, who in the chamber went by the name Augusta and whose voice was the voice of a house that had not bent in any direction in a generation. 5 voices, then the neutral. Ogden himself, who voted last by convention but voted now because no faction had yet supplied a neutral voice and the statute required one. Carruthers, who had been recorder before Ogden and whose voice was thinner. Vance, who had been on the verge of speaking already and who spoke when his eye caught Ogden's. Shaffick, of the old house of Shaffick, whose acclamation had not been heard in this chamber since the elder Shaffick's death in 1971. Dumbledore last, with one hand on the railing of the chief warlock's chair, half rising and not rising. The chamber waited for him. He had sat down once, he could not sit down twice on the same motion without the chamber recording the refusal. He looked across the floor to the Slytherin chair, and to the boy who had been hidden in a cupboard and who now sat in dark green silk on black marble with a signet warming on his finger. "I do," said Albus Dumbledore. The acclamation closed. Ogden lowered his hand. The lamps brightened by one further degree and held. Harry rose. The Slytherin robes fell about him in the silver-stitched cascade that the cloth had been waiting 3 centuries to perform. The silver hem swept the marble of the dais and made the ringing sound that silver makes when it touches stone older than the silver, a sound the chamber had not heard in 300 years, and which the chamber received with the same indifference with which it received the chiming of its hourly clock, because the chamber was old enough not to be surprised by the return of sounds it had been built to hear. Ogden stepped from the lectern to the alcove at the rear of the floor, where a niche set into the marble had been kept locked since the founding, and brought forward in both hands the diadem of magic. The chamber drew breath. The diadem had been kept in the Wisengamot vault for 6 centuries, unworn since 1389. It was a band of plain black iron, no jewels, no engraving on its outer face, and a single line of runes in Proto-Runic Anglo-Saxon worked into the inner band. The runes read signing under sin, king under kindred, and were the only ornament. The iron had not rusted. It had been kept dust-free by a charge older than the house elf charge on the Slytherin robes. It sat in Ogden's age-spotted hands with the unornamented weight of a thing made for one purpose and never converted to any other. Ogden carried it across the floor and held it out to Harry on both palms. He did not lift it toward Harry's brow. The statute was precise. The bearer crowned himself. That was the form set down in 1389, and the form had not been amended because the chamber that had set it down had understood the meaning of the form. Harry took the diadem from Ogden's palms. The iron was cold. It was a colder cold than the iron clasp at his throat, and a colder cold than the marble of the chair, a cold that belonged to a metal that had not been warmed by skin in 617 years. He raised it. He set it on his own brow. It settled there as the robes had settled, which is to say without complaint, and the inner runes lay against the skin above his ears in 2 lines of contact that he could feel but could not see. He sat. The Slytherin chair was now also, by the ancient overlay set down in 1389 and not undone, the seeds magica. The cold of the marble through the silk of the robes met the cold of the iron at his throat, met the cold of the iron at his brow, and the 3 colds composed themselves into a single architecture that was the architecture of the office, and the signet on his right hand, alone of all the metals he wore, was warm. The chamber rose. It rose in a single rolling wave that began at the upper tier among the light families and traveled down through the neutrals and into the lower tier among the dark families, and the wave returned and resolved, and the 300 members of the Wisengamot stood. They bowed. Dark, light, neutral, Bones at the rail of the middle tier with her monocle catching the brighter lamps, Ogden on the floor with his recorder's chain glinting along its links, the Macmillans, the Diggorys, the Abbotts, the elder Longbottom, the Knotts, Parkinson, Travers, Yaxley, Selwyn, Greengrass, Carruthers, Vance, Shaffick, Dumbledore, his beard upon his chest, his great long hands flat upon the rail of the chief warlock's chair. Bowing from the high dais with the precision required of a chief warlock who has just acclaimed his sovereign. The wave of the bow held for the count of 3 full breaths, which was the count the statute required, and the chamber breathed those 3 breaths in unison without having to be told to do so, because the form of the bow had been laid into the chamber's procedural memory at the same time as the statute of acclamation, and the chamber remembered the form the way a body remembers an old discipline that has not been performed in the lifetime of any practitioner present. Snape, in the upper tier, bowed last and lowest. His stillness, which had been the stillness of a man who did not move and did not turn his head when sovereigns passed beneath him, became in the bow a kind of motion. It was the only motion of his that Harry had ever read as deference. He bent from the waist. He held the bow a fraction longer than the rest of the chamber held it, because he had been the sponsorship Harry had not named under Veritas Manifesta, and the held fraction was the answer to the unnamed sponsorship, and the answer was given in the only language Severus Snape was prepared to speak in this chamber on this morning. He straightened, he sat. The chamber rose and the chamber bowed, and at last the boy who had been hidden in a cupboard sat at the center of the world he had made, and called the world by its name. Chapter 7 ends.